Hey everyone, how are you doing? I brought this continuation really quickly for you guys who love the badass summoner. And even though this series is really good, YouTube didn't recommend the previous video very much. So it's really important that you watch this video all the way to the end and leave a like. Seriously, this series is absolutely worth following. I'll leave timestamps in the description for each part, in case you missed any of them. True subscribers, go ahead and leave that like and show some hype at the very beginning of the video. Without further ado, let's get into the story. In this story, our protagonist had acquired a very large debt. Because of that, he worked 3 jobs. And mind you, he wasn't even Chris's dad. In this world, there were dungeons that looked like gigantic towers. Only the awakened ones became players and could enter them to defeat the creatures and earn rewards. When our hero hit rock bottom, he ended up awakening and becoming a player, and the power he acquired was summoning. But it wasn't just any summoning. He summoned beings so powerful that he began to attract the attention of all the guilds. The story begins with people messing with our protagonist. Even after becoming an adult, he kept suffering from bullying. He lived in a house that was basically a single room, and since he had no money, he was going to have instant noodles for dinner for the 5th night in a row. This was Bob, a 25-year-old guy who had 3 part-time jobs. The reason he worked so much was because of a debt. He hadn't been born with special abilities like the awakened ones who explored the towers. And while he was thinking about his pathetic life, a status window appeared. The guy was already shocked, because he knew he had awakened, and the shock was so great that he screamed, "What did I awaken?" At that moment, he was already thinking about the wealth he could gain. But the thing was, entering the towers was very dangerous. You could easily be torn apart by a monster, or maybe frozen, or worse, burned in extreme environments. He could also die poisoned or crushed by a giant trap. Those were many ways to die inside a tower. Even when he saw injustice, he tried to stay far away so as not to get involved. All Bob wanted was to avoid dangerous situations as much as possible. This guy was a real coward, folks. But of course he's going to change, because we don't like protagonists like that. He had lived 25 years as a loser, but now out of nowhere he had awakened. He even wondered if this really wasn't an illusion. So he ordered the status window to appear, and there it was, showing that he could make one summon. And for now it was only one summon at a time. The guy tried to touch that window and realized it was real. Awakened individuals received an ability called characteristics, and the types of characteristics varied widely. Among them was summoning, which was known as a skill used to summon certain types of spirits. Some could summon magical beasts, golems, or even other types of monsters. With a curious face, he wondered, what kind of summoner am I? The guy was already thinking about being able to summon those wonderful waifus, and I'm sure you'd also like to summon one. And look at that shameless face of his. At that moment, he thought it would be really weird to summon a girl in his room. But then he remembered that abilities only worked inside the towers. Outside, all awakened people were just ordinary humans. So it's explained that the awakened ones, also called players, only had powers when they were inside the towers. He even thought about looking something up online since players were really popular lately. But the guy kept thinking that if he had this summoning ability outside the towers, it would be very useful. At that moment, a window appeared saying that the summoning was being activated. Wait a second, my power is working outside the tower? To his surprise, someone began to be summoned, and the shameless guy already thought it could be a waifu, but to his surprise, it was a man. He didn't know whether he was more surprised that his power worked outside the tower, or that it was a man. And the strangest thing of all was that a human being had been summoned. He had never heard of summoners who could summon other humans, which made it very strange. The guy he summoned smelled something nice, and immediately asked if he could try that ramen. The young man said yes, and the guy started eating the noodles, and when he slurped the noodles, he said they were very spicy. Wait, there's no pepper in that instant noodle. But hold on, he had never heard of anyone who could summon outside the tower, let alone summon humans. When he looked at the status window, he saw that he could summon beings of super rare rank, and even legendary special ones. That's the real name, folks, legendary super rare special. It was basically a gacha like in Genshin Impact. If you play gachas, you know exactly what's going on here. At that moment, he read that there were 3 rules for the summoned ones. Rule 1, the summon must protect the summoner's life. Rule 2, the summon must obey absolutely all orders from the summoner. And Rule 3, if rules 1 and 2 conflict, Rule 1 must take priority. Remember this well because it's going to be very important. Basically, the whole story will revolve around that. The crazy guy was even licking the bowl, and when he checked that guy's info, our hero discovered that he was an assassin named John, and he had very high skill in assassination. Besides that, he completed 99% of the missions, and when he began to read the information about that assassin, he started to feel a very strong headache, and at that moment he began to be teleported to the past. He entered a time loop and saw John from the past. He was seeing the memories of his summoned and realized that this guy was very skilled and was fighting against several opponents, but defeated them all as if it were nothing. And after eliminating his enemies, he would place a red ribbon on their heads. Yeah guys, this maniac here is really tough, you'll see. However, his end came in a tragic way. That's because he ended up falling into a trap, and when he went to finish his mission, he was betrayed. His opponent was the strongest swordmaster in the Empire, and that's why John ended up being cut in half. At that moment, John appeared behind him, asking what Bob was thinking about. The guy got so scared that he started running and even knocked over his computer. Don't be afraid, Bob. He had to do everything you ordered him to do. so he took a deep breath and started asking John to do his household chores. The young man was surprised since that assassin had obeyed everything he said, and so he wanted to test the limits of that assassin. He even asked if John would do everything he ordered, and the summoned man said yes. Sweating cold, he asked the guy to bark for him. At that moment, John made an evil face. Our hero even thought he had gone too far and was already getting ready to apologize, but then John started barking like a puppy. Yes, the guy could really do everything he ordered, and the guy even felt sad because it could have been a waifu. You know very well what our boy wanted to ask for, right? At that moment, someone started knocking on the door, and they even began shouting that our protagonist owed them money. Because of that, the young man asked the assassin to hide. He had borrowed 10 million was. That was because his father had an accident, hurt his back, and he also needed to help his brother with college tuition. But the interest had already risen to more than 5 million, and he wouldn't be able to pay. Hey Sir John, hide quickly, you can't be seen. The warrior asked permission from our protagonist to let him kill that mobster, but Bob kept saying not to do that and told him to hide in the bathroom and not make any noise. After opening the door, the mobster grabbed him by the neck and kept asking why he hadn't paid the interest yet, and even implied that he could sell his pancreas to pay that debt. And he even said that he could sell his brother's pancreas too, since the younger, the better the price. Hearing that made him angry. The mobster asked, "What's with that face? Is that a threat?" But feeling embarrassed, he kept saying no, he would never threaten the mobster. After slamming the door, they said that our hero had one more day to pay, otherwise he would be killed. After the thugs left, the warrior came out of the closet, asking if our hero was okay. He was tired of having 3 jobs just to pay that debt, and if by any chance he climbed the tower, he could make a lot of money. John asked what his master wanted him to do, and he said he could do whatever he wanted. Then the guy asked to watch some television. Ah yes, of course, go ahead. But wait, how does this guy know about ramen and TV? And there was the summoned one, watching dramas. Our hero thought that it wasn't so bad to have company once in a while since he spent the whole day alone. In a way, it was even comforting. He was thinking about whether he could use his new power to climb the tower and earn a lot of money, since this guy seemed very strong and could help him. The next morning, he woke up to the alarm ringing. He tried looking for Mr. John, but the guy had already left and left the TV on. He remembered that the summoning time limit was 6 hours, and since he had woken up a bit late, he needed to hurry so he wouldn't be late for work. While brushing his teeth, he heard the news on television saying that 3 mobsters had been murdered and had red ribbons tied to their heads. When he heard that, he even dropped his toothbrush on the floor. Oh man, you're screwed. You know very well what that means, right? He remembered John from the past, when he eliminated those people and tied ribbons on their heads. The only explanation was that his summoned had really killed those 3 mobsters. Thinking about that, the guy started pulling his own hair, saying that he was doomed. This case ended up becoming very popular, especially because those mobsters were extremely dangerous and wanted in the city, and they really had those red ribbons on their heads. Thinking about the possibility of being arrested, the boy began to panic, and during work he even saw a head with a ribbon, and it was that very mobster asking him to pay back the money he owed. Facing that illusion, he started screaming, but the head was strangely asking if he was okay. The scare was so big that the guy ended up hitting his back on the shelf. The person there was a girl, a customer holding a box of chocolates. He apologized for what happened, saying that he got confused, and right after that embarrassing moment, he called his boss and asked for a day off since he wouldn't be able to work like that. All worried, he kept saying that the death of those 3 guys was his fault and that it was something he couldn't avoid. Then he arrived home, and after looking at the status window, he saw that the warrior really had the assassination skill, though it could have been a waifu and not a man being summoned. Extending his hand, he summoned John again to talk to him, but before the summoning, a window appeared. It was asking him to rate John's performance with up to 5 stars. Showing the middle finger, he kept saying that he felt like giving only 1 star. But he said he wouldn't do that because giving 1 star would be too cruel. His mother had worked in customer service and had been mistreated by clients before, so he knew very well that giving 1 star wasn't nice at all. That's why he ended up giving 3 stars. And then John appeared, giving a salute. The guy thanked him for the 3 stars and said he would work hard to earn 5 next time. Without wasting time, Bob asked if he was the one who had killed those 3 men. And all cheerful, John said yes, that he had taken care of them last night. Realizing he was face to face with a dangerous man, the boy started trembling all over, but our protagonist didn't need to worry, because that guy wasn't going to hurt him. John revealed that when that criminal had shown up, he had placed a tracking spell and ended up following them to their home. Seriously, you did that? But why did you go that far? That was because the criminals had threatened our protagonist. So he had followed the first rule, which was to protect his master at any cost. Even though our protagonist had told him not to do anything, the third rule said that the summoned could disobey the master only to protect him, and those were exactly the rules from the beginning that I said would be very important. Bob asked if he ordered John to kill him. Would John do it? And the summoned said no, he would never harm his master. Our protagonist kept saying that it wasn't fair because he was being disobedient, but John explained that the third rule was the most important one. He also explained to our hero that those men posed a very great threat, but our hero started yelling, saying that he couldn't solve things that way. After shouting at the summon several times, Bob ended up apologizing, knowing that the guy had done it only to protect him. It would be very dangerous. He kept walking around with John. He even thought about a situation where he might accidentally bump into someone. If that person had a bad temper, they might threaten our protagonist to scare him. but John wouldn't know that and would probably end up eliminating that person. Thinking about that made our hero tense, realizing that his power wasn't very good. And when John saw that our hero was worried about it, he knelt down and apologized, saying that he had gone too far. And with that, our hero made him promise not to eliminate other people anymore. Saluting, John said he would evaluate situations better. Finally, it looks like you understand. But there was something John wanted to say. He asked if Bob wasn't going to climb the tower. With a clenched fist, he knew that if he climbed the tower, he could make a lot of money. But of course he was scared, since Bob was a complete coward. Our protagonist asked if there had been another summoner before him who had summoned John and climbed the tower. And the man said yes. He said that there had been many other summoner masters before Bob, and all of them were strong and brave. The young man felt guilty, thinking he wasn't good enough to be John's master. He was even about to say that he was truly pathetic, but at that moment John interrupted him, saying that our protagonist was the best summoner of all, the best he had ever had. He even said that safety was the first virtue a summoner should value. And all excited, he said that being too brave was dangerous. That's why he liked Bob. Besides, our protagonist shouldn't worry about anything. He should keep protecting his life without taking risks. The next morning, he woke up saying he had barely slept, worried about whether he should climb the tower or not. He was facing a lot of financial difficulty, and entering the tower would be a great way to earn a lot of money, but continuing his safe job would be a great way to live a long life. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his father, telling him that he was still doing rehabilitation because his back hadn't improved yet. And to Bob's surprise, his father told him that his mother had been fired from her job. He also invited the boy to spend some time with them to explain everything. After hanging up the phone, he felt even more pressured to enter the tower to get money. So he quickly grabbed some safety equipment, fully motivated to enter the tower. He knew that the first floor was a little easier, so he kept saying he'd just take a quick look. It would even be good to summon John to help him, but he was afraid, saying that guy was a bit unbalanced. But wait, if I run into a super powerful boss, it'll be good to have John with me, right? So he ended up summoning John, and a message appeared saying that those summons had a cooldown time. The warrior appeared and thanked him for the 5 stars. A bit embarrassed, he ended up telling John that he had decided to enter the tower. And the warrior started teasing him, saying that our hero might seem brave, but in the end he was a coward. He told Bob to throw those things away because he wouldn't even need to fight. He would keep our protagonist safe so he wouldn't get hurt. At that moment, he summoned a system window so they could enter the tower. The guy was afraid of falling through the portal, and John ended up holding him. They passed through several data streams very similar to Digimon, and after a few seconds they finally entered the Black Tower. This was the first floor, and the boy found it strange because it looked like a desert, and the fear was so great that his stomach started to churn. Then he threw up like a kid. John explained that he shouldn't move outside the safe zone, and that he should stay close to him. As soon as he entered the tower, he began to feel mana flowing through his body. So this is what it feels like to be a player, huh? At that moment, a mission appeared. To defeat 5 fat worms with tough skin. Those worms moved at a very slow speed, and our protagonist had already researched those worms on the internet and knew that they were almost harmless, serving only for training. Ordinary players would take around 30 minutes to defeat 5 of them, and since he was also a player, he imagined he could defeat them too. All motivated, he headed toward the worm. Meanwhile, John stayed behind, telling him not to do it. Facing the creature, Bob said he was going to eliminate it, but he hadn't brought any weapon, and even asked John to lend him one. At that moment, the worm rose. The creature was quite large. He even felt the creature's breath, and when he looked up, he was terrified. He called for help from John, and the guy gave a thumbs up, saying that was a great request. Because of that, he moved at the speed of light and defeated that worm with a single punch. You can already tell this guy is insane, right? In 2.5 seconds, he defeated all 5 worms, and the guy was so tough that he didn't even stop there. The mission was already complete, but he kept defeating more worms, and within 5 seconds, he had defeated 10 monsters. The creatures exploded in a Power Ranger-style blast, and Bob was amazed because he never imagined that warrior was so powerful. He had truly defeated the monsters effortlessly. Thus, he completed the mission of the first floor successfully, and because of that, he received magical crystal rewards. And for having completed the mission so easily, he earned an S++ score, and also a platinum badge. Because it was so easy, he felt on top of the world, thinking he'd get rich quickly. But what the loser Bob didn't know was that the notification of his mission had appeared to several other players. Players all over the world found out that someone had completed a mission with an S+ score, since that was something extremely rare. And when I say people around the world saw that notification, I'm not exaggerating, guys. After finishing the first floor, they returned to the apartment. A little worried, Bob said that it hadn't even taken 5 minutes. And John thanked our hero for his hard work. But the boy said he hadn't done anything. He had just stood there. But the warrior said that was exactly what he needed to do, not do anything. He placed the crystal and the platinum emblem he had earned on the table. Looking at the magic crystal, he asked if that was worth anything. And after doing some research, he concluded that those crystals were essential to the current industry. He also watched several videos about the Black Towers, where people obtained those crystals and sold them for high prices at the Adventurers Guild. But the most interesting thing was that platinum emblem, which he had never even heard of before. Anyway, the crystal he got was worth 50,000 in WSA. After that, he ordered some food, and John smelled that delicious aroma. But even though he ordered it without pepper, John said it was very spicy, and we can see that the guy was really weak with spicy food, right? But even so, he thanked his master for the kindness and started eating. Our hero noticed that he had a slightly funny accent and asked why he spoke that way. He even thought that maybe it was the influence of an ex-girlfriend, but John explained that it was because of his former summoner, and that guy used to talk like that. When he tasted that food, he said that it was actually delicious. Our hero was already getting used to the idea that his summon was a man and not a woman, and even said that he could make a lot of money. The scene shifted to the next morning. He had made a schedule of how he would spend his time. He would sleep from midnight to 8, then he would do all his part-time jobs, and at night when he got home he would explore the tower. At night he ended up summoning John again, and the guy thanked him for the 5 stars. Bob found that curious and asked if the satisfaction rating was really that important, since he always thanked him. The guy explained that actually the ratings gave him benefits, and afterward they went to the 2nd floor of the tower. The mission was to defeat 10 fat larvae. They were cunning, and they had a time limit of 2 hours. The boy stood there with his mouth open since those larvae on the 2nd floor seemed much faster. Worried, he asked John what he should do, but the warrior said he shouldn't do anything, just stand still. And showing 3 fingers on his hand, he said that was the time he needed to complete the mission, only 3 minutes, and then he charged at the giant worms. Shouting from afar, our hero asked if he wanted to eat chicken today, and the man said yes while throwing his blades at the monsters, and within moments he ended up defeating all the larvae. Our hero gave an awkward little laugh, saying that it didn't even take 3 minutes, and because of the speed, they completed the mission with an S+ rank. Since that was the highest score, they earned those emblems. Then they went to the 3rd floor and had to defeat 10 cold fat larvae. And once again they achieved the highest S+ score. John was all happy and proud since they were completing the missions with top grades, and our hero even celebrated by giving him a high five. That way he had collected 5 platinum S+ grade badges. And just so you know guys, almost no one in the whole world could complete missions that fast and get such high scores. Because of that he had already leveled up, and now he could summon 2 summons simultaneously. All that thanks to the platinum emblems he had earned. That's why he leveled up so quickly. The guy was already imagining himself as a winner who had it all. For now he didn't need to summon anyone else to help with the missions since John did everything alone. What he really wanted was to summon a girl, but he already knew it would probably be another strong man. The scene moved to the South Korea Awakened Management Agency. They were having a meeting about this new awakened one who was managing to complete missions with perfect scores. Since our hero was completing 1 mission per day, everyone there was anxious to know when the next notification would pop up. A girl came up to her partner and asked if he was thinking about this new S+ agent, and the guy was startled, saying she shouldn't sneak up and whisper in people's ears because it was too weird. The girl mentioned that this new awakened one would probably finish floor 6 tonight. They commented that these Black Tower notifications, when completed with top rank, were announced worldwide. They imagined that this new player must be someone with unprecedented talent. Little did they know that our protagonist was the biggest coward. The boss slammed his hand on the table and told his 2 best agents to find out who this new player was because they needed to recruit him for the agency. That was because many South Korean agents ended up going to other countries since those governments offered much higher salaries, so they couldn't let another country recruit that S+ player, and so began the hunt to recruit our protagonist. Little did they know the boy was a coward. 2 days had already passed. He asked John if they were going to the 8th floor tonight, and the guy said yes. Our protagonist was so shameless that he even made the guy wash the dishes, guys. All excited, he said he'd soon reach floor 10, and he knew that from there the missions would get harder. Then they went to the next floor, which looked more like a swamp. They had to defeat 10 red-spiked frog warriors. The frog attacked both of them, and as expected, John defeated them with extreme ease. After returning to the apartment, John congratulated our hero, saying that the boy had done very well. And awkwardly, he thanked John, saying that actually John was the one who did everything. Pulling a bill from his pocket, he told the warrior that he could go into town and buy whatever he wanted. But John said he couldn't do that, and that he much preferred staying in the apartment watching television. And if his master allowed, he said he'd like to order fried chicken. Watching from afar, our hero noticed that the guy had become addicted to dramas and eating fried chicken. After completing some tower missions, he ended up earning an exclusive healing potion. Besides that, he had already collected more than 3.6 kilage of magical crystals, and now it was the 10th day and he wanted to finish this tower as soon as possible. Yesterday on floor 9, they had defeated the corpse flowers, and thinking he was the greatest hero of all, he kept bragging since he always completed the missions with perfect scores. Since he was always giving John 5 stars, he ended up receiving a cooldown bonus. John explained to our hero that now he could spend more time with him, since his rating was very high. That way they went to the 10th floor. Upon reaching that 2-digit floor, Bob kept saying that he could feel a power flowing through his body. It was as if he were a super powerful stallion. He even patted his companion's shoulder, saying that he could leave it to him, that he would handle the problem himself. But the summoned one kept telling his master that he couldn't get involved in battles, since it would be too dangerous. But it was no use, guys. Our protagonist was feeling like a super powerful man, until he saw the eye of a giant creature. It was a gigantic insect over 15 meters tall, and at that moment he stopped being a stallion and turned into a scared kitten. Backing away, he asked John to defeat the giant insects without him. The monster charged toward them, and just to build aura, John waited until the very last moment to react. The insect's claws hit the ground and John climbed up them. With a serious look, he focused on the creature's arms, and thus they completed the mission once again with an S+ score. The guy was so strong that he had already defeated several monsters without even getting a scratch. After completing the 10th floor, Bob earned another kilogram of magic stones and also that platinum emblem. With that, he had accumulated 10 platinum badges, all finishing in first place and breaking the time record. Looking at the system window, he said that he'd probably finish the tower soon. This boy was very naive. Little did he know that the upper floors were extremely difficult. At that moment, he saw in the window that he had gained an extra skill. John asked if among those extra skills there was one called Shadow Steps, and he also explained that our hero should choose that skill because he could use it to escape from the tower without taking damage, but our hero thought John was treating him like a coward and a weakling, as if that weren't true, right? And even though it was humiliating, it was exactly that skill he chose to buy. However, he looked quite serious, as if John were treating him like a child. Outside, he decided to test his skill and saw that it was really good, as it made him move in a surprising way. However, when a person was outside the tower, they had no magic powers, so he ended up becoming extremely tired. On day 11, he decided to call the Awakened Department Service Center. When the person answered, he started stuttering because he was very shy and didn't know how to talk to others. After revealing that he had awakened and become a player, the person on the other end started celebrating. They even asked if they could go to his house to ask a few questions, but the only thing the young man wanted was to sell his crystals. Those two agents were getting ready to visit a new player. The guy even wondered if maybe this new player was the one completing missions with an S++ rank, but the girl said it was unlikely, as it would be too much luck to find him so quickly. Still, the agent said that if this really was the S+ rank player, they needed to recruit him immediately for the elite group. Since he was going to receive visitors, our dear Bob was tidying up the whole apartment. At that moment, they knocked on the door, saying they were agents from the Awakened Management Department. After opening the door, he invited them in, and even apologized for the mess. It's always like that, right? You clean the whole place and still apologize, telling people not to mind the mess. The two agents introduced themselves, and the boy became extremely embarrassed since there was a girl. At that instant, the girl simply stepped closer, leaving the young man completely flustered. Then she asked if by any chance he was the S+ rank player. He froze, not knowing how to act around girls. And don't bother teasing him, because I know you know someone who's like that too. Since he was a total coward, he backed away from the woman. In those moments, he wondered how she had found out so quickly. For now, he decided to deny it since he didn't want to become famous. He was too shy for that. So he started lying, giving excuses, saying that he wasn't that high rank. But he lied so poorly that the girl said he sounded like a robot from how badly he lied. The girl's partner said she shouldn't do that to others because she was intimidating them. After apologizing, our young man said it was no problem at all. After all, he was standing close to a girl. That one's shameless. They ended up showing a video with the mascot Tabby, who was basically the mascot of the Black Tower of South Korea. He was explaining that those extremely tall buildings had appeared about 20 years ago. The Korean government sent several helicopters and scientists, but it was impossible to access that tower from the outside. That's because the tower had a kind of protective barrier, and was basically a magical structure. The only people who could enter the tower were the so-called awakened, or players, who possessed abilities within it. However, they were forced to keep climbing and completing the tower's missions, because if they went more than 6 months without clearing a floor, a countdown would begin. In the end, if the countdown reached 0, that tower would collapse, destroying the city around it. And that was exactly what happened 3 years ago in Mumbai, India. Each nation had between 1 and 3 black towers, and luckily, South Korea had only 1 tower. The number of players was quite low, and in South Korea, since there were few players, they felt proud because they were in second place in the rankings, right behind the United States. Because players were extremely rare, they were highly valued in Korean culture. That's why players were supposed to see themselves as the last hope of this era, since many lives depended on them. As soon as the video ended, the agent closed the laptop, and the boy wondered if such a lame little video was really necessary. Then, they asked if our hero would like to register with the Awakened Guild, but he ended up throwing the crystals on the table. The boy said that he had cleared up to the 10th floor and showed the crystals, and the two of them immediately realized that he might be the S+ rank player. The girl looked serious because the S+ Awakened had indeed stopped at the 10th floor. At that moment, the girl asked if he knew about the global announcements that appeared when someone completed a mission with the highest score. Once again, he returned to that mediocre acting, saying that he knew very well about those announcements. He was nervous because he didn't want the two of them to find out that he was the new player completing missions with top scores. Then the agent explained that the Korean division separated players into 2 categories, elite and general. General players were usually weaker and had to complete missions in groups since they couldn't handle them alone. Meanwhile, elite players were so strong that they could complete missions on their own, and that's why they received many benefits from the government. While the guy was giving those explanations, our protagonist was only thinking that he couldn't be discovered. Otherwise, he'd become a celebrity. And just thinking about that already made him desperate, since he was so shy that he couldn't stand the idea of everyone looking at him. Just imagining himself in the spotlight made him want to give up climbing the tower altogether. The agent said that if he agreed to join the elite, he would get a contract that even provided private security outside the tower. But the boy said that he wasn't going to apply for the elite team. He was satisfied with the general team, but the man found that very strange, since everyone wanted to be an elite member. All embarrassed, he said that he only wanted to enter the tower, make some money, and get out of there as quickly as possible to live a comfortable life. The agent told him to think carefully, but our hero said that he already had. The woman sighed, imagining that he was just another one of those cowards. She knew that many people only wanted to farm some money and stop growing in life, since living that way was much more comfortable and carried no risks. The agent said that Bob's decision would be respected, but to confirm that he had really awakened, the man asked him to enter the tower just to prove it. He said yes, that he could enter. And the man said that since he would be using up an entry, he could complete a mission to validate his strength level. Of course he could refuse, but he ended up agreeing, saying that he would enter and complete the mission. He even said that he took a long time to finish missions because he was weak, but the girl said it was fine since they would wait. So he stood up and said they could make themselves at home, help themselves to drinks, and that there was food in the fridge. Thus the boy simply disappeared, heading to the Black Tower. Because of that, they confirmed that he had really awakened, since only players could do that. In terms of talent, he seemed very shy and didn't look strong at all, said the girl. She even said that he would probably give up on the 11th floor since it was a very difficult one. That was because it had the giant centipede. It wasn't necessarily strong, but there were 100 of them, and the creature was so grotesque that it would scare anyone. That's why the girl said to her partner that she thought Bob would give up right away, since he didn't seem very powerful. They said they would call the director and explain that this guy was a coward and probably not the S++ rank player. After reaching the 11th floor, he summoned John, who greeted him and thanked him for the 5 stars as always, right? He always did that. The mission this time was to defeat 100 centipedes within a short period of 3 hours. When the boy realized they were giant centipedes and that he had to defeat 100, he was completely shocked. However, he had to pretend he was weak, so he told John to take as much time as possible since he didn't want that S+ rank notification to appear for everyone. And he also told John that it was very important. He couldn't kill those creatures too quickly, and the guy gave a thumbs up, saying that he understood. I don't know, but I don't really trust this guy. I think he's going to end up screwing me over. He started defeating the monsters very quickly, and Bob shouted from afar, telling him to defeat them more slowly. But it was no use, guys. He kept defeating the creatures really fast. At that moment, Bob thought that if it continued at that pace, he'd be doomed. But then a monster appeared beneath him, making the boy scream. Those giant centipedes were extremely fast. John realized that if he didn't act immediately, his master would be devoured. And remember, if they die inside the tower, they die in the real world, guys. There's no coming back from that. If you die, that's it. Because of that, John started running to try to save his master, and in an impressive way, he defeated all the monsters surrounding him. Since his master's life was in danger, he ended up executing rule number 3, which was to ignore all of his master's orders. Because of that, he eliminated all the centipedes and did it so fast that Bob couldn't even believe it. He needed to exterminate all the monsters as quickly as possible, or Bob would die. Calm down, man. You're going to get an S+ rank, and they'll find out. And that's exactly what happened. He completed the mission and earned an S+ score. With a bored expression, he told John that he could leave. Back at his apartment, the girl said that 5 minutes had already passed, and she thought he would return immediately after giving up. But at that moment, a notification appeared, saying that someone had completed the 11th floor with an S+ score, coinciding exactly with the moment he returned to the apartment. It was obvious that he was the new player completing everything with top scores. He appeared with a gloomy look, and with a sigh, he said that he really didn't want to do this. Extending his hand, he ordered John to eliminate the 2 agents, since they had to be silenced. The 2 government agents didn't understand anything. And immediately John charged at them and eliminated both agents on the spot, guys. But the boy was completely shocked because John ended up placing that red ribbon on their heads. At that moment, he realized he had messed up badly since he had just eliminated 2 agents who worked for the Korean government. But that was nothing more than an illusion, guys. It wasn't real. He had only imagined it, thinking about doing that to prevent the 2 from telling everyone that he was that powerful player. Trying to play it off, he said that he was just joking, and that's why he shouted like that. Then the 2 agents said that he was the S+ rank and that he should sign an elite contract. But once again, he gave that mediocre performance, and trying to send the agents away, he said that he was very tired from completing the mission in the tower. Before leaving, they ended up leaving an envelope, confirming that he really was awakened, and presented him with an elite contract with several benefits. They even told him to think carefully because in his case, he could get benefits that no other agent had received. This wasn't a normal elite player contract, it was a special management one. He would have an annual salary of 12 billion WS with a provided house included. Along with special VIP treatment, he would also have the privilege of immunity. In other words, he could do things that other citizens couldn't. It was as if he were a noble, and when he heard those words, he felt a bit tempted. But even so, he ended up refusing because just the idea of becoming famous gave him chills. And shouting loudly, he said that he would only sign the general player contract. The The man asked why he was so determined to keep refusing, and he explained that it was because he hated being the center of attention, and even when he went to a store, he felt pressured by the clerks, or when he was well received by a waiter at a restaurant. In other words, he was extremely introverted. The man said that was fine, so he would give him a general contract. After signing it, he became an agent of the South Korean Awakened Department. Even if he wanted to climb to the upper floors, since they hadn't been cleared yet, he couldn't, as he was only a general player. After the agents left, he thought that living a comfortable life was much better than being that extremely famous guy. The scene shifted to the next day at the Awakened Management Agency. The director wanted to know why the two hadn't managed to make that boy sign an elite contract. They had told the director that the boy really was the S+ player, but he seemed to have a particularly unusual temperament. He was the kind of citizen that was very rare to appear. He had an extraordinary level of shyness. The bald old man asked if there was any chance he'd want to become an elite member, but the girl, very serious, said that was practically impossible. But impossible was a word that the Korean department didn't know, and they said they needed to force him to sign that contract soon. The agent said that they could leave this mission to him since he would do his best to convince the boy. For those who didn't understand, it was because the South Korean government was afraid that our hero would go to another country and become a player there, since these players were extremely sought after. Back at our hero's apartment, he was angry with John. That was because he had been exposed thanks to the guy who defeated those centipedes so quickly the other day. Then he went to the 12th floor. He summoned John and kept saying that he should defeat the creatures much more slowly than usual. He imagined that if he stopped getting plus scores, the Korean agency department would stop being interested in him. But the place was so cold that he started to feel sick. Noticing that his master had a high chance of catching a cold, John felt he needed to hurry and even shouted to his young master that he would defeat the monsters quickly, and he ran off while our hero kept yelling for him not to do that. But it was no use, guys. John ended up defeating the giant badgers extremely fast, and our hero's plan to throw off the Korean agency went down the drain. A notification appeared for all awakened players, saying that someone had completed the 12th floor with an S+ score. Back home he felt sad, saying that now suspicions about him had grown even more. Meanwhile, John kept apologizing. He even asked if he could watch television, but our hero dismissed the summon, making the guy disappear. He even thought that this rule of protecting him at all costs wasn't that great, since it ended up limiting his commands. The next day he went to the 13th floor of the tower, and it was a place full of traps. Because of that, John needed to get the young master out of there as fast as possible so he wouldn't get hurt. And so he ran as fast as he could, carrying the young master in his arms. After completing the 13th floor with an S+ score, they went to the next floor. Back home, the boy looked at his phone and saw that he had earned over 2 million points. Those points were converted into money, and he was surprised. Counting the 15 days he had spent with John doing missions, he had already earned over 7 million W. That was money he had never seen before, and he'd need to work more than 6 months to earn that much. The next day, he summoned John again, and the man immediately knelt and apologized. He told his subordinate that from now on he no longer wanted to keep pretending or clearing the floors slowly. Holding his head, he said that either way the agency had already found out that he was the S+ rank, and all greedy, he said there was a chance he could get extra privileges for being so strong. Motivated, he opened the portal to go to the next part of the tower. On the 15th floor, he had to defeat 10 goblin workers. Unlike the other creatures, these seemed to possess some kind of intellect. Humbly, John said they needed a strategy, but we know that he could defeat everything very quickly. So our hero told him to stop joking around and defeat the monsters once and for all. John decided to use the stealth ability, which was a new skill he had obtained thanks to Bob's 5-star ratings. And because of that, he defeated several goblins without the monsters even realizing where the blade came from. Thus, he completed the mission very quickly, earning even a special reward, an exclusive tower potion. Besides that, there were the crystals and the insignia he had received every time. As they returned to the apartment, he was very happy, and when they arrived, he told John that the mission had been successfully completed. Extending his hand, he opened the inventory. He already had a total of 15 platinum insignias. When he had completed 5 insignias, he gained a characteristic enhancement, and now with 10, he gained a new skill called Skill Copy. Besides that, he received a special privilege, a shield kit, which was basically a bracelet that protected his entire body. He put on the bracelet and asked to activate the protective barrier, and an invisible shield covered his whole body. He found it very interesting since it was a kind of shield that could be easily carried. And the best part, guys, was that all his items also worked outside the tower. And that was something unique to him. If he sold that item in the Agents Guild market, he could get around 3 billion WS, which would be roughly $2 million. All excited, he said that they needed to go to the 16th floor soon because he wanted to know the rewards. While John told the boy to calm down a bit, he couldn't guarantee that from now on they would get S+ ranks in every mission, and our hero was surprised. He even asked if he should sell the bracelet to buy items to make John stronger. Meanwhile, the agency director was asking if the notifications had stopped. It had already been 2 weeks since that boy had last cleared a floor. The director got angry, imagining that the boy had given up on completing the missions because they kept bothering him. But the agent said that maybe he had stopped on the 15th floor to train. At that moment, he received a message on his phone from a staff member saying that the boy, Bob, was coming to the agency to buy things at the store, and the bald man wondered if maybe he really was the S rank and had been saving money to buy items to get stronger. If that was true, his suspicions were correct. He had stopped on the 15th floor for 2 weeks just to farm money. Then the old man said that he had been stupid for judging Bob wrongly without realizing that he had a plan. He also said that when that player arrived, they should sell him items almost for free with extremely low prices. 15 days had passed, and our protagonist had asked John to try to strike him. That's right, he wanted him to take the blade and try to stab his stomach. John said that he would never do that, but in truth, our hero just wanted to test that protective barrier. Even so, even with a weak attack, John refused. So he simply pulled John's hand toward his stomach and ended up getting hit. But our hero had forgotten to turn on the bracelet, guys. He quickly grabbed a healing potion to recover from the wound, and deep down, John said that he was going to tear off his own arm because he had hurt his master. After he was healed, John shook the boy, saying that he must never do that again. Then he told John to finish the hunt, and the guy went off to defeat the enemies. John's hunts always ended in less than 10 minutes. Our hero kept telling himself that he should practice his own skills in the meantime. So he used the shadow step technique and noticed that inside the tower, his abilities were much stronger. Outside the tower, he couldn't use his powers properly, but there he moved as if he were hyperspeed. He laughed awkwardly, saying that this power was much better than he had imagined. He even understood why John told him to get that power first. While moving, he suddenly came face to face with a goblin. The monster turned with that evil grin, and Bob realized that the goblin seemed to be hiding. Damn, how am I going to avoid an attack from this monster? And John is far away. With its mouth open, the goblin lunged, trying to bite him. Luckily, the bracelet's shield protected him, and in panic, he kicked the creature away. At that moment, John noticed that his young master was being attacked, and took advantage of the goblin flying through the air to slice it in half, thanking Bob for the good pass. But then he realized that his master was in danger, and used a tree to propel himself toward him to protect him. The guy was overly protective, and became very worried about Bob, asking if he was okay, and even checking his body to make sure he hadn't been hurt. After seeing that his master was fine, he scolded the boy, saying that he should never get involved in fights. After staying on the 15th floor for more than 2 weeks, he gained many abilities and trained a lot, not to mention the crystals he had accumulated. Now that he had plenty of money, he called the awakened agency department to exchange those crystals for items. He was being treated like a VIP client, and even a limousine came to pick him up. The boy arrived at the department all embarrassed, and the agent welcomed him. Then he asked the boy to enter the building and make himself comfortable. He placed his hand for fingerprint scanning to register so that he could return to the store anytime. All awkward, the boy continued walking down the hallway while the agent told him that he could freely buy any item he wanted. The door opened and he found it strange since the store was empty. He had always heard that those shops were full of players coming in to trade their items. And when he looked at those luxurious and extremely rare items, he thought he wouldn't have enough money to buy them because they were too expensive. But first he would sell his magic crystals, which would give him a total of 11 million WS, to be deposited into his account after 3 days, said the employee. After interacting with the guy, he said that he needed to leave because he was already very tired. Upstairs in the building, the director asked if Bob had already bought strong items. The agent said he didn't know, but he had instructed the sellers to sell everything with a 90% discount. That was because they knew Bob was very shy and would refuse to accept free items. Later he returned home. He had bought a club for 2 million WS and a pair of basilisk leather boots for 3 million. He even found it strange, because he had always heard that items started at a minimum price of 20 million. At that moment he realized he was receiving special treatment, and that they had probably given him a big discount. But it didn't matter. He would make good use of those privileges and climb much higher in the tower. When he started entering the tower, he had decided not to be so greedy, but he had to admit that the privileges were very good. The next day he decided to summon John, and the guy immediately appeared, thanking him for the 5 stars. The man asked if they were going to the 5th floor again, but our hero said no, now they were going to the 16th. And of course John was thrilled since there would be a new challenge. And because the challenge would be greater, he decided to summon his second summon. A body began to appear, and he was hoping it would be a girl, but instead, an extremely tall and strong man started to materialize. And the guy was so tall that he ended up breaking the roof of his house. Desperate, he thought he was screwed because he didn't have the money to fix it. What was emerging there was an extremely tall and strong barbarian, and the guy really was tall. His head stuck out through the roof of the house. After pulling his head out of the hole, our hero wondered if that was a human or a monster, and John, already angry, came running to kick him, calling the giant an idiot, and the kick hit the man right in the face. Our hero realized that the two already knew each other. Our hero got worried and asked if the man was hurt, and he said no, that it didn't even tickle. Oh really? Then if you think my attacks tickle, try my blade. But Bob stepped in to stop the fight and told John not to worry, since he could fix the roof with money, though he was crying. John already knew this giant and said they didn't need him since he was an idiot who didn't even know his own name, much less the rules. The guy said he knew the rules and tried to say the 3 rules but completely messed them up. He tried so hard to remember that his brain short-circuited, and John mocked him, saying that this guy was a real idiot. After reading the profile of this new summon, our hero realized he was a rank R barbarian and didn't even have a name. The R classification stood for rare, and he felt a little disappointed since John was super rare, much stronger. Then our protagonist asked if the barbarian really didn't have a name, and the big guy said he didn't know. He decided to ask about the tower, but the giant didn't know that either, which made our hero even more discouraged. At that moment, he was teleported into the past to see this man's story. He went to a distant place where he saw the giant running through a field. That barbarian warrior belonged to the Great Plains tribe, and he was a pure and innocent man. In the memory, he saw that the giant plains wolves tried to attack him, and because the giant saw no malice in things, he treated those wolves as if they were little puppies there to play. A man said that the giant was as tall as everyone claimed. He introduced himself as Arios and asked the giant for his name, and the man said he didn't know. They used the giant as bait, making him face extremely powerful monsters, and in a battle against a venomous hydra, he ended up being defeated. Those men did it on purpose just to laugh at him, and the venom was so corrosive that his entire body melted away. Back in the present, our hero saw that the man's past was really sad. Extending his hand, he welcomed the giant and told him that he should choose his own name, and even gave some options. The giant chose the name Go Bang, saying that the name suited him better. Pointing to himself, Bob asked Go Bang if he trusted him, and Go Bang said yes, that he trusted his summoner. Looking at John, he told Go Bang that now they were part of a trio and would defeat monsters inside the tower. But John wasn't excited about that at all, guys. He didn't like the giant, but the hero ordered John to treat him well, so he pretended to welcome him, being completely fake about it. But right after that, he started arguing with Go Bang, calling him an idiot and saying he was useless. Then they all entered the 16th floor of the Black Tower in Korea. Upon arriving there, their mission was to defeat 30 goblin scouts. As they walked through the forest, they saw goblins hiding behind the trees, and at that moment, one of them aimed a poisoned dart at our hero. He fired it with full force, but John caught the poisoned arrow at the last second. They realized it was a goblin ambush. Our hero used his shadow step technique to hide while John and Go Bang fought. All those poisoned darts hit the rock he was hiding behind. He realized that this floor was much harder, so he turned to Go Bang for help. And the giant barbarian's eyes filled with fury as he charged at the goblins to protect his master. After jumping, he prepared to slam into the ground with full force, and seeing that giant, the goblins began fleeing in desperation. Even John got scared by the impact, and after the giant hit the ground, the goblins went flying in every direction. Even the poor warrior was thrown far away. That was when he realized that Go Bang wasn't just an R-rank summon, he was probably much stronger. He stayed hidden, and meanwhile the goblins prepared another volley of darts. Those darts looked more like toothpicks hitting the giant. And so he charged straight ahead, defeating all the creatures. The boy stood there with his mouth open, admiring the strength of that man, and later when they returned to the apartment, he took the chance to serve fried chicken snacks. The giant loved those fried chicken snacks, and John got angry, saying that once again our hero had bought spicy food, even though there wasn't any spice at all. He realized that this giant was actually a good person. Go Bang thanked Bob for buying fried chicken, but our hero got all embarrassed, saying that he was the one who should be thankful. John seemed a little jealous and ended up punching the giant in the face. All angry, Bob told him not to bully that guy, and John ended up apologizing. The guy was sulking, guys. The next day, they went to the 17th floor, where he wanted to test his skills. The boy was feeling super powerful with those new items, and once again was acting like a stud, as if he could defeat every monster that crossed his path. But the two told their young master not to worry about fighting because they would defeat the monsters themselves. The mission was to defeat 30 goblin warriors. He knew that these goblin warriors had a strength level of 90 points. That meant they were pretty strong. He had already read online that this floor required a specific strategy, to run into the forest to funnel the army and defeat them little by little. In other words, the idea was to defeat the goblins 3 at a time because if the entire army came at once, the player would surely lose. But Bob knew that his summons were extremely powerful and ended up calling for the giant. Pointing his finger, he told the big guy that he could charge ahead with full power, and since the master had ordered it, he started shouting and unleashing his strength. He knew that with the strength of both of them, he could easily reach the 30th floor, and the big guy started running straight at the goblins, and those poor little monsters were trembling in fear. They even shouted to motivate themselves. And after pointing their spears and raising their shields, they prepared for battle. But that didn't even tickle Go Bang. Without any effort, he defeated all the goblins standing in front of him. They fell to the ground defeated. Smiling, Bob said that the giant's performance was truly insane. They didn't even need a military strategy since he was basically a tank rolling over bicycles. With record time, they completed the 17th floor with an S+ score. Laughing, Bob said that this was amazing. And looking at the situation, John was surprised and even froze for a moment. On the 18th floor, they needed to defeat 30 goblin assassins, and again he ordered the giant to charge full force. These creatures, being assassins, had stealth abilities that made them invisible, but it didn't matter, because the giant managed to grab them. Though being quite dumb, he accidentally let them go. Our hero got tense because those monsters could appear beside him at any moment, trying to grab the air. Go Bang asked why the goblins had disappeared. Someone started laughing loudly. It was John, saying that Go Bang was such an idiot and that our hero could only trust him. And to defeat those stealthy goblins, he used the shadow step technique. In a surprising move, he managed to protect Bob by eliminating the goblins around him. Our hero was amazed since he had defeated 8 goblins almost instantly, and even laughed, saying that his summoning power was the best ability he could possibly have. It would only be better if I could summon some waifus, right? That would be 10 out of 10. While the giant defeated the goblins, John kept teasing him, calling him an idiot. Meanwhile, Bob was getting greedy, thinking that if he kept going like this, he could become much stronger by buying new items. At that moment, he grabbed his club, saying that he was going to defeat the goblins with his own hands. The guy was getting delusional, thinking he was all-powerful. And once again, he was back to acting like the super powerful stud. He had researched a lot about the next tower floors, which made him believe he could defeat the monsters. He had learned how to detect the goblins' movements since their stealth technique was low level. That's why he had nothing to fear and could defeat them, proving he wasn't a coward. While moving, he ended up twisting his ankle and, because of that, lost his balance, almost falling to the ground. Due to the awkward movement, he accidentally hit a goblin on the head with his club, and that was enough to defeat the monster. Happy and confident, he said that his plan had worked, but another goblin appeared behind him. At that very moment, John appeared to save him, slicing the goblin in half. They had already defeated 27 monsters with only 3 left. Then the giant appeared, punching the ground several times and creating a shockwave, and that was enough to defeat the 3 remaining goblins. John told the big guy to stop hitting the ground, and even called him slow. At that moment, he wondered where the summoner master was. Our hero was still fighting that goblin. It seemed that the monster John had defeated wasn't that one, and the guy was still there struggling against the monster. If it weren't for the energy shield from his bracelet, he would have died from the creature's strike. And before he realized it, the boy was surrounded by 2 goblins. However, he felt the mana flowing through his body and managed to dodge the attack. Because of the shadow step ability, it seemed like the goblins were moving in slow motion. But no, it was him who was super fast. It looked as if everyone else had slowed down, and with one powerful strike, he defeated both goblins instantly. And as expected, he achieved an S+ score. John ran over to check if his master was okay, and a bit embarrassed, the boy said that he had managed to defeat the last goblins with a single hit. But John started crying out of worry, saying that the young master must never be defeated. A global notification appeared for all players. The bald director was thrilled since that boy hadn't given up. He even wanted to announce to everyone that this player belonged to Korea, but the agent said that the boy was too shy and couldn't be exposed. He had set a record by achieving the highest score on 18 consecutive floors, and the agent said they needed to recruit the boy as soon as possible. News began spreading all over the world, saying that a player had cleared 18 floors with maximum scores. Our hero was watching all those reports, and John ended up turning off the TV. He seemed a little down, afraid that his master would be discovered and that people would start pressuring him. Bob asked why his companion was so desperate to protect him, and if he wanted to say something. John said that he was worried about how fast Bob was discovering his own talent. My talent? What do you mean by that? I don't have any talent. He even smiled at the compliment, telling John to stop it. But John was very worried, afraid that our hero would expose himself too much and end up being eliminated. If his master died, no one would summon him again, and he'd be trapped in that other world that they still didn't fully understand. He even thought to himself that our hero had become very strong in a very short time, and it made him even more concerned. He said that Bob would probably feel thrilled by battle since men liked adrenaline. Trying to calm John down, Bob said that he wouldn't put himself at risk, and that if he fought monsters, it would only be the weaker ones. John agreed with that, but still felt that Bob would cause trouble in the future. That's why he started crying in worry, not wanting to lose his young master, and his concern was so great that he began to cry. The giant walked up to John and told him he was acting like a crybaby girl. Because of that, the warrior kicked the barbarian in the face. The barbarian crashed hard into the refrigerator, and our hero immediately got worried, saying that they shouldn't destroy his apartment again, and ended up dismissing both summons. Worst of all, his favorite food had also been destroyed and fallen all over the floor. He even decided that the next day he would visit his parents' house. The next morning, he was climbing the stairs to his parents' apartment, where he had also lived as a child. When he arrived, he called out, and his father, lying in bed, told him to come in. He still hadn't recovered from the accident and surgery, and the boy's mother said that he didn't need to worry about coming to visit them. She asked them to sit at the table since she had made stew, and the boy immediately asked about his younger brother. While serving the food, the mother said that the boy would be back soon. Then the brother came downstairs to eat, and Bob asked how things were at home, and the mother said they were struggling. While eating, Bob even said that he could send money to his parents if they were really in such a tough situation. At that moment, his father slammed his hand on the table and mocked him, saying that their son didn't even have money to pay his own bills, let alone help them. His mother asked if he wasn't supposed to be working today, and he made up an excuse, saying that it was his day off. Trying to tease him, she asked if he had borrowed money from the mafia to pay off his debts, and he tensed up, imagining that maybe they had found something out. However, his mother trusted him and knew that he was a good person. Because of that, he felt guilty and almost choked, since in truth, he had borrowed money from the mafia, and worst of all, those mafiosos had died because of him. Then his mother explained why she had been fired, saying that she worked fixing water dispensers and that a snobby customer kept asking her to take out the trash. There are always those kinds of customers who think too highly of themselves and ask people to do things that aren't their job. Our hero's father said that he had fallen in love with his wife the moment he saw her because she was a strong and determined woman. Our protagonist was a wimp because of his father. Thus, he was born a wimp, and his brother was also a wimp, two cowards. No wonder he was also born a shy and weak boy who wasn't capable of chasing his own goals. Later outside, he ended up handing a wad of cash to his brother, telling him it was to pay for college. At that moment, his brother asked him to wait a bit. He even thought that his little brother was feeling guilty for having to accept that money. But our hero put his hand on his brother's shoulder and told him not to worry about that kind of thing. He wasn't feeling bad at all. He was actually charging for the previous month's payment because our protagonist hadn't given him the full amount. At that moment, he realized that his brother was a freeloader and maybe didn't deserve this help. Later, he went to the Awakened store to buy other items. He was heading home but decided to stop by to see if there was any useful item available. He even remembered that the agent had told him to call when he went to the store, but he decided not to say anything. He knew that the next floors would have even more powerful monsters and that maybe the shield from the bracelet wouldn't be strong enough to keep him safe. That's why he wanted to buy a shield. But the saleswoman said that the one he wanted cost 100 million WS. The boy was shocked since the last time he came. The items were much cheaper, and unlike last time when the place was empty, this time it was full of people. Well, Mr. Bob, if you want a cheaper shield, I can offer you this one, which costs half the price of the other. He tried on the shield and realized that it really matched his style. She had said it was half the price, so he thought it was 50 million, but she said with a discount it would cost 40. So he placed his fingerprint and made the payment. He thought that talking to female sales clerks was harder than facing a boss inside the tower. This guy was a true coward. Well, he could finally go home, but he ended up meeting a man along the way. The man extended his hand, introduced himself, and asked if Bob was also a player. The boy said yes, and the man started making conversation. He even offered to help climb the tower, saying that he was a veteran. And before leaving, he gave a thumbs up, saying that our hero could count on him. As he walked away, our hero thought that he wished he could be as outgoing as that guy. Later, he arrived at his apartment. He was looking at his combat profile and realized he would need to become a bit stronger to keep climbing the towers with top scores. After setting the food on the table, he thought it would be good to summon John to talk about the tower climb. John appeared looking a bit down and thanked him for the 5-star rating. Our hero showed him his club and his shield, and John became even more worried, even collapsing to the floor. The man said the same thing had happened with his last summoner, and it hadn't ended well. That's why he told our hero to promise he wouldn't advance recklessly. And our hero promised. Grabbing Bob's arm, he asked the boy to promise that if things got dangerous, he would retreat and ask for help from him or the giant. At that moment, he smelled something delicious. It was the dinner our hero had brought for him. Getting ready to devour the croquette, he gave his thanks. While the protagonist was eating, his summon asked if by any chance there was someone who held a grudge against him. That was because someone outside had a malicious intent. Bob asked who could be out there and told the assassin to hide, and the man said, "Yes, sir." At that moment, the door was broken down. Bob prepared for the worst, already activating his protective shield, and standing there was a man holding a gun. Bob seemed to recognize this guy. It was that same player he had met earlier in the department store. Pointing the gun at our protagonist, he told the boy to hand over all the items he had bought. At that moment, Bob realized that this guy had followed him home just to rob him, and as expected, John appeared behind the thief. Bob even begged John not to kill the man, and unexpectedly, John simply hit him on the head to knock him out. The guy didn't understand a thing and immediately fell unconscious to the floor. Bob was surprised since his companion hadn't killed the robber, and even congratulated him, saying that Mr. John was truly incredible. Instead of killing him, he had just knocked him out. That way they could turn the guy in and call the police. He had already heard of so-called item brokers. They were a kind of criminal who followed players to steal their items. They were also tower players, which meant they had some combat experience, and that was exactly why the agency had promised to provide security if our protagonist accepted becoming an elite player. The guy was terrified, imagining that if he became famous, more and more criminals would come after him. But he had a cheat ability, summoning John to protect him. Later, after tying up the robber, he ended up calling the police. The director asked if Bob had visited the store again, and the agent said yes, explaining that since they hadn't known, they couldn't give him any discounts on the items, and since he had bought a shield and a club, they already assumed he was a warrior. They were trying to figure out what kind of power he had. Little did they know that our hero barely fought at all. He only summoned. At that moment, the agent's phone rang, and when he checked the news, it was from the police. And after answering, they said that Bob, supposedly the S+ player, had been attacked by a criminal in his own home. Because of that, the agent jumped into his car and sped toward our hero's house. The man ran up the stairs in a panic, afraid that the boy, probably the strongest player in Korea, might have been killed by a simple weakling. While the police were arresting the shameless thief, he kept accusing Bob of having kidnapped him. The guy was pretending to be the victim, and our hero didn't even know how to defend himself, being so naive. Imagine such a clueless kid. He even thought he might be arrested for kidnapping, but then the government agent opened the door. That criminal suddenly looked hopeful, thinking the agent would protect him, and our hero thought he was doomed. Crawling on the floor, the thief even thanked God that an agent had come to save him. But the government agent simply slapped that scumbag in the face and asked how he dared to lie. He knew perfectly well that Bob would never do such a thing, and clearly this criminal was the one at fault. He even asked if the thief wanted a life sentence and said that the Secret Intelligence Service would arrive any minute and that they should already drag him outside. The criminal knew he was finished, so he started begging for mercy. The government agent even said he could call a lawyer to defend him, though he doubted any lawyer would take the case. That's because the crime of trying to harm other players was taken very seriously. With a serious look toward our protagonist, he asked if Bob was hurt, and the boy said no. At that moment, the agent apologized and even bowed, saying that the National Department agency had failed to ensure his safety. With a grave expression, he knew he couldn't delay any longer. He would have to make this boy sign the elite agent contract. The next morning, our hero summoned John and told him every little detail of what had happened. John even asked if by any chance our hero knew where the detention center was, but our hero told him not to go there, knowing John would try to eliminate that man. Then Bob summoned the big guy, who thanked him for the 5 stars. Now they were entering the 19th floor, and the mission was to defeat 30 goblin shamans. These shamans were much stronger than the previous ones, even if they weren't terrifying monsters. The big guy charged at the group of goblin mages, and while they tried casting spells at him, the giant took a deep breath and let out a thunderous roar, dispelling all their dark magic. Bob was stunned by his allies' sheer power, and to help, John appeared behind him and agreed with the giant that they should eliminate the monsters as fast as possible. And so the two gave their best, quickly wiping out as many goblin shamans as they could. But our hero was motivated to use his own items, though he didn't even get the chance, since the two had already defeated everything. Wait a second, you guys are planning something, aren't you? Just to keep me from joining in. That was exactly it. John had agreed with the giant to finish the monsters quickly so that Bob wouldn't have to fight. The next day, our hero went to the 20th floor of Korea's Black Tower. This place is extremely dangerous, said John. He even added that various types of goblins appeared there. He was saying all that just to scare Bob so he wouldn't want to fight. The mission was to defeat 100 goblins of any type, and Bob noticed that John was stepping in front of him to block his view, and was shouting for the big guy to go ahead, drawing the creature's attention while he would appear behind to strike them. Different kinds of goblins showed up and started firing all sorts of spells. There were also warrior goblins and stealth goblins, but John saw a light flashing behind him. It was our protagonist using his shadow step technique. The guy was so fast that he ended up catching up to the giant, stepping on his back, and so the boy charged at the evil creatures. He was surprised because his plan had actually worked. But John was screaming in panic, telling Bob to be more careful. Since he was little, our protagonist had always been a very introverted child. In his memory, one of his little friends had taken his toy, but since he was introverted, he didn't complain or do anything about it, poor thing. But things started to get worse when he entered elementary school, and we could see that he was quite poor. Because of that, he couldn't fit in since he kept thinking that people wouldn't like him. He even began having lunch alone in high school. Just the thought of trying to change his life made him desperate. But now everything would be different. He no longer needed to fear people, since he could even kill monsters. And while flying through the air, he kept telling himself that he should defeat those goblins and earn the reward. But as we know, John was very protective. The creatures raised their spears to try to strike the boy, but thanks to his shadow step ability, he managed to dodge the attacks by jumping from tree to tree. He even chased after a goblin and hit it right in the face with his club. Our protagonist was becoming really powerful, and he managed to destroy several goblins. John couldn't believe that the boy had mastered that technique so astonishingly well, but then he was hit by darts straight in the back. The boy raised his shield and managed to block them. The protective barrier from the bracelet was also very useful, as it shielded his abdomen. But he grew worried. If he hadn't had that bracelet, he surely would have died. Because of that, he started shouting for help, and John heard his cries. He even told our hero to move to the right side of the cliff, and beating his chest, Gobang said that he would protect the summoner master. Bob's mana was running out. He couldn't keep escaping like that anymore, until finally he reached the side of the cliff that John had mentioned, but he realized there was no way out, only rocks. Desperate, he prepared to face the goblins, thinking it was all over, but then the giant appeared to protect him. Faced with such a huge man, the little goblins trembled in fear. Then the giant struck the ground with a powerful punch, destroying everything. John also appeared above, saying that the big guy had done an excellent job. The goblin shamans tried to cast spells from the top of the hill, but John was too strong. He appeared in front of them and sliced the goblins in half. It seemed that everyone had been defeated, and the man stood on top of the cliff, farming aura. With his face dirty, he said that they had probably already completed the mission. Surprised, our hero realized that they didn't even need his help. At that moment, the big guy crouched down and almost hit our hero, but something caught his attention. It was a strange noise. That's because there was an evolved goblin in its supreme form. John realized the boy was in danger and leaped down to defeat the monster. The barbarian charged at the massive goblin, and their strength clashed violently, but the fight didn't last long. The goblin was quickly grabbed by the neck. As John approached, he said that they would finish this quickly and go have fried chicken for dinner, and then he plunged both blades into the monster and split it in half. Thus, they conquered the 20th floor with 100% completion, and our hero also earned an exclusive healing potion for the tower. After the mission was completed, John went to our protagonist to congratulate him, but it was Bob who ended up giving thanks, saying that they did really well, and above all, saved his life. As expected, he earned an S+ rating, along with the crystals and a platinum badge. His achievements began spreading again in the news and even on YouTube. He had cleared 20 consecutive floors with top scores. The woman asked the director if they should control the media so people wouldn't keep talking so much about that guy, and the director said no, that it was good for people to know. Besides, he asked if they had already made a report on player Bob's family situation. Looking at the photo in the report, they said that Bob's father had undergone surgery and was off work, trying to recover. And one way to help his family would be to cover all treatment costs and put him in a top-tier physical therapy program. Next, they asked about Bob's younger brother and said that he was enlisting in the army, and his mother was a woman who had been unfairly fired after a client demanded she do something that wasn't part of her job. The agent said that the boy's mother was the one they should observe more closely since she seemed to have a strong personality. The director ordered them to carry out the plan to help Bob's family. Back at the protagonist's house, someone knocked on the door. The big guy cheered, thinking it was the food delivery. And while trying to hide the giant, John went to receive the order. The delivery man found it strange that they had ordered more than 12 trays of pork soup, and all cheerful, the restaurant delivery guy said they should always order that much. That one wasn't dumb at all. Looking at the bowls, our protagonist asked if there weren't any coupons included, since he liked collecting those to exchange for food later. While holding up the bedsheet, the giant asked if he could start eating, and just by seeing that bowl of noodles, he already started drooling, starving to death. Without thinking twice, the giant grabbed the plate and began to eat, and John kept saying that he was rude. At that moment, our boy opened the system window. He had already collected 20 platinum badges and wondered what kind of ability he would get this time. At that moment, a golden box appeared. Curious, he asked what that box meant, and there was a huge description explaining which items could be obtained. He went crazy because it could contain anything from hyper mega rare items to ordinary ones. Rubbing his chin, he said that if he got magic crystals, herbs, or metals, it wouldn't be very exciting. But if he happened to get enhancement runes or protection seals, he would basically be a lucky guy. Or maybe he could get multinational tower access, allowing him to enter towers all over the world. Or perhaps he could win the LSSR level summoning ticket, which was basically for the most powerful summons. If he obtained that summon, he could ride around the tower in a carriage while his summons defeated the monsters. With a greedy look, he thought he might even get up to 3 items, and hoped they would be the last 3 since they were the best ones. Stretching out his hand, he asked to open the random box, and the box began to glow while spinning. All cheerful, he said that he felt today was his lucky day. But to his surprise, he only won 10 kilograms of magic crystals. The boy fell to the ground feeling defeated, saying that today was his unlucky day. However, he earned the chance to open the box again, and asked for it to be opened. He learned a new skill called Thunder Fused Staff. Finally, he tried to open the last box, and what came out was a great enhancement rune. He became overjoyed because he could use it to level up one of his summons, and that was something very common in gacha games, and he compared it to the ones he played. Looking at his 2 summons, he wondered which one he should give the strengthening stone to. He had known John since the beginning, and they had eaten together many times. That rune would basically raise the summoned creature's rank, but for now he would store it in his inventory and decide later. The thunder ability would make one of his weapons imbued with the power of lightning. Of course, right, but obviously that's not how it works, except the boy didn't seem to understand that very well. And surprisingly, that power seemed to have infused into his own body. Holding his club, he said it was time to test it. He began swinging the club around, thinking lightning would shoot everywhere. However, nothing happened. Then he realized that this kind of high-damage power couldn't be used outside the tower, since it would be too dangerous. John asked why he was waving the club up and down, and the boy said that he was testing the new ability. It was an attack ability that would make lightning come out of his weapon, and he said it in a cheerful tone. But hearing that, John became extremely disappointed. While he was crying, the barbarian ended up taking his bowl, so they started arguing, with John calling the barbarian a glutton. The scene shifted to the next day, and our hero was trying to understand John's excessive worries, while also wondering why his summons were different, since most people summon monsters, not other humans. But he knew that summoners didn't fight directly, since their summons fought for them. In a parallel world, there was another summoner like him, John's former master, as the assassin had mentioned several times, and even though that other summoner was much stronger, he had ended up dying inside the towers. That's why it was natural for John to be so cautious and refuse to let his master die the same way. But since Bob was also a man, he couldn't just stand by watching his companions fight for him. That would be too humiliating, so in that way he ended up summoning both warriors. They appeared, and John looked disheartened, thinking that this time they would risk their lives again. He even told the young master that from the 20th floor onward, it would become more difficult and dangerous. If Bob wanted to keep fighting goblins, that was fine, but the orcs that would appear from now on were far stronger. John even apologized for what he was about to do. However, it was necessary, he said, his eyes gleaming. With a shout, he activated Rule 3 of the code. The summoned being had to prioritize the summoner's life above all else, even if it meant breaking another rule. So the giant immediately grabbed our hero. But Bob got mad at the big guy, saying that he should have restrained him after they entered the tower, not before. The purpose was to protect our hero, so he wouldn't put himself in danger. Bob knew his companions' intentions were good, but he begged them with tears in his eyes, asking them to please trust that this time he wouldn't put himself in danger. He swore on everything sacred that he wouldn't put himself in danger even once, and after promising several times, John finally agreed. But if things ever got tough, he was to hide, and the boy agreed, and so they went to the 21st floor of South Korea's Black Tower. The orcs were much stronger than the goblins, so they had to stay alert, but the boy asked if he could practice with his club before starting the battle. John told him to hit the giant to test his power, but our hero said he wouldn't do that because he didn't want to hurt a companion. Then the big guy said that the protagonist's attack wouldn't even tickle him. First he started channeling electric energy to see if his ability really worked. At that moment a window appeared, saying the mission was to defeat 30 forest orcs, and the orcs showed up immediately. John told our protagonist to stay back and keep safe. Meanwhile, the other two went into battle. The giant managed to defeat the orcs and even started slicing through them without much trouble. At that moment, Bob realized that his strength wouldn't be much use since he was too weak, and if things kept going that way, he knew he wouldn't be able to defeat even one orc to test his power. John had jumped into the middle of several warriors, and the boy laughed when he noticed that John had left at least one monster for him. So he activated his Shadow Step's ability to move quickly. He appeared right in front of that orc, and with his shield and club in hand, he tried to strike the monster. However, the orc tried to counterattack with its axe, but Bob dodged. In mid-air, he decided to use his technique Falling Thunder Soul, and his club became fully charged with electrical energy. He then unleashed all his power, slamming it down on the monster's head. The attack was very strong, and smiling, he said he was surprised that the strike was actually effective. Immediately, the orc fell to the ground, and our hero was already feeling ultra-powerful. With his face dirty, he said it was way too easy and even went after another monster. If he could defeat one more, he would beat his record of taking down 2 strong monsters. But the giant ruined Bob's fun, and both of them made annoyed faces at our protagonist since he had broken the agreement and attacked 2 monsters at once. The next day, they kept fighting other orcs until they reached the 22nd floor. Then they went to the 23rd floor, where they fought against volcanic orcs. It was too easy, and he was already reaching the 25th floor, but he was getting a bit tired of it all. In the agreement he made with John, he could only defeat one enemy, and that was starting to get boring. Since he had been with the two of them all this time, he hadn't been able to give the strengthening stone to John because he thought the barbarian would get jealous if he saw it. So he summoned John alone, and the guy appeared, thanking him for the 5 stars. Opening his inventory, our hero took out the item, the strengthening stone, and handed it to John. When he realized it was a strengthening rune, the man was speechless. He even asked where our hero had gotten it. He was really emotional because now he could become a special super rare, and kissed the item, saying he felt very happy. Our hero asked if he should use the stone now to level up, but the man said that's not how it worked. He even said goodbye, explaining that he would prepare to use the strengthening stone. But our hero said he didn't have to leave, he could stay there, taking the TV remote. He said he was going to watch some dramas. The guy even complained, saying that in recent days he hadn't been able to keep up with the soap opera he was watching. At that moment, he ended up seeing a news report on TV. It was about his mother. She was protesting in front of a company. Wait a second, my mom's on the news? The boy's mother was demanding justice because she had been fired from her job. Some people passing by only stood there watching. She had been fired because she refused to take out the trash at a client's house when she had only gone there to fix the water dispenser, and when she went back to the company, they told her she should apologize to the client, but of course his mother refused. Now she was protesting in front of that company, and some people stood around laughing. She didn't mind facing that humiliation. She just wanted justice to be done. At that moment, a man appeared asking if she was Hong Ji. He introduced himself, saying he was a lawyer from the Park and King law firm. Wait, this guy's a lawyer? Immediately she got angry and said there was no point in the company trying to negotiate with her. She would continue with the lawsuit. But the man said it wasn't what she thought. Quite the opposite. He was there only to help her. The best law firm in Korea would work for her for free, helping with her case. He even said it was part of a public action by the firm since they like to do that just to help underprivileged people. Of course, she found that very suspicious, but the woman had no other choice. He even told her to consider it as a small blessing in her life. That way the woman ended up agreeing, saying that she would accept the lawyer's help. The first step, the man said, was to start with a media campaign. And after calling the journalists, they all showed up there to make reports about the woman. Giving a thumbs up, he told her to share her entire story. And so we return to the present, with the woman standing in front of the cameras. Our protagonist felt terrible since his mother was doing all that only because they were struggling financially, and he even said that he was a terrible son. But what he found strangest of all was how his mother managed to afford a lawyer. Already holding his daggers, John suggested eliminating the owner of the company that had fired his mother, but our hero said they shouldn't do that. He even thought that maybe he should take all the crystals he had gathered, sell them, and use the money to pay the lawyer. But at that moment, he got a call from his father. He said his father didn't need to worry because he was going to help pay the lawyer, but his father said the lawyer was free. Besides that, he also received a call from the hospital, offering a special treatment. They had developed a more advanced recovery technique for the surgery he had undergone, and the old man had been selected to participate in that treatment. At that moment, our hero began connecting the dots, and after hanging up, he started to imagine that this was the government's doing, only to help him. And to make his suspicions even stronger, his brother called as well. The boy asked if his older brother had seen the interviews, and Bob said yes. Then he said that he had also received a call offering him a scholarship, saying that this scholarship would cover all his college tuition. Bob found it suspicious and asked, "What kind of scholarship is that?" And the boy said it was a national scholarship. Several students were selected randomly, and he was one of them. Realizing 100% that it was the government behind all this, our hero congratulated him. The scene shifted to the Department of Awakened Management. The agent told his boss that he had managed to arrange everything to help Bob's family. Next, our protagonist scheduled a dinner with that agent. He even asked why the agent had done that, and the man pretended not to know. But soon after, he admitted that it was all necessary so Bob wouldn't worry too much about his family. He should focus solely and exclusively on clearing the tower. The man even smiled and asked if he now agreed to join the elite team. All excited, he slammed his hand on the table, and there was the ultra-elite contract, subject to special management. He was proposing that our protagonist become the most beloved player in Korea. What did he say? Yeah, kid, looks like there's no escaping this time. The government employee kept insisting that Bob join the corporation. He realized that it would be very difficult to turn down those offers, and even came up with a little excuse, saying that he was not very confident in his own abilities. Then, at that moment, that public official jumped off the ground and, in a serious manner, asked whether Bob truly believed that even after breaking several records. At that moment, our dear hero was left speechless. He had already cleared 24 consecutive floors with the highest possible score, which was S+ rank. As he bowed, the man kept begging our protagonist to sign the contract, and the MC told him not to do that he should not humiliate himself. If he happened to sign the contract, he would have a personal bodyguard, and that incident of him being robbed would never happen again. Besides that, Bob would receive VIP treatment, the man kept saying. However, the reason our protagonist did not want to sign that contract with the agency was because every time he cleared a tower, he would have to be filmed. And when he mentioned that he did not like being filmed, the employee there said that this matter could be negotiable. Besides that, they would provide a safe place for both him and the MC's family. And that already made him very happy. The guy even started offering an annual salary worth billions, and the boy became even more excited. Come on, if he did not accept this, for the love of God. He was already imagining himself with a house and an apartment. And the guy there realized that he was almost managing to convince him. He even handed over the contract and asked Bob to sign it. The boy was almost touching the contract with the pen. Until then, Noi asked for a little more time, and the guy stood there breaking into a cold sweat, asking what the reason was. Bob scratched his head and said that he would like to ask his friends for advice first. The scene shifts to the following day, with John sneezing. He had just been summoned, and our narrator comments that his eyes were burning because of how brightly John was shining. John was SSR rank, super special rare. John asks why Bob still has not summoned Gobang, and our protagonist says that he would actually like to talk to him first. So, Bob ends up saying that yesterday he met with the team leader from the Awakened Management Agency, and goes on to explain the entire contract proposal and everything else. And John raises his hand thoughtfully. John says that he is in favor of Bob signing that national authority level contract. He also keeps saying that it will be very good for our protagonist, because he will earn a lot of money and also live a much more comfortable life. Our protagonist asks if he is serious, and John says that the best part of all is that the summoner Bob will have even more security. Besides that, there was still plenty of room for Bob to become stronger, because there are legendary beings with ranks much higher than John's for him to summon in the future. It is true that Bob still cannot perform those legendary summons, but if he kept increasing his level, he would certainly be able to summon them. He also tells our protagonist that Bob could reach the level of a demigod. Upon hearing that, even our protagonist became a little tense, imagining how much potential he had to become even more powerful. He asks John if there is any way for him to summon a legendary being right now. And John says that there is not yet. He would need to become stronger. That is why Bob should keep living and performing summons regularly. That way, he would naturally be able to level up. The cooldown period for those random summons was about 1 month, meaning he could perform 12 in total throughout the year. His next summon would arrive in 19 days, and it would be the 3rd summon he could perform. However, John keeps telling Bob that he should demand one thing when he goes to sign the contract. He should demand that he would climb the tower at his own pace. The agency should not pressure him about when to move on to the next floor. All of that so they would have time to adapt and summon new companions. John even starts crying, saying that he is very afraid that our protagonist will die and leave him without a master. It is because he has already gone through that, everyone. While crying, Bob says to his friend, "Don't worry, because he won't die." Right after that, he ends up summoning Gobang, and Gobang refuses to greet John, saying that he does not greet just anyone. But of course, John became extremely offended because he was 2 ranks above Gobang. While John was super special rare, Gobang was only rare, and the big guy stood there looking completely embarrassed by that intimidation. Our protagonist realized that John was kind of bullying Gobang, and he could not wait to obtain a summoner grade increase rune to make Gobang level up so that he would stop suffering so much at his companion's hands. Right after that, they end up entering a tower. Bob stays in the back, hoping that the 2 of them will not see him defeating the other orcs, since those 2 were always worried about his safety. John starts cracking his knuckles, saying that now that he is a super special rare class summon, he will show how much superior he is to Gobang. He even tells the big guy to go ahead and clear the way. And that is exactly what Gobang does. The big guy leaps into the air and prepares to strike all the monsters from above. The orcs had already realized that they were doomed, and when Gobang landed, he caused a massive explosion. John realized that this was the perfect opportunity, and immediately charged at the orcs, eliminating every single one of them. Bob, of course, became worried because he wanted to defeat some orcs himself so he could level up. However, John was eliminating all the monsters so quickly that there would not be enough time for our protagonist. John had used the blade explosion skill. Yeah, it looks like there will not be anything left for Beta. Right after that, the remaining orcs tried to strike John from behind. And it actually worked, everyone. Our assassin was hit. The orcs even celebrated, saying that that human was nothing special. However, the orc realized that he had fallen into a trap. That was an electric clone. The real John was behind them, and so he used ambush, eliminating those orcs. John was much more powerful than before, everyone, because he had leveled up. The remaining orcs immediately started trembling all over. I think they realized they did not stand a chance. So what? Weren't you saying I was nothing special? The fun is only just beginning, says our favorite assassin. Our protagonist, realizing that there would not be a single orc left for him to defeat, immediately used Shadow Step to get closer. And as he approached, all the orcs looked back. Bob remembered John saying that the priority was to keep the summoner safe. But he did not want to keep thinking about that because, if he was not bolder, he would never level up and become stronger. Our protagonist charged at the orc with his club. He could not keep depending on John forever. That is why he had to defeat as many monsters as he could inside a tower. The boy manages to dodge the orc and ends up landing a kick on the monster, and that kick is so powerful that it sends the creature flying. The monster crashes hard onto the ground and immediately gets back up in desperation. That was the first form of wind shock, and so he lands that powerful blow on the creature's head. The strike is very powerful, making the monster spit blood, and of course that caught the attention of the other orcs. However, the MC keeps using Shadow Step to defeat them one by one, and he does it in a very simple way, everyone. Even the boy was surprised because he had become much stronger, and that caused his skill to evolve, unlocking the second form of thunder. The other monsters begin shouting, saying that they will not let this slide. With his club, he immediately starts using the second form. That was the electric thunder technique. Lightning bolts came out of his weapon as he spun it, and with incredible speed, he defeated 3 orcs at once. With a smile on his face, the boy says that this aerial skill was incredibly powerful. John wonders since when orcs had been able to use lightning powers. And when he looks back, he realizes that it was his summoner master who was fighting. He immediately runs over in desperation to protect our protagonist. And when he gets there, he asks the young master if he is alright, and even gets angry, saying that the boy had promised to defeat only 1 orc, but there were several lying on the ground. Scratching his head, Bob apologizes, saying that he got carried away. But at the same time he wonders, man, why am I apologizing to my summon? I'm the one who summoned him. He should be obeying me, not the other way around. Seriously? He asks since when he has had to keep apologizing, considering that he is the master. And John becomes very sad, saying that he is actually just worried about his summoner master. Listen here, John, I'm going to defeat as many monsters as I want. Do you understand me? He had said that he would even defeat the boss, but then something appeared behind him. It was an extremely gigantic orc. The boy immediately started trembling all over, calling for John to save him. So what, Bob? Didn't you say you were going to defeat that monster? And as always, John appears to save the MC. Yeah, it looks like I depend on John no matter what. Pointing his finger at the monster, the summoner, who is our protagonist, tells them to defeat that creature. And just one breath from that monster caused a massive gale. Holding his blades, John says to leave it to him, and Gobang keeps saying that he will protect the summoner. Then the two of them charge forward. The orc chief was truly enormous, but Gobang prepared to strike with the palms of his hands, managing to stop that gigantic axe. And with tremendous strength, he crushed that axe as if it were made of paper. Even the orc chief was surprised by that. Right after that, Gobang leaps into the air and slams both hands with full force into the monster's neck. That blow threw the monster off balance, and from the side John appeared, preparing to use the ambush attack, and thus he ended up mincing the orc. After completing the mission, our protagonist earns the platinum badge. Besides that, he obtained a special privilege. He could select a bonus privilege. Upon seeing that, Bob was completely confused. What does that even mean, right? Bonus privilege. It was a trait enhancement. He could upgrade any trait or skill that he possessed. The boy immediately opened the status window and saw that the item he had obtained was truly very good. And what he chose to increase was his summoner level. Now he could summon a third character. When he returned to his apartment, the two of them were with him, and he realized that they were both very hungry. Our protagonist asked what they would like to eat, and John said that he wanted to eat sushi. However, they ended up choosing to eat a kind of egg noodles. John asked Gobang if that food was not spicy, and the big guy said it was not, but just by looking at the food it was already possible to smell the chili. And when John tasted it, he started breathing fire, saying that the chili was way too strong. Bob stood in the back laughing, while Gobang said that John was far too picky. They had already managed to clear the 25th floor, and the MC comments that if he kept going like that, he would soon reach the 30th floor. Since he was making a lot of money, he decided to visit his parents' house to give them a gift. He arrived there carrying a tray of meat, telling his mother that it was a present. The boy's mother immediately asked why he had spent money on that, and whether he had kept the receipt. Bob's father tells his mother not to complain and to let the boy spoil them with gifts. The boy noticed that his parents were in a good mood since his mother's court case had gone well. And during dinner, he decided to tell his parents that he had awakened as a player. However, his parents showed absolutely no reaction. The boy's mother even shook her head, saying that he was a huge liar. And the boy's brother stood there with a mocking expression. It was true, but his parents simply did not believe him. The following day, he went to the headquarters of the large corporation, and he brought his entire family because he was going to finalize the entire contract. Upon arriving there, he inserted his card. The corporation would provide his parents with a luxurious apartment, and the boy's mother was left completely speechless. Right after that, he returned to the awakened agency, and finally he signed the contract. He had included that clause stating that he would not need to be filmed inside the towers. Just a moment ago, he had signed a contract that would change his life. The employee apologized because he had only managed to secure a salary of 2 billion won. But to our protagonist, that was an enormous amount of money. He tried his very best to pretend that he was not that happy with the salary. But it was difficult, right everyone? It was a huge amount of money. He also requested that they not disclose his identity, much less his family's, because they did not want to be chased by paparazzi. The government employee asks whether his family liked the house, and the MC says yes, even remembering a message from his mother saying that she had never been inside such a luxurious house. Then, showing him on the tablet, the employee said that Bob would also receive a luxury apartment, and he could choose whichever one he wanted. When the boy looked at those apartments, he became extremely happy. There was even an option for a luxurious penthouse. It was the largest penthouse in South Korea, and the scene shifts to a penthouse exactly like that, with 2 girls in the swimming pool. And the #1 player in Korea comes out of the pool. He hugs the girls, and they giggle. That was Sel, also known as Ryu, the #1 player in Korea. And he was the player who had reached the highest level in the tower. He had already reached the 66th floor, but he was kind of stuck on that floor, everyone. He simply could not get past it. He sits down with the girls, and one of them starts talking about that boy who has been breaking records. He had broken 25 consecutive records, clearing 25 floors with the highest possible score. The blonde girl says that it is incredible, and even asks whether Ryu was as strong as that rookie. The girl was extremely excited while talking about that rookie, and the girl beside her tells her to be quiet. At that moment, Ryu stands up and throws his drink over her head. He even says that that rookie was nothing special, and that the #1 player was him, Ryu. You can already tell that this guy is jealous, right everyone? He even throws the bottle onto the floor and keeps saying that if he were to leave the Korean Awakened Company, the entire country would collapse. The girl starts crying, apologizing for comparing the two of them. And as he puts on his robe, he says that his mood is terrible now. He also keeps saying that those women are idiots because they do not recognize how important he is, and only keep talking about that rookie player. The guy covers his face with his hand and stands there consumed by rage. China had contacted him and offered him a much higher salary. Besides that, Japan had offered several other privileges for him to sign with that country. He even says that Japan had offered him several wives if he signed and started exploring Japan's towers. And since, over the past few months, Korea had only been paying attention to that rookie who was on the 25th floor, perhaps it would be worth repaying Korea for such ingratitude. If he became a Japanese citizen, he would obtain many more benefits, along with even greater wealth and fame, especially because he was stuck on the 66th floor, fighting against the specters of the dead zone. Those monsters from the 60th floor onward were so terrifying that they inspired a kind of fear and panic. He had been stuck on that floor for several months already, and unbelievably, he could no longer make any progress. So, perhaps it would be better for him to become a Japanese citizen and start exploring the floors there, since Japan's tower was 1 level lower. He even says that if that really happened, it would cause absolute chaos. After all, everyone, if the towers were not cleared within the time limit set by the tower itself, a kind of catastrophe would occur. With a smile, he keeps saying that this is exactly what he is going to do, just to teach Korea a lesson for not valuing him. Letting out a crazed laugh, he was determined to sign with Japan. And since the deadline to clear the 66th floor was almost over, if no one cleared it, a major catastrophe would occur in the center of Seoul. Meanwhile, at the MC's apartment, he was ordering all kinds of food for delivery. In his new apartment building, there were several other players, and he comments that this was a little strange. The building staff treated all the players very well, and he was feeling thoroughly pampered. Besides that, the building already had everything he needed, such as pharmacies, restaurants, a swimming pool, and much more. Jumping around excitedly, he said that the best thing he had ever done was sign that contract. The 26th floor was known as one of the most difficult missions because of its swampy environment. That was why they would have a great meal before entering that new floor. When he arrived with the food, he noticed that the two of them were completely captivated while watching TV. Bob asks if they are not going to pay any attention to that fried chicken. Then he realized that they were watching a K-pop show on a 100-inch television. Even Bob comments that it was really hard to ignore because the girls were beautiful. Gobang grabs a piece of fried chicken, and all of them eat while watching a K-pop program. John asks if the goal was still to get past the 30th floor that same week. However, our protagonist says that when they reach the 30th floor, he would like to stay there for a while to train and earn a few more resources. He also mentioned to John that he had now upgraded his summoner skill and would be able to summon a third companion. Gobang starts celebrating, but John becomes a little worried that it might be a legendary rank summon, making him only the second strongest. The employee appears bringing a luxury item that the MC had ordered. It was a thermal blanket, equipment that he could use during his upcoming expeditions into the towers. That was because from the 27th floor onward, the Black Tower became extremely cold. And when they arrived there, our protagonist said that the item he had ordered was really very good. He asked Gobang if he was not feeling cold, and the big guy says that warriors do not feel cold at all. On the other hand, John was practically freezing, and says that he is going to run for a while to warm up his body. Bob imagines that Gobang only does not feel cold because he does not have enough intelligence for that. Jumping around, John says that he is going to warm up his body with his own mana, and then starts running like crazy. He runs so fast that he immediately reaches the top of the mountain. Bob even jokes that John had gone crazy because of the cold. On the other hand, he was nice and warm while wearing that outfit. However, they could not fall behind, so they immediately started running to clear the stage. A notification appears saying that the mission on the 27th floor has been completed, and the big guy immediately asks, "How can it be so fast?" And as expected, he earns another record, clearing the floor in the fastest possible time and receiving a platinum insignia. Besides that, he also obtained the Holy Sword of the Paladin Commander's Sacred Kingdom of Roland. Just look at that sword, all old and worn out. Bob thinks that maybe it is not that good after all. He even comments that it has a powerful aura, but judging by its appearance it seems to be quite worn out. Even so, he ends up placing that sword into his inventory. That sword also possessed the holy attribute, and that caught Bob's attention. Later, when he returned to the apartment, he summoned the sword and said that he wanted to test it. He even offered it to Gobang, but the big guy said that warriors use only their own fists. He also offered the sword to John, but John said that he liked using the sword he already had, which was made of leather. Since neither of them wanted to use that holy sword, he stood there thinking that maybe he would have to throw it away, or perhaps sell it on the market. And since the sword was all old and worn out, maybe it was not even worth anything. Maybe it is not worth a thing, Bob says. However, he wanted to test it and started swinging the sword. However, it was a little heavy, and since outside the towers they had no powers, the boy was as weak as a helpless chicken. He could barely swing the sword, and within just a few seconds, he was already completely out of breath. Bob praises his master, and the MC tells him to stop being such a suck-up. Right after that, Bob asks John if there is any possibility of removing the tower's restrictions so that they could use their powers outside. And what surprises our protagonist is that John says that there really is a way for that to happen. When the boundary between the inner world and the outer world disappeared, that restriction would be removed. That was the only way players could use their powers outside the towers. Everyone. Summons like John and Gobang could use their powers normally. With a frightening look in his eyes, John says that when that happened, it would mean that the world was collapsing and an apocalypse was beginning. The scene shifts to the Japanese embassy. One of the employees was talking about recruiting the top player, and over the phone they kept saying that the entire agreement was already being finalized. Letting out a laugh, the elderly Japanese man says that a typhoon was about to arrive. 2 days later, the MC was watching the news, and the #1 player still had not cleared the 66th floor. There were 90 days remaining, and our protagonist became worried, thinking that perhaps Korea might be in serious trouble. Today was the day they were going to clear the 29th floor, since they had cleared the 28th floor with great difficulty, which was why he was worried, everyone. That floor contained gigantic trees, and Gobang had to destroy all of them with his own body. That was so he could knock down the orcs from above. And because of that, John had to slice them apart in midair. Just so we're clear, everyone, it was difficult for Bob, who was scared, but for his summons, it was very easy. According to the information he had obtained about the 29th floor, he immediately prepared himself and brought a gas mask. That was because it contained the plague trolls, which basically kept throwing poison around. Bob summoned his 2 companions, and they immediately greeted him. He explained that the 29th floor would be a little difficult, and that it would be best if they all wore masks, but Gobang said that he was not going to wear any mask, and John says that a super special class summon does not need masks. And so they entered the 29th floor without any protection against poison. Gobang really did not seem to be affected by those poisonous gases, and John even less. Without any major difficulties, they ended up clearing the 29th floor. The 2 of them excitedly asked whether today they were going to eat that delicious food again. However, our protagonist apologizes because it would not be possible today, and so he unsummons the 2 of them. He even felt bad for not taking them out to dinner, but he was afraid that the 2 of them would be discovered because they made too much noise in the apartment. The following day, we see a girl training at the Awakened Agency's gym. She dropped the weight onto the floor. This was Naomi, the second most powerful player in South Korea, and she was currently on the 62nd floor. On the 62nd floor, she was also stuck because she could not defeat the dark zombies. Those zombies were immune to physical attacks and could only take damage from magical attacks. That is why the girl was training, completely motivated, drinking her protein shake while saying that she needed to become stronger to defeat those monsters. Now that she was refreshed, she says that she is going to become stronger to defeat those creatures because she had been training very hard. Finally, a waifu appeared. Everyone, I couldn't take it anymore. At that moment, she saw several employees running back and forth. Naomi called out to the girl and she looked back. The player asked what was happening because the agents seemed desperate. Then the girl told Naomi that it was about Ryu. He had signed with Japan. It seemed that he did not feel appreciated. That was why he had decided to move to another country. Now South Korea's future was somewhat uncertain because they did not know who would be capable of replacing him. He was giving a public statement, saying that from now on he would be a player representing Japan. And when Bob found out about that, the kid almost had a heart attack. He was the #1 player, so it was an enormous loss. The employee was already there bothering our protagonist, asking how long he thought it would take him to reach the 66th floor. At that moment, he realized that he was already being pressured to clear the floors more quickly. However, the 66th floor had a deadline of 90 days. He would basically have to clear one floor every day and a half. So he tells the employee that it was not possible because he needed about 10 days to prepare before advancing to the next set of floors. In other words, everyone, to go from the 39th floor to the 40th floor, he needed 10 days to prepare, Bob explains. With his hand on his face, the agent says that he understands perfectly well and even apologizes for putting pressure on the boy, considering that they had signed the contract less than 30 days earlier. Our protagonist starts crying because he could not help, as it really was an extremely difficult task to reach the 66th floor. At that moment, someone burst through the door, calling for the team leader. It was Naomi, who had just arrived there, and she was asking whether it was true that the United States was offering to loan out light attribute items. The employee said yes, and because those items were extremely rare, the United States was asking for an enormous amount of money. Meanwhile, our protagonist was completely thrilled because a beautiful girl had just walked into his apartment. The government employee said that his name was Bob, and he became very embarrassed. He said that he wanted to sell an item, and it happened to be a light attribute item, and he asked whether she was interested. As he took the item out of his inventory, he asked whether she would like to take a good look at it. He even says that the weapon looks pretty shabby, all broken down, but she keeps admiring the item. Upon using the scanning skill, she realized that it truly had both the light and holy attributes. It was a high-level weapon, and it had such a powerful effect that she had never heard of anything like it. It was exactly the item she needed. Because of that, she ran over to hug the big guy. Standing very close to him, she asked if he could please lend it to her. Her cheeks even turned red, and tears appeared in her eyes. The guy got so emotional that he immediately started imagining himself marrying her. The girl literally became the love of his life within just a few minutes. He even imagined going on a honeymoon with her. During the fireworks, he asked what name they should give their child, and in the middle of his imagination, she kept asking about the holy sword. He even puckered his lips trying to kiss her, but then he returned to reality, and there was Bob with that goofy, happy expression on his face. She asks if he is really going to lend her that holy sword, and he ends up saying yes, completely embarrassed. He even awkwardly tells her to test the sword and see if it really is that good. And so she literally steps through the portal right in front of them. When she arrived there, she received the notification that she had to defeat 20 dark zombies. And the girl immediately became a little scared, especially because those zombies were extremely powerful, and physical attacks did not work against them. With a determined expression, she imagined that perhaps, with that sword, she could bypass the kind of passive ability those monsters possessed. Naomi activated the white glow of the holy sword. The glow of that light had the holy attribute, and that caused the monsters to start taking physical damage. The creature charged at Naomi, and with a serious expression, she prepared to counterattack. Leaping into the air, she says to herself that she will not run away from that enemy. And so both attacks collided. And unbelievably, the holy aura of that sword was actually working. However, that monster ended up inflicting a debuff on her, and she felt weak. Right after that, the same creature tried to attack her from behind, and a new effect of the sword was activated, Unbreakable Spirit. With a massive explosion, she managed to block that attack and immediately sliced that zombie's arm clean in half. She realized that the sword truly was powerful, and after delivering several attacks, all of them dealing critical damage, she defeated the first zombie. There were only 19 left, and the girl was already completely exhausted. Almost 2 hours had already passed, and the employee says that she normally returns after 1 hour and 40 minutes, completely exhausted, and even says that it is impossible. He thinks the same thing is going to happen again, and since 2 hours have already passed, he assumes that she will be back any moment now, saying that she failed. At that moment, Naomi really does appear. She throws her armor onto the floor and asks them to wait a moment because she is going to drink a healing potion. Our protagonist says that he is happy she returned safely, and when he asks whether that weapon was really useful, she immediately places her hand on his shoulder. And then she ends up hugging the big guy, and he can feel her breasts. He was feeling them so much that he ended up completely flustered. She said that the weapon was truly incredible, and that she never would have been able to clear the 62nd floor without his help. The employee asks whether that is serious, whether that sword had really worked, and she says yes. The 62nd floor has been cleared successfully, says the girl with tears in her eyes. The employee starts jumping with joy, saying that now they will finally be able to reach the 66th floor. The news that Ryu had gone to Japan began spreading across the national news, and the employee says that the two hopes of Korea were standing right in front of him, namely Bob and Naomi. That blade was heavily damaged, but she could still feel tremendous power within it. Because of that, the employee says that the organization has several skilled craftsmen who could restore that sword. The guy even says that it would not be a good idea for Bob to sell that sword, because he could use it when he reached around the 60th floor. Instead of selling it, he could rent it out, because that way he would earn much more money. It was common for countries to both sell items and rent them out. He even tells our protagonist that they could charge 10 billion won per use, and he also tells our protagonist that he can rest easy because the agency itself would take care of everything. And of course he ends up agreeing and even gives the guy a thumbs up, telling him to list that item for rent. And so the employee says that he will only need a few details and some paperwork filled out. The protagonist says that he could keep only 1 billion, and the agency could keep the rest. And the guy asks whether the boy is sure about that, and he says yes. After that, he goes to prepare a wonderful dinner. The guy was completely excited, saying that he was going to make a lot of money from now on. And since he had become so rich, he even bought some more expensive meat. His two companions were both deeply moved by our protagonist's story, and were even happy because Bob himself had cooked for them. And with a capitalist smile, he says that from now on they are only going to eat expensive food. The news that Naomi had cleared the 62nd floor started spreading across the internet, and everyone was saying that she was now the most powerful player. 10 days had passed, and the MC kept repeating the 28th floor. He was already preparing to head to the 29th floor, so he trimmed his nails, put on new clothes, and also fasted. All of that was because he wanted to perform a new summon before entering the 29th floor. He spent the entire night meditating so that the next summon would be a very powerful character. He even filled a bowl with water as an offering and also spent about an hour praying. His companions were anxious about whether the next summon would be of the legendary class. John hoped that the next summon would be an intelligent one, not dumb like Gobang. And the MC says that there is nothing wrong with Gobang, that he likes him just the way he is, especially because they managed to clear several floors with Gobang, so they should not look down on him, and John apologizes. And when he looked at the big guy, he was all smiles because of the compliments. Now that everything was ready, he would begin summoning the third companion. He clasps his hands together and uses his random summon skill. And so a new character begins to be summoned, and a girl ends up appearing. Everyone. Finally a waifu. With a gentle voice, she thanks him for summoning her. Her name was Hai, and she was wearing traditional Korean clothing. Her level and type were still unknown. And all three of them were shocked because it really was a girl. John asks how they should react, and at that moment she ends up summoning her two weapons. She says that she can be of great service and swears to devote all of her strength to the young master Bob, the one who summoned her. She was holding 2 daggers and was also wearing a shaman's outfit. At that moment the girl realized something and ended up pointing her weapon at John. She says that she will not let that jerk keep staring at her beautiful face, much less at her body. Our protagonist stands there trying to calm things down, and at that moment she turns toward him, and the big guy immediately becomes afraid to look at the girl because she had just threatened John a moment ago. However, she said that the young master could look at her as much as he wanted, and even said that she would do everything he ordered. Literally everything. I know that you shameless people were thinking about something else. Looking at the status window, Bob saw that she was of the super special rare class. And even though she was in the same class as John, there still seemed to be a hierarchy between them, since John was afraid of her. She was a human shaman, and Bob imagines that it was because of the water he had offered as a sacrifice. As usual, he decides to enter Rai's memories so that he can learn about her past, and so he travels back to an ancient era. He sees someone waving a sacred scepter. Rai was the daughter of the Emperor of the Heavenly Empire, and from a young age, the princess had been fascinated by the religion of shamanism. When her father passed away, her younger brother ascended to the throne, but shortly afterward he was assassinated by their uncle, who usurped the throne. She suspected that her uncle had murdered both her father and her brother, and that ended up being revealed as the truth. Her uncle was willing to do anything to remain in power, even eliminating his other nephews and nieces. However, Rai was the greatest shaman of her era, and because of that she decided to avenge the deaths of her family members. And she did so by placing a curse on her uncle, who was the current emperor. However, the curse she used to take her revenge was an act that defied the heavens themselves. And although she had achieved her revenge, that curse ended up turning against her because it was forbidden. And that was what he ended up seeing in her past. The boy says that he would like to ask Rai something, and she says that he may ask her anything. So he immediately asks the name of the emperor from her era. The girl says that the great emperor's name was Rongwon, and that he had defeated all the treacherous clans, such as the King clan and the Wang clan. Our protagonist realized that he had already heard that story before, and even asked whether it was her father who had founded the Tibet clan itself, and she said yes. That meant that this girl came from a parallel universe, which meant that perhaps all universes were connected. He remembers that John had also mentioned that he came from another universe that was very similar to modern Earth. The boy's stomach began growling loudly because he had been fasting. Then Bob asks if they are hungry and even says that he is going to cook some ramen for everyone. While the boy heads to the kitchen to prepare the ramen, Rai becomes indignant because the master was cooking for the servants. Then she becomes furious, calling them fools and asking how they dared let the young master prepare the food. She even says that they should be the ones cooking for the master, but John keeps telling her to calm down because that was very common. How dare you say that it is common for the master to cook for the servants? The guy immediately starts trembling with fear, asking her to wait just a minute, and they immediately run off and begin preparing the food in Bob's place. You can tell that the girl arrived commanding respect, right everyone? After clearing the 29th floor, they head straight for the 30th floor. Bob thinks that it is really great to have Rai around because it seems like she takes better care of him than John does. He also realized that even a ruthless assassin like John was terrified of a shaman. And since she seemed to be much more obedient, he tells himself that he will finally be able to defeat plenty of enemies without his summons constantly nagging him. Gobang and John were already getting ready for battle, saying that they would finish the fight very quickly. But Rai tells them not to behave so rudely in front of the young master. To clear the 30th floor, they would have to defeat 80 trolls of any kind and one two-headed troll. And the time limit was 13 hours. Looking at Rai, he wonders how a shaman fights, whether she used spells or magic. At that moment, the girl ends up summoning a small music box, and our protagonist wonders how she suddenly summoned a portable speaker. She apologizes and says that she feels embarrassed because she would normally use musical instruments. But since she does not have them, she will use this little speaker instead, and our protagonist says that it is perfectly fine. The two warriors charge toward the monsters, and she presses play on the music. At that moment, John suddenly feels something happening to his body, and the same thing happens to Gobang. She begins chanting magical songs while swinging her weapons. This was a purification ritual within the magic tower. A brilliant light begins to shine from Rai's talisman. Our protagonist could barely see anything, and surprisingly, Gobang's body begins to grow larger and more powerful. He becomes much taller than the other monsters, and it seemed that his skin had become as hard as metal, and so he starts defeating the monsters even more impressively. Meanwhile, John became so fast that he looked like a flash of light. On top of that, his senses became 20 times sharper. Bob realized that the shaman's power consisted of buffs, and he also felt his own body becoming stronger. Meanwhile, the monsters were afflicted with debuffs, becoming slower and heavier. This power is incredible, Bob says, even commenting that defeating the creatures would be very easy. However, he felt something pulling him backward, and when he turned around, it was Rai telling him to let the summons fight instead. And since he was the young summoner master, he should not get involved. She was holding him tightly and even said that he should not put himself in danger. Oh, come on. You act just like John. Let me fight, girl. Before he could defeat the monster, his two companions had already cleared the floor, and he stood there all upset, biting his clothes. However, the girl began to cry, and he became worried. When he looked at her, the girl's eyes were filled with tears because he had scolded her. He asked why she was crying. Then he remembered the third clause, which stated that the summons had to keep the summoner safe. Crying, she explains that she was only afraid that the young master would die and that the worst thing that could happen in the world would be losing the boy. If he were to die, she would lose everyone who had ever been precious to her. At that moment, Bob realized that he had been an idiot and had not taken the girl's feelings into consideration. She had lost her father when she was a child, and she had also lost her brother. She had lost everyone who had been precious to her in the past. That was why keeping him safe was perhaps so important to her. As he reached out his hand, he understood that she only had that tough appearance because she wanted to protect herself. But deep down, she was a sweet and delicate girl, very emotional. At that moment, John and Gobang come running over, asking the young master whether they had done well on the mission. When they arrive, they ask why the princess was crying, and he says that it was because he had scolded her harshly. The girl gets angry, saying that John had not cared enough about protecting the young master, and so they begin arguing over who should be the one to protect the young master first. After that, they return to the apartment. He cleared that floor in record time, everyone, just as expected, and earned an S+ rank. He also obtained a special privilege, an item skill cooldown reset ticket. He did not really know what that meant. He only knew that he could perform another random summon. Meanwhile, the three of them were drinking hot tea, and the girl was somewhat shocked because tea in this world was very cheap, while in her world it had been an extremely expensive delicacy. Meanwhile, Naomi cleared the 63rd floor. News about the girl began spreading throughout the entire country, and people commented that they had found a worthy replacement for Ryu, all because she was now using a holy sword, which the organization itself had lent to her. And the one watching that news was Ryu himself, and he began to get irritated. The newspapers themselves were asking why the Korean organization had hidden that holy sword from Seoul, since he could have used that sword to defeat the monster on the 66th floor. As he thought about it, he became even more furious and threw his glass at the television, destroying everything. He kept saying that those bastards knew that item existed, and even so, they never lent it to him. A Japanese government official appears and says that Japan will make him a top priority and provide him with every legendary item. Ryu asks why that guy showed up, and he says that it is nothing serious. He only came to deliver the news that they need Ryu to clear Japan's 57th floor as soon as possible, because the remaining time was running out. But the guy says that they do not have the legendary swords that Korea possesses, although he believes Ryu can still clear the 57th floor. That is because, back in Korea's tower, he had already reached the 66th floor, which was several levels higher. And as the employee was leaving, he said that he would send someone to replace the broken television. But the guy became even more irritated, saying that Japan had already started pressuring him to clear the towers. Meanwhile, news about that holy sword began spreading across the world's news outlets. They commented that with that holy and light attribute sword, any high-level player would be able to clear floors above the 60th floor. And many people on the internet kept criticizing Korea, saying that it had hidden that legendary item from Ryu. Meanwhile, our protagonist was feeling pretty proud, because he was the one who had obtained that item. Right after that, he went to the door to pick up the tubs of ice cream he had ordered. He bought 10 tubs of ice cream that were very expensive and that he had never tasted before. Whenever he went to the convenience store, he would stare at those delicious tubs of ice cream in the freezer, but he never bought them because they were so expensive. But now that he was rich, he was only going to eat the best food. He opened the first tub and tasted a spoonful while everyone else waited. Then John and Gobang started eating the ice cream and said that it was delicious, while Rai said that they should be more polite, and even remarked that people with proper manners do not overreact when eating something delicious. When she put the first spoonful into her mouth, she experienced a magnificent flavor. She even let out a scream, saying that it was incredibly good, but afterward she tried to hide it while John said that she had behaved rudely and that she was not very polite. Then she says that her mouth was truly rejoicing in such a delicious flavor. She even thanked the young master, and he said that he would buy more next time because he had noticed that she really liked ice cream. The girl even says that she will offer a prayer to bring him good luck and purify him from misfortune, and the boy asks whether that really works. John started making fun of her, saying that it was all a lie, and of course she felt deeply offended. She even threatened to place a curse of bad luck on John, and he stood there apologizing. She discovered that someone had been trying to bring bad luck upon our protagonist and said that it was that man named Ryu, even mentioning that she would return that karma to him. Our protagonist asks whether that man, who used to be Korea's #1 player, would really have done something like that, placing a curse on the MC. John says that he could easily go after that man and put an end to his life. Rai says that they really should take it seriously because that man, apparently, was jealous of the young master. Our protagonist says that he does not want them to bring bad luck upon that man, and the girl says that the young master truly is a very kind person. However, if they did nothing, that man would continue targeting the MC. So she says that she will cast only a karma spell on him so that he may reap everything bad that he has sown. Thinking about it, Bob says that it is actually not a bad idea. She prepares to perform the karma ritual, and John suddenly returns through a portal, and the protagonist asks where his companion had gone. He says that he used his teleportation skill and went to Ryu's apartment in Japan to grab a remote control. He would use that remote to obtain Ryu's DNA in order to perform the spell. Then, with the remote placed in the middle of the ritual circle, they begin the prayers. The girl begins performing her ritual, and after cutting herself and letting a drop of blood fall, she says that it is almost ready. She draws the symbol on that remote, and now everything evil that Ryu did to other people would be redirected back to him. The guy was basically cursed with bad luck. The spell is activated on the remote, and immediately afterward it begins to glow before falling to the floor. The girl says that everything that has been sown shall be reaped, and everything that has been accumulated shall be endured. Meanwhile, Ryu was being introduced on a television program in Japan. The guy was acting extremely confident because he was very popular, one of the most famous players in the entire world. The hosts thanked Ryu for leaving Korea and coming to Japan to become one of its players. They even commented that Ryu was going to clear the 57th floor today. He was going to enter the portal live on television. The girls became excited, calling him handsome, and the guy says that he will clear that floor very easily thanks to the audience's support. The host asks Ryu-san to stay safe because they would not want to lose Japan's best player. The guy says that he is going to break the record and clear the 57th floor in less than 8 hours. Extending his hand, he says that he will clear it in only 5 hours because, back in Korea, he had already reached the 66th floor. He says this with great confidence, and after standing up, he says that Japan will be safe with him as its #1 player. Thus, Ryu ends up entering the 57th floor of Japan's Black Tower. It had been quite a long time since he had last been on that floor. He also remembered that he would have to defeat 15 fire dragons there. He also remembered that those dragons were very difficult to defeat because they fought in groups. But something caught his attention. He was much more on edge than he had been the last time. So he immediately summoned his crossbow, and with his weapon in hand, he said that he should defeat them one by one, since it would be very difficult to fight more than one at a time. Thus, he fires an arrow, and the arrow strikes that dragon's leg, making it let out a loud roar. And with that, he fires several more arrows. But the dragon keeps charging toward him. The creature seemed much stronger than before, and even though the arrows were hitting it, the dragon did not seem to be backing down. So he decided to draw his sword and shield. 2 dragons were charging straight toward him. He managed to defeat those 2 that came at him. However, it was proving much harder than he had imagined. Picking up his crossbow again, he said that he would try to defeat as many dragons as possible while he still had the stamina. He took a deep breath, but then he suddenly sneezed. Because of the sneeze, he missed his shot, and the arrow ended up hitting the wings of a group of dragons. 3 dragons, realizing that there was an intruder, immediately flew toward him. The guy realized that he had incredibly bad luck because now he had 3 dragons to fight. And the creatures began breathing fire in his direction. The guy started running in desperation. He did not remember the 57th floor being this difficult the last time he cleared it. He unleashed several sword slashes, but it did not help at all. After a while, he managed to defeat 2 dragons, but one was still standing. After defeating only 4 dragons, he comments that he is on the verge of death. However, the 5th dragon would fall with just one more strike. With a somewhat crazed smile, he says that he is not going to break the 5-hour record. The dragon lets out a loud roar, preparing to unleash another blast of fire. So he starts trying to dodge the attacks, but at that very moment he realizes that he stepped on something, and it was exactly a dragon's nest. That was the worst thing he could have done, because the baby dragons were crying out loudly. In other words, he was doomed because a large number of dragons would appear at that exact moment. And that was exactly what happened, everyone. With 6 more dragons coming toward him. The guy lets out a scream, asking what he had done to deserve such terrible luck. And so he begins running desperately, heading back toward the portal. As he passed through the magic portal, he said that he was going to feel deeply ashamed because he would be returning to that live television program. Meanwhile, the waifus were dancing on that show, and suddenly he appeared out of nowhere, making a loud noise. They were still live on the air, and Ryu immediately grabbed a potion to try to heal himself. The host asks everyone to applaud because player Ryu cleared the 57th floor in only 4 hours. However, he was furious and did not answer any of the questions. And when the hosts kept asking questions, he told every one of them to get lost. I am not going to repeat what he actually cursed at them. The news that Ryu had failed to clear the 57th floor began spreading throughout Japan. People even commented that the player was a fraud and that Korea had deceived them. The comments just kept pouring in, everyone. Meanwhile, our protagonist was feeling guilty because it was they who had placed that karma on Ryu. Meanwhile, back in Korea, Naomi was successfully clearing the 63rd floor and was already heading to the 64th floor. At the United States headquarters, they were discussing that holy sword. They had been charging extremely high prices to rent out those holy grade items. But now that Korea also had items like that, they had gained a competitor on equal footing. The Secretary of Homeland Security even says that he will send a formal request through diplomatic channels to negotiate with Korea. The Director of Tower Strategy says that it would be better for them to contact the Prime Minister of Japan. That was because Japan was more desperate since it did not have enough players capable of clearing the tower floors. But the secretary says that they should impose a few important conditions, leaving the bald director stunned. He says that they should wait a little longer before helping Japan. That was because once Japan became truly desperate, with the tower floor's time limit approaching, they could charge an even higher price to send the United States' own players to clear the floors. For those who did not understand, everyone, several countries have their own tower floors, and they need to clear them. The tower itself sets a time limit for each floor to be cleared. If that floor is not cleared within the allotted time, a major catastrophe occurs. Some cities around the world have even been destroyed because they failed to clear those towers in time. That is why everyone takes this so seriously. Meanwhile, Japanese newspapers kept saying that Ryu was a complete fraud. And that news went so viral that even people in Korea were talking about it. And Hai says that she had no idea it would bring him so much shame. Our protagonist even says that he feels a little sorry for him, but in truth, he was only reaping what he had sown. But then he changes the subject and invites all 3 of them to head straight for the 32nd floor. But before entering, he would like to talk to Princess Rai first. The girl immediately gets all shy, thinking he is going to confess his love. Meanwhile, John together with Gobang ask if they could eat all the remaining ice cream. The protagonist says no and that they should leave it for later, and of course they start whining. Next he asks them to leave there so they don't disturb the conversation he is going to have with Rai. With blushed cheeks, the girl said she would do anything the young master asked, even taking her as wife. But with a bored face he says that was not what he wanted to talk about with her. And with an embarrassed face she asks if what he wants to talk about is that she can never eat ice cream again. And he said that was also not it. What he wanted to agree with her is that he could kill at least 3 monsters inside the tower without her stopping him. After closing the agreement, they end up entering floor 32. They would need to defeat the Minotaur King, 6m tall. When he was face to face with these Minotaurs, he realized it would be very hard to defeat them. Yeah, now I realized how weak I am. However, Hai appears and says she will give a debuff to the Minotaur and also make him more powerful. With a confident little expression, she says that he will definitely be able to defeat the monster. Meanwhile, Gobang was defeating several Minotaurs and John was not behind, guys. He was also defeating many. So Bob gives a confident smile and says that with Princess Hai's help, he will definitely be able to defeat it as well. The Minotaur was going into a rage, launching a berserker attack. However, Bob manages to jump behind the monster. This was the perfect chance for him to attack from behind, and he ends up hitting the Minotaur's neck. The monster was very resistant, however the attack still caused gigantic damage. Bob had barely defeated the first Minotaur and John together with Gobang defeated all the others, thus completing floor 32 in record time. There was nothing left for the weak one. The next day, the scene goes to the Awakened Management Agency. Who returns from a mission was exactly Naomi. She says that floor 65 was a bit difficult, but since she cleared it, soon she will try floor 66, and makes a satisfied face. She tells her assistant that she will try to enter floor 66 in 3 days, and therefore she will train a lot. The Public Management Council says that even though Seol ended up betraying them by going to Japan, they still have hope of clearing floor 66 with Naomi. And in 6 months, Bob will have already reached floor 60 or so, says the leader. And the girl says they should repair that sword to make it even more powerful for Naomi. And the guy asks if they are doubting Bob's strength, thinking he won't be able to make use of that sword. He also says that Bob is above any other player, and that soon he will become ranked number 1. He even says that Bob managed to clear 32 floors in record time, but the girl says this guy is outdated. That is because Bob cleared 33 floors in record time, and with an S+ rating. That boy was truly a prodigy, because no one had ever done something like that. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Rai had given him a stealth identity talisman. They could use these seals to go out in public without being recognized. After all, a 3M tall giant would attract too much attention. He thanks them for these talismans and puts them in his pocket. Next, he ends up receiving a deposit of 1 billion won. And of course, he already feels ultra rich, spreading money everywhere. Because of that, they decide to go out to celebrate, and he takes all his friends. He is afraid people might find Gobang strange and even notices a girl staring at him. But the only thing the girl said was that he was very cute. That is because she was seeing him dressed in a giant costume. The other people were not paying much attention to his friends, because they were all seeing them as normal people. Because of that, he felt more relaxed and tells everyone to hurry and go to the restaurant to eat meat. They go to the restaurant and the MC says they can take any food they want. The scene changes to the next day, and they were all very excited, because last night they ate freely. Our protagonist complains, saying they spent around 12 million won, all on food. Later that same day, they enter floor 34. Bob was face to face with a huge 6m tall minotaur. Sweating cold, he comments that this creature is much more terrifying than he imagined. He even thinks the strategy should be focusing on the legs first, and when it starts falling, aim for the head. But John whispers in Bob's ear that this monster is very tall, and Bob won't be able to reach its head. But it was all fine because John could help. He goes to Gobang and asks him to make a hand step ladder. But Gobang is very slow, guys. He wasn't understanding it. After a lot of explanation, Gobang finally understood and realized he was supposed to create a boost to throw Bob upward. After gathering a lot of courage, Bob starts running, and after stepping on Gobang's hand, the giant ends up launching the MC. But he launched the protagonist way too high, guys. And at that moment he realized he was flying like a rocket. And of course, panic already started kicking in. In midair, he thought he was screwed, because he would fall and smash his face into the ground. And that is exactly what started happening. He was falling at full speed. He even jokes, saying he looks like a dart. However, he remembers that when using the shadow step technique, it was like he was floating, stepping on air. So he tries to use that technique and sees that it works. It was like he was sliding through the wind. This ability was very useful, guys. He starts moving through the sky and, laughing, he says that with this technique he could eliminate the Minotaur. He goes sliding through the sky, heading toward the monster. Hay asks, since when the young master can walk in the sky? And according to John, this was the first time he had seen someone use the shadow step technique like that. He learned this technique in his past life, but he had never seen anyone use it in such a creative way as Bob. Laughing, he says that the summoner Bob really was someone unbelievable. Meanwhile, our protagonist was falling on top of that Minotaur. Upon noticing that the distance was good, he starts charging power in his club. This was the third form, Art Gion. The Minotaur does not fall behind and charges its hand with crimson energy, and thus both attacks collide. But of course our protagonist comes out victorious, smashing that monster into the ground. Everyone starts celebrating, saying the young master was very strong, but Rai gets worried, saying that he shouldn't push himself so much. However, they were curious, asking how he managed to use the shadow step technique in the air, and he said he used it kind of in desperation. After that, they end up eliminating the remaining Minotaurs and complete floor number 34. And with that, Bob obtained a reward, which was the rune of leveling advancement for summoning. Of course, he was left wide-eyed, because that rune was extremely rare. Returning to the apartment, he thanks his friends. Whispering, he asks John what would happen if he used an enhancement rune on Gobang and whether he could possibly reach legendary level. When he looks at Gobang, he sees that the guy is very innocent, kind of clueless. And John starts cursing, telling the young master not to use that rune on that guy because he was too stupid. Both John and Hai kept bullying Gobang, and the big guy even tells the young master not to worry about him and to use the rune on someone else. However, the MC had already made up his mind. He would give the enhancement rune to Gobang so that he could also reach the super rare and special class. The guy starts crying, and our protagonist asks why he is crying, and he says it is because he is very emotional. He even hugs our protagonist. The scene goes to the Chinese Special Intelligence Service. They were talking about the completion of floor 59, and some of them were even saying that it would be necessary to capture one of the players from a competing foreign country. The guy ends up throwing something on the table, and they ask, "What was that?" The deputy director says that it was a list of players belonging to the Korean elite team. The soldier asks what it was for, and the deputy director said it was to choose the most talented recruits so they could capture them. This was basically a kidnapping plan, guys. They wanted to take Korean players and naturalize them as Chinese. The soldier says he understood and that he will do it. As soon as the soldier leaves, the deputy director says that they are not idiots like Japan to publicly naturalize people. Instead, China simply goes and takes the players it needs. The scene changes to 2 days later. Our protagonist comments that Gobang did not return after receiving the summoning stone. He also wasn't able to eat because John only made ramen. Looking at the status window, he realizes Gobang is still not available. John said that since he leveled up, it also caused some debuffs, and one of them was taking longer to be summoned again. Rian even jokes, saying that maybe Gobang died, and our protagonist complains in the background. Laughing, she said that since his name still appears in the status window, it means he is alive and well. There is just a cooldown time. In that case, they will have to wait a few more days to be able to summon him again. John even says that Gobang's soul is so pure and innocent that nothing bad would happen to him. However, Rai says that since he has a pure heart, he might even rise 2 ranks, reaching the same level or even above John. When he hears that, John gets all downcast, just imagining that that big guy could become stronger than him. But Bob comments that if Gobang becomes even more powerful, they could all benefit from it. Looking at those two, Bob knew he would need more space, because he wasn't dismissing his summons. They are all living together. Meanwhile, at the cafeteria, everyone was talking about the news. A guy was saying that Naomi will enter floor 66 tomorrow and try to accomplish something even Ryu had failed to achieve. The guys there were commenting that Naomi was very beautiful and that they would like to marry her. And meanwhile, John appears carrying a tray full of sweets and Rai gets all emotional. Our protagonist receives a notification on his phone, and when he answers it, it was the corporation employee offering him to move into Ryu's apartment, because the guy was no longer a Korean player. Of course, Bob doesn't believe it and asks if it was serious and how much it would cost. On the phone, the agent says it would be free and that they would cover all costs. Bob says he will think about the proposal and hangs up the phone. He asks John if he knows what Ryu's apartment is like, and he says yes, because it was very big. It was a very luxurious place and even had a rooftop garden. However, he was against accepting it because nothing comes for free and they would definitely keep asking for favors. However, Rai was in favor, saying that our protagonist deserved it because he worked very hard. The boy keeps thinking about it, whether he should accept living in that apartment for free, since it was very luxurious. Slamming his hand on the table, he says he has already decided. He would buy that apartment, because accepting it for free would really make them keep asking for things. Besides, he is now earning a lot of money, so he would definitely be able to pay for that apartment with just 1 month's salary. He imagines that the apartment would cost around 2 billion won, and starts searching the price online. And when he searches for that apartment, he sees that it costs 20 billion won. The boy is even a bit traumatized by such an expensive price. John asks if the price is enough for the young master to buy it, and the MC says no. All sad. He says that for now they should keep living in that cramped apartment. Besides, if he lived in that luxury apartment, he would have to pay several other fees and the monthly cost would be very high. At that moment, when he passes one of the guys, he feels a malicious aura, and so John immediately looks back. That man who passed them had several scars on his hand, and he was armed, and that weapon smelled like gunpowder as if it had been fired. Since John was also an assassin, he knew how to recognize others, and therefore he uses a tracking spell so he can know the exact location of those two individuals. The MC asks if John is not going to and apologizes for being late. The scene goes to the Awakened Management Agency. Naomi was doing training. She was meditating because today would be the day she enters floor 66. She could not rely only on her own strength, since this floor was extremely difficult. On the previous floor, she barely managed to pass, and it was very hard. And she only succeeded thanks to the power of the Holy Sword. These shadow zombies were strong, and the only thing that could defeat them were spells or weapons imbued with holy energy. With the help of that sword, she defeated all the shadow zombies of floor 65. But she knew the next floor would not be so easy. That is why she was training focus and visualization. Standing up, she tells her agents that she is leaving, and she enters the portal to challenge floor 66. Upon arriving there, she is faced with even more powerful entities. She comes face to face with the Shadow Spectre, but holding the sword, she says she will not give up. 10 hours passed and she returned. Making a thumbs up, she says she succeeded in clearing it. A notice appears for all players saying that floor 66 of the Korean Black Tower has been cleared. The newspapers begin reporting that Korea did a great job placing Naomi in first place to replace Ryu. Because of this, many people started forming fan clubs for the girl. Some even decided to leave their homes to celebrate. And Naomi, who was already a celebrity, became even more popular. Ryu was watching everything on television and comments that now they gained 6 more months to clear the next floor. He even feels relieved because he was very worried about Naomi. What he really wanted was to reach floor 35. And looking at the status window, he realizes he can summon Gobang. So he immediately extends his hands, calling his companion. And a very strong light begins to shine in his apartment, and from it emerges a slightly different character. The MC asked Gobang what happened to him. Yeah guys, Gobang changed his appearance and no longer looks like an idiot. Gobang had changed his appearance, and he said he was grateful that Bob had summoned him again. Ray was summoned as well, and she thanked Bob, but at that moment, she suddenly looked frightened. John also found the whole situation a little strange. That was because they were standing face to face with someone who looked completely different. John immediately asked Bob who the man was. So our protagonist explained that it was Gobang, but John didn't seem convinced. Bob then explained that he had used the enhancement, and Gobang was now an SSR. John was completely stunned, and Bob asked whether Gobang could recite the 3 principles of summoned beings. The big guy said yes, then immediately started stumbling over his words, claiming that the first principle was that the summoner should always come first. That's when they realized Gobang was still just as slow-witted as ever. He had simply become stronger. Soon after, they entered the 34th floor of South Korea's Black Tower. This floor was filled with minotaurs, and these monsters were absolutely massive, guys. Gobang confidently announced that he would go first and test out his new powers. However, Bob remembered that Gobang used to be 3 meters tall, while he was now only 1.9 meters, so he actually suspected that Gobang had become weaker. That's why he told Princess Rai to put her buffs on Gobang and make him stronger. However, the big guy asked Bob to let him fight on his own without any buffs, just so he could see how powerful he had become. He even dropped to his knees and begged his summoner master to let him do it. Now that he was an SSR, he was sure he had become much stronger. Bob agreed, but he walked over to the assassin John and told him that if Gobang got into trouble, John should step in and help him. With that, the big guy started walking toward the giant minotaurs. He began shouting at the top of his lungs, surrounded by an explosive aura, which immediately caught the minotaurs' attention. Bob was stunned, saying it would have been much easier to fight the minotaurs one at a time instead of drawing all of their attention at once. But surprisingly, Gobang suddenly started growing. He became unbelievably tall, even surpassing his original height. Bob pointed out that he was now practically the same size as the minotaurs. Once Bob realized that Gobang had genuinely become bigger and stronger, he became much more confident as the two sides engaged in what was supposed to be some kind of duel. It wasn't really a duel though, because Bob was completely crushing the minotaurs, and with an incredible burst of speed, he took down the first one and immediately moved on to the second. The fight wasn't even remotely balanced. One moment Gobang was landing hits, and the next the minotaurs were getting pummeled. John even pointed out that this looked nothing like the kind of fight they were used to seeing from Gobang. Bob joked that it would be nice if they had some popcorn so they could sit back and enjoy the show. Watching all this made John jealous, and he angrily wondered why his master had wasted that enhancement rune on such a blockhead. Ray immediately became angry and scolded John, telling him that no one should question the principles or methods of their summoner. She even started insulting John, so Bob went over to comfort his friend and asked Ray not to use such harsh words. After being called out, the girl became extremely embarrassed and apologized to her young master. Bob even told her that she should try to be more polite toward John. She then asked whether the summoner master wanted her to apologize. Looking shy and embarrassed, the girl walked over and said that from now on, she wouldn't be so harsh with her words and would try to be more careful. Meanwhile, Gobang was fighting all the minotaurs at once. At one point, one of them slammed its head into his back, but that only made him even angrier. He immediately started laying into the other minotaurs. One after another, he took them down. And with that, the mission on the 34th floor was complete. Little by little, Gobang returned to his normal height of 1.9 meters. He even said that now that he had become an SSR, completing missions would be even easier. Bob was thrilled and thanked him, saying that things would really be much easier from now on. They returned to the apartment and ate ice cream. Bob commented that the airhead had really gotten much stronger after leveling up. But he was still just as goofy as ever, guys, and ended up making a mess while eating his ice cream. Meanwhile, John was staring intently outside, and it seemed like he had noticed something suspicious. Bob then walked over and called John's attention, asking why he wasn't interacting with everyone else. Ray said it was because John was jealous, since Gobang had reached the same level as him. Looking miserable, John insisted that wasn't the case. In reality, he was genuinely happy that Gobang had become stronger. When Bob looked at the big guy, he noticed that Gobang's appetite had increased. Since John was eating ice cream while crying, the protagonist asked what he could do to cheer him up. John explained that an international soccer game was going to take place at midnight. Because of that, he wanted his master to summon him at that time so he could watch the match. Bob asked when John had started liking sports, and John admitted that he actually loved soccer. Without thinking much of it, our protagonist agreed and said he would summon him at that time. He also planned to stop by the Awakened Management Department to deliver the mana stones he had obtained. The others immediately became worried about him going there alone. He tried to leave the apartment, but everyone kept insisting on going with him. The scene then shifts to the Awakened Management Department. A limousine pulled up in front of the building, and an employee welcomed player Bob. Our protagonist was embarrassed because they had sent an incredibly luxurious limousine to pick him up from the apartment. Once they got inside, the employee thanked him, explaining that the boy had brought a total of 54 kilograms of mana stones worth roughly 27 million WS. He also praised the organization for successfully clearing the 66th floor. The employee explained that it was all thanks to the holy sword Bob had lent to Naomi. The employee even asked whether Bob had decided if he wanted to live in that extremely luxurious apartment. The protagonist said he would think about it later. He didn't want to owe this company any favors, guys. The employee then told Bob that if he ever changed his mind, the penthouse was currently empty and reserved specifically for him. But before Bob could leave, the employee said there was one more thing he needed to discuss with him. He explained that an American player named Gerald would be coming to Korea in a few days. Gerald was the strongest player around, and he wasn't exactly the easiest guy to deal with either. Bob asked why the company employee was telling him all this. The man explained that they were actually considering renting the holy sword to this player, and the price would be 10 million. That's right, Bob, you heard that correctly, $10 million. That came out to roughly 13 billion WS, and the kid nearly fell over. If the negotiations went as planned, the United States would want to rent the sword multiple times. And just thinking about how much money he could make from this was enough to nearly give the kid a heart attack. The employee even mentioned that they might raise the price if Bob felt the current amount was too low. But our protagonist started shouting that 10 million was more than enough, and later, he headed back home. He still hadn't fully processed just how much money he was about to make. He dropped to his knees and realized that he could now make around 13 billion WS. For someone who had been working part-time jobs and barely making anything just a few months earlier, life was treating him pretty well. Now that he was a multi-millionaire, he decided he would buy some delicious food for his summoned companions. And that's exactly what he did as he started enjoying a really good meal. Later, when midnight was just around the corner, he summoned John. The assassin appeared and thanked his summoner for calling him. The protagonist was already extremely tired, so he told John to enjoy the game. As Bob was getting ready for bed, he also told John that he could eat as much as he wanted because there was food in the refrigerator. John turned on the television, but we can already guess that watching the game wasn't actually what he had in mind. Using his powers, he slipped out of the apartment. He made his way to the top of a building and began surveying the area. He had placed tracking marks on two men who had been spying on Bob's building. While looking out from Bob's apartment window, he had noticed two suspicious men outside watching that floor. Since protecting his summoner was his top priority, he decided to find out whether these men posed any kind of threat. The two suspects carrying the tracking marks were inside a traditional Korean massage parlor. However, the business was nothing more than a front, because the people running it were actually members of the mafia. They had gathered a large amount of information about players from the Korean tower, and they started going through the players' names along with their ages. Eventually, they brought up Bob's name and said that he was 25 years old. They had even discovered that the protagonist was one of the players. The mafia was planning to kidnap the players' guys, but while the leader was explaining the plan, one of the mafioso's heads suddenly came rolling across the floor. They immediately demanded to know what had happened and recognized the face. After drawing their weapons, they shouted that there was an intruder inside the room and rushed toward the massage area. The leader was looking over those images when John suddenly appeared right beside him. Since when had this guy gotten inside? Without hesitating, the mafioso drew his blade. When he tried to strike John, the assassin stopped the attack with ease and snapped the blade with just a little pressure. He then launched the broken piece of the blade forward, slicing through the mafioso's wrist. The other henchmen rushed back into the room after hearing their boss scream. The man clutched his blood-covered wrist, and after ordering everyone to open fire, the mafioso started shooting. As expected, this was nowhere near enough to trouble John. He effortlessly dodged every bullet. As he moved closer, he told them that they were all going to pay for messing with the wrong person. John moved so quickly that when he passed through the group, none of the mafiosos could even tell where they had been hit. Showing absolutely no mercy, John began slicing them apart while mocking them, saying it looked like they had run out of hands to hold things with. They all realized they were dealing with someone who was far from ordinary. The mafioso even wondered whether the Korean intelligence agency had soldiers capable of wielding that level of power. The only people they had ever seen with abilities like that were individuals recorded inside the tower while using their powers. Because of that, the mafioso concluded that this assassin had to be a player. After pinning the mafioso against the wall, John said there was still one person left and quickly turned around. He asked the bald man if he could speak Korean and told him to answer every question truthfully so he could leave alive. John then ordered him to admit that he had been wrong, and the bald man immediately agreed. But instead of letting him walk away alive, John finished him off and coldly called the man an idiot for thinking he would actually be forgiven. After completing his job, John put on his usual bow tie, but as he was leaving, he suddenly remembered something. If he left the bow tie behind, Bob would probably figure out that John himself had done this. So he immediately turned around and rushed back. He stood there thinking about whether he should remove the bow tie, since it was his signature. He couldn't just abandon the one thing that made him recognizable. But Bob had warned him the last time that if John did something like this again, Bob would stop summoning him. So John went back and removed the bow ties, abandoning his trademark. The scene then shifts to the following day. Bob asked John if he had enjoyed watching the game, and John said he had. However, Bob pointed out that John hadn't eaten any of the snacks he had left in the refrigerator. The assassin came up with an excuse, saying that he had been too nervous because of the game and therefore hadn't eaten anything. Bob found that extremely suspicious, but he didn't say anything. Today, they would be taking on the under 35, and Gobang was already fired up, saying he would wipe out all the monsters in one go. They would have to defeat 80 Minotaurs and a Minotaur King. Ri immediately started applying her buffs, making them stronger and faster. With that, Gobang became even more powerful, surrounded by a brilliant aura. But he was surprised when John suddenly passed right by him. The assassin said that he would take the lead this time. He didn't want Gobang to steal all the glory again like he had on the previous floor. So John immediately leaped onto a giant Minotaur and took it down in less than a second. Bob couldn't figure out why John was acting like this, while the big guy kept telling John to fight behind him because Gobang himself would serve as the tank. At that moment, Bob realized that if he didn't move quickly, he wouldn't get to defeat a single monster because there wouldn't be anything left for him. So he took off, jumping through the air. He was using the shadow steps technique, which basically allowed him to fly through the air with his weapon. He even tried landing a few attacks on a Minotaur. However, the Minotaur King was defeated at that exact moment, completing the mission. Bob realized that he would have to move even faster because his summoned companions were ridiculously powerful. Gobang slammed his feet against the ground to stop himself. Then he used the momentum to take down the Minotaur King. He defeated the king by launching him into the distance. Even though Bob hadn't managed to defeat a single monster, which was something he actually enjoyed doing, he was still happy because his summoned companions were becoming stronger and stronger. Meanwhile, John was feeling depressed because Gobang had stolen the spotlight again, and as expected, they cleared the tower incredibly quickly, earning an S+ rating. The scene then shifts to the crime scene at the massage parlor. The police were investigating who had committed the murders. An employee from the Awakened agency arrived at the scene with his assistant, showed his credentials, and introduced himself. The detective thanked the agency for sending the two of them. That was because this group of mafiosos had photos and information about the players from the Korean towers. The company employee crouched down and looked shocked. He couldn't understand how they had managed to obtain information about Bob. After all, none of the protagonist's information had been leaked anywhere. He then asked his assistant to arrange an emergency meeting with all the executive-level employees. Back at Bob's apartment, he was looking through the items he had received after clearing the 35th floor. He had enough to perform another summoning. John suggested that they perform a ritual first using the same water they had used before, but Ree pointed out that drinking fountain water wasn't meant for rituals and could bring bad luck. Bob tried to play it cool, since they had used that exact same drinking water to summon Ree in the first place. They had already accumulated plenty of platinum emblems, so he could now perform another transformation. He could either upgrade one of his summoned companions or perform a brand new summoning. John was already hoping Bob would upgrade him so he could become even stronger. When our protagonist opened the item package, he received two rare items. One was the Golden Shield of the Dawn, which was completely indestructible. The other exclusive tower item was the Golden Mace of the Cold Twilight. Grotto immediately became excited because these were incredibly powerful items. While he was celebrating, John pointed out that if Bob summoned a fourth member, one of the existing three would have to leave because they could only have 3 summoned companions at a time. John suggested that if they were going to perform another summoning, they should use purified water. Gobang argued that it probably didn't matter much, since they had used drinking water for the ritual when they summoned Rai. Grota looked completely confused and asked if that was really what had happened. She even suggested that the big guy must be joking, but Gobang said he didn't know what a joke was. Once she realized it was actually true, the girl tried to play it off by saying that sometimes drinking water could bring good luck. That's apparently why she had been summoned. Gobang pointed out that the master could currently have only 3 summoned companions, so if they summoned another one of them would have to leave. He even asked which one of them would have to give up their spot for the new summoning, instantly making the atmosphere tense. Which one of the 3 would have to leave to make room for the new member? Gobang not only had incredibly high damage, but he also served as the team's tank. Rai, on the other hand, was extremely useful as a support because of her abilities. That meant John would probably be the one losing his spot. He started thinking about it and became nervous because he didn't want to stop being summoned. John nervously suggested that maybe the young master could acquire an ability that allowed him to summon 4 members at once. All they had to do was roll that ability. Ree immediately became angry with John and reminded him that the young master was the one who should make that decision, not them, since they were merely summoned companions. With his head hanging low, John admitted that she was right and said he knew he would be replaced because he was the least useful of the 3. But the protagonist asked who had told John that he was going to be removed. Gobang immediately became worried and asked if Bob meant him, while Rai said she would leave too if necessary. Bob then asked whether Gobang was actually willing to give up his spot, and what exactly was Princess Rai thinking by saying things like that. They all needed to listen carefully because none of them were going to be replaced. Hearing that, John started crying and asked if Summoner Bob was really that kind. Our protagonist said he would try to obtain the ability that allowed him to have 4 summoned members at once, and only after that would he perform the summoning to find out who the 4th member would be, until they obtained the trait enhancement. He wouldn't kill any monsters and would stay in the back. By using the combined power of the 3 of them, they could clear the same dungeon over and over again. John started crying like a little kid, thanking Master Bob for not kicking him out. Meanwhile, the Awakened agency was investigating how the Mafia had discovered that Summoner Bob was working with them. They even suspected that the Mafia had probably been planning to capture all the players. The director of the intelligence service asked who had eliminated the mafiosos, and they began discussing who might have had a reason to stop these men. Some believed that another mafia group could have started a war with them, but the employee said he suspected China was behind it all. That was because China had a history of kidnapping players from other countries and taking them back home, where they would be forced to play in the tower. The next day, they headed to the Under 36. The 3 warriors were already getting ready to begin the battle. Floors 36 through 40 were home to a section filled with giant humanoid monsters known as ogres. They had impressive speed and durability, but they weren't strong enough to stand a chance against Gobang. The big guy was taking them down as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Meanwhile, Rai was supporting him from behind with buffs while also debuffing the enemies. Poor John guys was desperately trying to prove himself by taking down as many monsters as possible. And just like that, they cleared the under 36, earning Bob another platinum insignia. The very next day, they moved on to the 37th floor. An ogre suddenly came across little Bob, but Gobang managed to save him, and they continued onward until they reached the 39th floor. Their goal was to clear the floors as quickly as possible so they could unlock the ability to add a fourth member to the team. On top of being incredibly powerful, Gobang could also strike fear into the creatures he faced. Once again, he started sending the ogres flying with his attacks. Within just 5 days, they had already reached the 39th floor. Reports that they had cleared the floors with top ratings started spreading across the internet again. And since the protagonist was clearing one floor per day instead of repeating them, people were paying close attention. The next day, the number of security guards at the building where the protagonist lived suddenly quadrupled. They were worried that something might happen to Bob, and every time he left the building, he became a little nervous, thinking they were watching him. However, he was using an identity concealment talisman that Rai had given him, allowing him to leave without being recognized. From there, he managed to catch a taxi. He asked the driver to take him to Ganju Traditional Market, and to convince the guy to drive faster, he offered him some extra money. And sure enough, the driver immediately started speeding up. Within just a few minutes, they arrived at the traditional market. As soon as he got there, Bob summoned John and explained that there were plenty of things he wanted to buy. He wanted to pick up all kinds of delicious food, so he brought John along to help him. Shortly afterward, they headed to the national park, where Bob summoned both Rai and Gobang. The girl immediately commented on how incredibly beautiful the place was, saying it reminded her of where she had lived as a child. Gobang put our protagonist on his shoulder so Bob could climb the mountains more easily. Eventually, they reached the highest point, and Bob was amazed by the view because the scenery was truly breathtaking. Gobang picked up a gigantic rock and carried it over to a specific location. After setting the rock down, they decided it was time to prepare the ritual they would use for the summoning. Since Rai was a shaman priestess, she immediately began setting up everything they needed. Bob was feeling nervous because the last time they performed the ritual, they hadn't done any of this, and had simply used ordinary water inside the apartment. This time, however, they prepared an enormous feast and began the ritual, hoping to bring them good luck and summon a powerful new member. The girl began levitating while chanting magical words. Bob also asked for the trait enhancement attribute so he could summon 4 members at once, and with that, they completed the ritual. Immediately afterward, they headed for the towers under 40, hoping to clear it quickly and find out whether they would receive the items he wanted. Gobang was as brutal as ever and effortlessly defeated a 2-headed orc. With that, they cleared the tower's 40th floor. When they returned to the apartment, John suddenly sneezed, and Rai immediately said that it was a bad omen. When Bob checked his inventory, we saw that he really had obtained the ability to add another member to his group. But it turned out to be a bait and switch, guys, because he first had to win it from a gacha by spinning a roulette wheel. Wait a second, I just read that there was a chance to get an extra character, but where is it on this wheel? After examining it closely, he noticed that the trait enhancement occupied an incredibly tiny section of the wheel, less than 1 centimeter wide. He immediately became discouraged, saying that he probably wasn't going to get the ability that would let him add another member. The guy even started crying, and John asked what happened. Bob asked if anyone wanted to do the honors and spin the wheel, but nobody wanted to since they were afraid they would bring bad luck. So Bob decided that he would spin it himself, and the wheel immediately began spinning at incredible speed. At one point, he was practically getting dizzy from watching it spin so much, but then the wheel finally stopped, and luckily for the protagonist, it landed exactly where he needed it to. He could hardly believe that it had actually worked. The pointer was sitting directly on the trait enhancement. Bob let out a huge scream, shouting that they had done it. John started crying while Rai clapped her hands, saying it had all happened thanks to the ritual they performed. With that, Bob immediately used the trait enhancement to perform 4 simultaneous summons. Bob even asked if they wanted to celebrate with some fried chicken, and everyone agreed. The scene then shifts to the international airport. The agents were running around frantically. That's because the player Gerald was extremely excited and couldn't wait to finally see the sword. The agents chased after him, telling him that he couldn't just run around the city like that. An older man warned him that running around like this was dangerous because mafia agents could be waiting for them. But the guy was too excited to care, because with the holy sword he could defeat countless monsters and reach the 70th floor, considering he was still stuck on floor 67. Unfortunately, the older man couldn't keep up with the young guys. He eventually fell behind. Most of the others started stopping because they were exhausted. Soon afterward, an employee from Korea's awakened agency welcomed Mr. Gerald. The guy barely even acknowledged him and simply asked where the holy sword was, telling them to bring it out quickly because he was in a hurry. The employee scanned his biometrics, allowing them to open the door to the sacred vault and retrieve the item. Gerald was amazed because the vault contained countless mythical and legendary items. As soon as he spotted the holy sword, he announced that the $10 million had already been transferred and asked if he could take it. The moment he touched the sword, he felt its overwhelming power, and he immediately headed for the Black Tower to test it against the monsters. 20 minutes later, he was blown away by the sword's power and said he would definitely rent it again. adding that he had already spent $20 million just testing it because each use cost $10 million. The next morning, our protagonist woke up in his bed. Today was the day of the summoning, and he was doing his best to stay calm. That was because Rai had warned him that greed brought bad luck, so he needed to keep the day completely peaceful and avoid making selfish wishes. He climbed out of bed in a rather pathetic way, literally rolling onto the floor. Instead of treating himself to expensive, delicious food, he simply made some coffee and ate instant noodles. Soon after, he summoned his 3 companions, and all of them appeared looking tense. With his hand extended, he activated the random summoning to find out who his new companion would be. A purple light began glowing, and after a small explosion, they saw a tiny helmet with a little ear and a hamster-like mouth. This was Rick, the tiny mouse he had summoned. When Bob realized it was a hamster, he was extremely disappointed. However, the 3 summoned companions thought the little mouse was adorable and kept saying how cute he was. Still, Bob sensed a slightly sinister aura coming from him, so he ended up unsummoning the little guy, saying he would use his random summoning item again and try to get someone stronger. At this point, I was already hoping he would summon another girl, because so far it was looking like nothing but guys. But then a light began to shine. This was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The new summon was an LSSR, meaning Legendary Super Special Rare. Bob was thrilled because this was far more powerful than he had expected. A cloak suddenly appeared, and from beneath it emerged an incredibly powerful immortal Taoist. When Bob checked his information, he was shocked. He was then pulled into the old man's memories. He found himself in an era when a nation had been thrown into chaos by the ambitions of those in power. A Murim war had erupted because a taboo had been broken, and this old man had eliminated numerous rivals who were competing for the throne. He was the leader of a demonic cult, guys. When Bob returned to reality, he realized that he had summoned someone truly evil. The old man asked whether those 3 summoned beings were the summoner's companions, and Bob said they were. The old man immediately said he could unsummon all 3 of them because they were pathetic, and he alone was more than capable of clearing every floor of the tower. He even asked what the highest floor they had reached in this world was. Bob told him it was floor 67. The old man then explained that once they surpassed floor 70, towers around the world would begin collapsing. The collapse of a tower was an omen of destruction, and once the first tower fell, all the others would collapse one after another. That was because the difficulty beyond floor 70 would become so extreme that no country would be capable of clearing it. However, this nation called Korea had nothing to worry about, because this old Taoist monk would be more than capable of clearing the tower. Then, as he turned around, the old man declared that Korea would be the only country left standing. Bob asked, "What does this old man mean by that?" The Taoist master began laughing and explained that, to guarantee the survival of the world, he would conquer the entire planet and bring every country to its knees before his summoner. He would begin his plan by taking over Korea. He also told his summoner not to worry because he would return shortly after eliminating all of Korea's politicians. The 3 summoned companions immediately prepared for battle and even remarked that the old man was completely insane. The Taoist turned around and asked whether those 3 insects were showing murderous intent toward him, adding that eliminating all of them would be effortless. Bob said he understood everything, then extended his hands and unsummoned the old man, saying that he was far too dangerous. The old man then began disappearing. 3 hours later, they summoned Rick again, the same hamster from before. They even said that he was much better. The little mouse had no idea what was going on, since it seemed like he hadn't exactly been welcomed the first time around. But between this little mouse and that crazy old man, the mouse was definitely the better choice. The scene then shifts to the international airport. The Americans said they were extremely happy to have rented the holy sword and even asked for a discount, since they planned to make the sword one of that man's main weapons. Because of that, paying $10 million every time they rented it would get expensive. The Korean employee asked if he was seriously asking for a discount, but since this would be a long-term alliance, they ultimately decided to work out some kind of contract. As they shook hands, the American asked which player had obtained the sword. The Korean employee refused to tell him. After finishing their negotiations, the bald man decided to leave and said his goodbyes. By this point, the Americans had already reached the Under 67, where they faced the Ghost Reaper monster. They still had plenty of time, but they planned to push forward as quickly as possible by using the holy sword. Meanwhile, the employee was thrilled and said he would tell Bob that the boy had earned a total of $20 million. Back at the apartment, the little mouse was getting ready to perform a massive cleaning operation. Everyone found it strange when the mouse asked them to lift their feet, but then he zipped across the floor, polishing it as he went. Within seconds, he had removed all the dust and cleaned every corner of the apartment. He even collected the trash and organized everything, leaving the entire place sparkling clean. Bob immediately admitted that this was seriously impressive. Rick continued gathering the dirty laundry and started the washing machine, putting everything in to be cleaned. This little mouse was an incredibly hard worker. He tossed the equipment into the air and stored everything inside his tiny backpack. Rai came running over and hugged Rick, telling him how adorable he was. After all that hard work, Bob said he had bought some trail mix for him to eat, and the little mouse became extremely happy. Next, Bob whispered to his companions and asked what they thought about their new teammate. Gobang said the little mouse was extremely weak and even thought he would probably cause more trouble than he was worth inside the towers. While they were whispering about the mouse, the little guy suddenly appeared and announced that he had already finished eating, catching everyone off guard. To test him, Bob suggested that Rick clean the 41st floor of the tower, and the little mouse said he was fine with it. The mission on the 41st floor was to defeat 15 basilisks. These basilisks, guys, were giant lizards covered in sharp spikes. Just looking into their eyes was enough to freeze anyone with fear. But Gobang knew that kind of thing was completely useless against them, and he proceeded to take down every basilisk. He cracked his knuckles. Bob said he would train as well, hoping to get stronger by defeating the creatures himself. However, John appeared and told Summoner Bob to stay put, since Bob needed to keep an eye on the little mouse because Rick looked completely defenseless. They even pointed out that one wrong move could get the group's 4th member killed. But when Bob first saw the little mouse, he also received memories from Rick's past and discovered that the creature was actually an incredibly skilled worker. He could cook, do laundry, and even gather herbs to use in their meals. He was also highly skilled at mining, but one day, he was eaten by an evil serpent. Back in the present, Rai was using her buffs to protect everyone, allowing Gobang to gain immense strength and send the basilisks flying from one side to the other. With Rai's buffs boosting him as well, John was also able to slice through the monsters with ease. At that moment, Bob realized that Rick was no longer standing beside him. Wait a second, wasn't the little guy right here? Where did he go? Then he heard a noise and noticed that the little creature seemed to be rummaging through the body of one of the monsters. So he used shadow steps to reach the hamster as quickly as possible. But by the time he got there, Rick had already disappeared. He was near a tree, apparently gathering some plants. Then he suddenly started moving incredibly fast, picking up all kinds of items from the ground. He was able to move that quickly because he rolled around like a ball. Just then, Bob shouted when he realized that his companions had completed the tower mission. They all immediately returned to the apartment. Rick slammed into the floor and started crying, making everyone worry as they asked whether he had been hurt. The little guy said he was fine. He hadn't been injured. He was actually crying because the tower raid had ended so quickly that he hadn't had enough time to collect many items. When he opened his backpack, he dumped out all kinds of mythical plants and herbs, along with several basilisk hides. On top of that, he had collected around 20 kilograms of mana stones. He was upset because he hadn't managed to gather enough materials. Bob, however, thought this was absolutely incredible. Rick's ability was to gather resources inside the tower, something that was practically impossible for ordinary players. At first, many players had tried storing items in their inventories, but once they returned to their apartments, they discovered that they couldn't take anything from inside the tower with them. The only items they could bring outside were rewards they received for completing a tower and earning them as bonuses, and those rewards were extremely rare. Rick could get around this restriction because of his magical backpack. Rai thought he was so adorable that she started squeezing his cheeks, her eyes practically sparkling as she called the little hamster adorable. Bob asked how many items Rick could bring out of the tower if they stayed inside for longer. The hamster said he could bring back 10 times as much as he had collected this time. Naturally, that immediately caught our protagonist's attention. He started calculating how much money he could make from this and quickly became extremely greedy. He crouched down and asked the little mouse if he wanted to go back into the tower, but Rick said he could only do it again tomorrow. However, our protagonist had obtained the ability to explore the towers twice a day, so they immediately headed back inside. When they reached the 41st floor, Bob was thrilled at the thought of bringing out a huge amount of loot. And just like that, all 5 of them entered together. Once they arrived, Bob explained that they would intentionally take things a little slower so Rick would have plenty of time to collect items. John and Gobang agreed, saying they would defeat the monsters slowly so they could keep moving forward at a controlled pace. However, a tremendous noise suddenly startled everyone. It was a gigantic basilisk. This basilisk had heavily armored skin that was extremely valuable. Gobang immediately transformed, grabbed the monster by the tail, and slammed it into the ground with all his strength. He then pointed toward Rick and told him that he could strip the monster's hide and sell it. But Rick started crying, saying Gobang had attacked the creature so brutally that he had completely ruined its skin. John immediately became angry and told Gobang to stop being so reckless. He even pointed out to the others that the lizard's hide had been badly damaged and was therefore worthless. So Bob decided to use his golden mace. He figured that defeating the monster with that weapon would leave its skin perfectly intact. But Rick explained that the hide would freeze and shatter into pieces. Besides, the summoner wouldn't have to fight at all and could remain safely out of harm's way. So the best approach was to have Rai use her debuffs to weaken the basilisk, then break its legs to immobilize it, after which John would strike the creature directly in the head and finish it off. That way the monster's hide would remain completely intact. Rick immediately pulled out his small knife and began skinning the monster. And he did it incredibly fast, guys. It was obvious that the little guy knew exactly what he was doing, and in no time he had removed the entire hide, leaving the lizard with nothing but its flesh and making Bob recoil at how horrifying the scene looked. Within just a few seconds, he had completely stripped the basilisk. The 3 companions stared in amazement, praising Rick's incredible skill. As they continued taking down more basilisks using the same strategy, Rick kept removing their hides. Eventually, he announced that his backpack was completely full. While looking at the boots our protagonist had purchased, he realized just how valuable monster leather really was, since items made from it could sell for a fortune. And it wasn't just used to make adventure equipment, guys, because expensive handbags for famous models were also made from this kind of leather. Bob even started thinking that if he used the summoner rank enhancement rune on Rick, the little guy might be able to bring back even more items from inside the dungeons. When they returned to the apartment, Bob began praising Rick. They had managed to collect 7 complete basilisk hides, along with 1 additional piece of basilisk leather. On top of that, they brought back 50 kilograms of mana stones, and even more medicinal herbs. Bob remembered the little guy saying he could bring back 10 times as much. And sure enough, he was telling the truth. Using the system window, Bob stored everything inside his inventory. Not only could the little guy collect all those items from inside the dungeons, but he also kept. His biggest headache now was figuring out how to save 10 billion won for the massive apartment he wanted, because his current place was starting to feel pretty cramped. The penthouse in the building he had his eyes on was ridiculously expensive, so he was going to need a whole lot more money. Then his phone buzzed with a message informing him that the sacred sword had been rented twice. After doing the math, he realized that meant roughly $10 million. Bob immediately started sweating because that was exactly the amount of money he needed. He even began thanking the Americans for renting his sword so many times. Then he suddenly clapped his hands loudly, grabbing the attention of his companions. They all came over, waiting for their master to make an announcement, and Bob pulled up the information on his laptop before telling them that they were all moving into that penthouse. Rian asked if they were seriously going to live in a palace, while Gobang looked genuinely amazed. John, meanwhile, wanted to know whether they could actually take care of a house that big. Luckily, they could keep the entire place clean thanks to Rick. That was when John finally understood why the little hamster was so useful. Replacing that nasty old man with the hard-working hamster had definitely been worth it. Rick was even more valuable than an LSSR summon. The next day, Bob went over to his parents' house, where his father asked why the boy seemed so excited. Apparently, his dad had caught a huge fish the previous week. Bob asked whether his father's back pain had gotten any better, and he said it had. That was all thanks to the talisman Rai had given Bob, which he had eventually passed on to his parents. And that talisman had brought them an incredible amount of good luck. Just then, Bob noticed that his mother had bought a gigantic air purifier that cost a ridiculous amount of money. Sitting on top of a massage chair, his mother explained that she had won both the chair and the air conditioner in a raffle. When Bob's brother arrived, he asked whether anything lucky had happened to him that week too. His brother said his aim had been ridiculously good in the shooting game he was playing. And when he went to buy a soda from a vending machine at college, he realized he was a few cents short. Fortunately, he found a coin on the ground that was exactly enough to cover the difference. Wait a second. Yan when second. That's all the luck you've gotten, buddy. Bob realized that the luck had worked wonders for his parents, but his brother had gotten a pretty pathetic version of it. Outside, Bob was saying goodbye to his brother when his brother asked whether he wanted him to call a taxi. Bob climbed into a limousine and said that wouldn't be necessary. That was when his brother finally realized just how important Bob had become. Yeah, I guess elite players really do have their own private drivers. Feeling embarrassed, Bob told the department employee that there was no need to keep sending limousines for him because it made him uncomfortable. The employee, however, knew they had to treat Bob extremely well because he could either leave Korea or end up being kidnapped by the Chinese mafia. So he was genuinely happy to finally meet Bob in person. Bob had mentioned during their phone call that he wanted to show the employee some items in a spacious location because the things were extremely large. For that reason, they decided to head over to the department's special materials warehouse. When they arrived, Bob warned the employee that the items he was about to take out of his inventory were enormous, so he told the man not to be too shocked. The employee laughed and assured him that he was extremely experienced at appraising items, so there was no way he would be surprised. Bob then pulled the enormous hide of a basilisk out of his inventory. The man had never expected something that massive to suddenly appear from the inventory, so he fell flat on the floor in sheer shock. He simply couldn't believe Bob had managed to bring something that incredible out of the tower. Bob jokingly reminded him that he had warned him not to get scared. The employee asked whether that was really the hide of an iron basilisk, and Bob confirmed it before asking if he wanted him to bring out the rest of the hides. The man stared at him and asked if there were actually more. In the most casual way possible, Bob told him that there were 6 more just like it. The employee was completely stunned as he realized this kid was truly extraordinary. Bob then brought out all the hides, along with the herbs and mana stones. The moment the man looked at the herbs, he realized they could be worth an enormous amount of money, since all the herbs they had obtained in the past were dried and processed. These ones, however, were completely fresh. He couldn't help wondering how Bob had managed to bring all of this out of the tower. Feeling a little embarrassed, Bob asked how much the employee thought everything was worth. The man admitted that he couldn't put a price on it because he had never seen anything like these items before, and he asked for some extra time to evaluate them. Normally, he could determine an item's value almost instantly, but something of this caliber was completely unprecedented for him. The employee even asked whether Bob had obtained all of this during a single hunt in the tower. Bob simply told him that he had. The man assumed there was no way Bob could possibly bring out more items like these, but Bob casually explained that it wasn't really that difficult. He could supply them on a regular basis. The employee tried to remain calm, but it was only natural that the owner of an S+ record would have his own mysterious methods. He didn't want to ask too many questions, so he immediately told Bob that he would try to sell all the herbs for twice their standard market value. As for the hides, they would put the intact skins up for sale on the civilian market. With a sly grin, Bob agreed to the deal, although he was a little curious and asked whether it was really okay to sell those hides on the civilian market, and the employee assured him that it was. Bob also learned that he had earned $20 million from renting out the sword, and he said he planned to put that money toward buying the apartment at the top of the building. The employee explains that the organization would give him the apartment for free, meaning he wouldn't have to pay a single cent. But with an awkward laugh, he says he doesn't want to owe the organization anything, so instead he decides to pay for it with his own money. Back at the apartment, John announces that he will be in charge of today's briefing. Since he was the first summon and Bob's right-hand man, he was the most reliable person to handle the presentation. First, they needed to clear floors 42 through 45 and collect as many basilisk skins as possible. Rick raises his hand, and John tells him that he's free to ask his question. The little mouse wants to know whether they'll be collecting the skins from the monsters' tails, and John confirms that they intend to take 100% of the skins. However, the iron-jawed basilisk on floor 42 and the spiked scale basilisk on floor 44 don't have particularly valuable hides because those spikes get in the way. Because of that, they'll be skipping those floors and focusing on the others. Their main target is the rainbow basilisk, which is the hardest one to defeat and skin, but also the one worth the most money. Rhea asks whether that basilisk is on floor 45, but John tells her that she isn't allowed to ask anything until she raises her hand, which immediately gets the girl annoyed. John is acting incredibly arrogant, claiming that today he's the highest authority because player Bob delegated the briefing to him. To avoid any more trouble, Rhea raises her hand and asks permission to speak, and John tells her to go ahead. She then asks why they're stopping at floor 45 just to farm materials when they could keep climbing and hunt more valuable monsters on the higher floors. John explains that once they pass floor 45 and reach floor 46, insects start appearing, and they don't have any valuable skins. So it makes much more sense to stay on floor 45 and farm rainbow basilisks. He even calls it a gold mine, especially since Bob is broke after spending all his money on the apartment. And because the rainbow basilisk is the boss, they'll have to skin it as quickly as possible, since defeating the boss causes them to be transmigrated back to the apartment almost immediately. Rick raises his hand and says he's more than capable of skinning it before they get sent back. Hearing that, Bob lets out a greedy laugh as he realizes just how much money they could make. The next day, the scene shifts to an HG building. A woman is staring at a sales analysis spreadsheet for the brand. She had invested everything into this launch, but the numbers were absolutely miserable. This woman is Iona, the CEO of HG, and she's sitting there completely depressed, convinced that the company is headed for bankruptcy. An employee arrives and informs her that a message has come from the Awakened Management Department. They've made a request and are specifically demanding that the company's CEO come in person. However, the woman isn't feeling very well. After letting out a sigh, she tells him to send the vice president instead. The employee agrees and leaves. But the woman suddenly becomes thoughtful and calls out for him to wait. She apologizes, explaining that she's been extremely nervous lately, and asks him to hand over the documents because she has decided to go to the department herself and find out what they want. When they reach floor 42, the protagonist is brimming with confidence, wearing his armor and carrying his mace. His shield is incredibly powerful, but he still hasn't had a chance to use it, and like a stallion ready for battle, he's completely fired up and eager to take down the monsters. His companions, however, tell him to calm down. He immediately starts charging around like a maniac, trying to kill the monsters. The basilisk swings its tail at him, but by using Shadow Step, he easily dodges the attack. He's moving so quickly that the creature doesn't even have a chance of hitting him. He charges his mace and gets ready to smash the creature's head, but before he can even do anything, they've already cleared the floor. That's because his summons are ridiculously powerful. After returning to the apartment, they prepare some noodles to eat. They decide to take a short break before exploring that same floor for a second time. When they return, they choose to slow down the gathering process a little, so Rick has enough time to collect every skin. And they repeat this process several times, guys. Rick keeps stacking more and more items in his inventory until they finally reach floor 45. Their target is the rainbow basilisk. The moment Bob sees the monster's shining hide for the first time, all he can think about is the money. He immediately activates his buffs, with Gobang acting as the tank and John taking on the role of a true assassin. Everything is focused on collecting those valuable basilisk skins. Eventually, they come face to face with the dungeon's final boss, the rainbow basilisk. They need to bring the monster down as quickly as possible so Rick can strip off its entire hide. From a distance, Bob watches nervously, worried that their plan might fail. The little hamster is standing by, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And once they finally take the monster down, it's Rick's turn to enter the battlefield. He rolls forward at full speed and immediately begins using his techniques to skin the monster. His little hooks latch onto the creature, and he rolls away, pulling the hide off as he goes. Just like that, he successfully removes the skin and stuffs it into his tiny backpack. Everyone throws the hamster into the air, praising him for doing an exceptional job. When they return to the apartment, Bob starts worrying because Rick is crying after they failed several times during training. But thankfully, they managed to collect those white rainbow basilisk skins twice. Now that everything is finally working out, Bob realizes that the team has truly fallen into sync, and that everyone is getting along extremely well. At that moment, he opens the system window. It was time to check his rewards, and he discovers that he now has a total of 45 platinum badges. He's worried because he hasn't earned nearly as many badges as he wanted, and he was hoping to summon another summon while Rai keeps asking why her master looks so sad. She even tells him not to worry because they'll make a huge fortune on their next tower expedition. John also tells Summoner Bob to come up with a strategy once his mind is clear. He had received an encouragement bonus from his summons, but what he really wanted, guys, was a new summoning stone. As soon as he touches the system window, he anxiously waits to see what bonus item he's going to receive. The result is that he receives a bonus item, which turns out to be a multinational tower access ticket. John immediately gets excited and asks if it is a summoning stone, but after pulling the ticket out of the system, he realizes that it only allows him to enter a tower located in another country. The guy nearly starts crying, complaining about how unbelievably unlucky he is, and Rai blames herself, but there is nothing they can do about it now, so there's no point crying over spilled milk. Later, to celebrate the fact that they managed to get nothing more than a simple ticket, they decide to throw a feast. Apparently, everything is worth celebrating around here, especially since the guy is already a billionaire. He cracks open a can of booze and even calls John over so they can drink together. John, however, admits that he's not really much of a drinker. At this point, the scene shifts over to the Awakened Management Department. Iona, the CEO of a fashion company, has personally gone to the department herself. When she arrives, she notices that other companies in the same industry have also sent their executives. None of them bothered to come in person as the actual owners or presidents. One of the men introduces himself as Sejum, the executive director of a company called D-Hum Corporation. Iona immediately feels a little awkward because several CEOs were summoned to this awakened department, yet she is the only one who actually showed up in person as the company's owner. Just then, a man walks into the room. This is Jean, the vice commissioner, guys. That's when Iona realizes that she isn't the only important person in the room. Jean is actually the real power behind the awakened department. He's the man who led the project responsible for helping Korea advance so rapidly in tower progression. Naomi becoming the strongest player in Korea was also made possible thanks to Jean. And only now are we finally learning this guy's actual position, guys. He's been appearing since the very first chapter. At that point, Jean realizes that the companies didn't send their actual presidents, but rather representatives with lower positions. So he apologizes to the representatives of those two companies and dismisses them, telling them that he'll schedule another meeting with them later. The men ask why, clearly confused and a little nervous. When Jean explains that the presidents themselves were supposed to come, the representatives immediately say they'll call their superiors and tell the company presidents to come straight to the awakened department. Jean, however, explains that this is simply the company's internal policy, which means they're being dismissed. The men panic, pull out their phones, and immediately start calling their bosses to explain what just happened. Meanwhile, Iona realizes that she was lucky to have come in person instead of sending someone else to represent her. She also came prepared, guys, because she had brought something along in case everything went according to plan. She had brought the Awakened Department designs for armor and weapons that could also be incorporated into the fashion business. Jean realizes that Iona is already one step ahead of the other companies, especially since she showed up personally, instead of sending an employee to represent the CEO. Impressed by the woman, he tells her that he'd like to take her somewhere special. As they make their way deeper into the building, he explains that he's taking her to the storage facility where they keep materials purchased directly from players who bring them back from the towers. He even tells her to put on a coat because it will be extremely cold inside. After putting on some warm clothing, they finally open the enormous door. The woman looks nervous, so Jean asks them to turn on the lights and tells her not to be frightened. But there was no way she could avoid being stunned by what she saw. Right in front of her were countless basilisk skins. Jean explains that there are only 36 hides stored here, with 2 more being kept somewhere else. Iona had never seen basilisk creatures this enormous, and the hides were practically flawless. It was obvious at a glance that they had been removed with incredible precision, leaving every part of the structure completely intact. She asks whether the Awakened Department intends to make these tower materials available to private companies. Jean confirms that they do. Her eyes immediately light up as she imagines how much money she could make from these materials. With them, she could create the most coveted luxury products in the world. The woman asks where the remaining pieces are, and the man says he was waiting for her to ask. He then shows her a single tail from a rainbow basilisk, and the woman practically loses her mind. When he pulls that enormous piece out of the system, she even covers her face because of how intense the shine is. A hide this beautiful could be turned into incredibly valuable products. She becomes extremely excited and asks the department to sell all of these pieces to her immediately. She wants exclusive rights to them, especially since she was the only CEO who came there in person. Jean tells her that he wants her to keep everything they've discussed a secret until the skins are officially put up for sale. She says she'll force every employee at her company to sign confidentiality agreements and then asks how much the skins will cost. As he picks up a panel displaying one of the basilisk hides, Jean explains that putting a precise value on these skins is extremely difficult. He then shows her a hide that is badly damaged and has also faded over time because it wasn't removed properly. He wants her to take this low-quality sample along with another sample of an exceptionally high-quality hide. And he says this with a smile. That's when Iona realizes that this guy is definitely not an ordinary man. The scene then cuts back to our protagonist's apartment. The building is so luxurious that it even has an elevator on the outside. Having been poor his entire life, the guy is completely amazed, saying that his life has gone from rags to riches. When he reaches the top floor, an employee greets him and says they'll fulfill whatever he asks of them 24 hours a day. The employee also explains that since his apartment is the presidential-level residence of the building, it has a private elevator that goes directly into his room. To get inside, he swipes his card and then jumps straight into the apartment. The place is absolutely massive, guys. It looks like a freaking soccer stadium. And right after that, he summons all of his friends. John immediately heads for the little throne, saying that the toilet is so enormous that it would practically be a crime not to use it. Rai keeps pointing out that the palace is so enormous that it even has an elevator inside. Gobang says the ceiling is so high that he could probably jump several times without hitting it. There is even a movie theater equipped with all kinds of the latest video games. On top of that, the place has 8 refrigerators, 11 bathrooms, and one more special feature. Bob grabs the remote and presses a button. The curtains slide open by themselves, revealing a magnificent view from high above. They never imagined they would ever be able to own something like this. The boy even gets teary-eyed as he says that none of this would have been possible without his friends. Bob remembers Jean explaining that they had prepared the entire apartment specifically to make him comfortable. After 2 days, he finally finished moving in and had all of his belongings settled in the new apartment. Now it was time to enjoy the place by throwing a pool party. As Bob lounges around soaking up the sun, he keeps saying that his life now feels like he's living in paradise. Meanwhile, John calls Gobang over so the two of them can pull a prank on Rai. While she's sitting there reading a book, they sneak over, lift her straight out of the chair and toss her into the pool. The moment she climbs back out of the water, she starts casting her curse spell and gives both of them a horrible stomachache. As a result, the two of them have to sprint for the bathroom. Ree climbs out of the pool looking as adorable as ever while Bob asks her if she knows where Rick is. The poor hamster is completely exhausted. That's because he's been trying to prove that he's far more useful than a robot vacuum. But to Rick's surprise, the little robot simply refuses to stop working. Rick wants to prove that he's superior and indispensable to Bob, so he starts cleaning even faster. That's when our protagonist realizes that poor Rick is fighting a one-hamster war against the robot. Meanwhile, Gobang is already completely drained from constantly running to the bathroom. He ends up whispering something into his companion's ear. Gobang then walks over, picks up the robot vacuum, and smashes it into pieces. That finally puts Rick at ease because he no longer has to keep proving that he's useful in the apartment. The poor little guy just wanted to be helpful, guys. On the 4th day, they stop taking it easy and head straight back to the tower. They continue farming the same floors to collect basilisk skins. Jean's assistant goes to Bob's apartment to pick up the skins he had recovered from the towers. She also tells him that there's something she needs to discuss with him. She wants him to stop collecting those skins for the time being. The vice commissioner himself was the one who instructed her to deliver that message to Bob. And there was a reason for it. First, they didn't have the facilities or equipment necessary to process all those skins. Second, they were supplying the skins to a private company. So if they flooded the market with too many hides, their value would drop dramatically. The next day, everyone starts blaming John because he was the one who promised they could make a fortune selling those skins. Rai even gets angry and reminds him that he promised money would be pouring into everyone's accounts. But now that the Awakened department isn't buying the skins anymore, they basically made a terrible investment. Bob says he's simply paying the price for being so bossy during the meeting they had a few weeks earlier. John sits in the back crying while our protagonist tells everyone to stop dwelling on it and focus on climbing the tower instead. Everyone agrees, and they begin making their way to floor 46. There, they encounter a gigantic black scorpion. This is the dungeon section where healing potions become much more important because the monsters start using poison. For Gobang though, that doesn't matter at all because he simply rushes in, kills the monsters almost instantly, and even uses their legs as weapons. He even calls the move his scorpion pincer attack. John isn't about to be outdone either, guys, and he uses his shadow step technique to strike the creatures. Meanwhile, Rai keeps applying buffs, and with a mischievous look on his face, Bob says he's going to take advantage of everyone being distracted and get in on the action. But just then, he hears a strange noise, and when he looks over, he realizes that Rick is busy mining. A few minutes earlier, when they first entered the floor, Rick noticed that there were some extremely valuable ores nearby, so he immediately ran off to start mining. He had become such a hard worker because of the other groups he'd belonged to in the past, where the others constantly pressured him to bring back as much wealth as possible. That's why the little mouse worked like a slave, guys. But after joining Bob's group, where everyone treated him incredibly well, the little mouse finally started to relax. Even so, he tells himself that he can't afford to become lazy because if he becomes useless, Bob will surely abandon him. That's why he works even harder, trying to collect as much ore as possible, so nobody will consider him useless. At that moment, floor 46 is cleared with an S+ rating. The little mouse immediately starts crying because there wasn't enough time for him to collect all the ore. When they return to the apartment, Rick is still crying, so Bob asks whether he's upset because he couldn't fill his backpack. He tells his little friend that there's no reason to be sad, and if he really wants to feel useful, all he has to do is get some rest and prepare for the next dungeon. While Bob is trying to comfort Rick, the other three are arguing in the background. Rick is touched because the young master genuinely cares about him. I'll admit, guys, I felt pretty bad for Rick at this point. Right afterward, Bob opens his backpack to see what the little mouse managed to bring back. 10 days pass, and the scene shifts to the Awakened Management Building. Jean receives a notification from the United Arab Emirates. They had come under attack, and as a result, they had lost the powerful players they once had. The director tells Jean that the United Arab Emirates can no longer get past floor 60 because their strongest players were killed. To make matters worse, the UAE's tower is located very close to an oil field. That means it would be extremely dangerous if the tower were to collapse. After 10 days, they had already accumulated a huge amount of ore, and Bob finally realizes just how useful Rick really is, guys. That little guy was genuinely making Bob richer and richer. Bob even asked Gobang to transform into his giant form so he could help store all those minerals inside the system. After storing so much ore, he was completely exhausted, and he still had to go to the Awakened Company to sell all those minerals. Jean came to pick up our protagonist in a limousine. Bob says it's a little embarrassing for a commissioner from the Awakened Management Department to come all the way to his apartment just to pick him up, but Jean explains that it's simply part of his job. He also explains that Bob's holy sword is going to be rented by Norway, which is trying to reach floor 66. The sword hasn't been getting rented very often because it's only useful on the higher floors, and there aren't that many countries operating at such high levels. Even so, every time he lends out the sword, he makes $10 million. Bob starts thinking about spending that money on a farm. That way, Rai could use her magic to make the plants grow while Rick and Gobang handled the harvesting. Naturally, right? At this point, Jean explains to Bob that the global situation surrounding the towers has become extremely chaotic. One of Japan's strongest players retired after losing 2 battles in a row. The guy was so devastated by the defeats that he withdrew from society and became a shut-in who never left his house. And China's situation was even worse. They couldn't get past floor 59, and they were even considering giving Russia a piece of Chinese territory in exchange for Russia's assistance. The Prince of the United Arab Emirates personally traveled to Korea to request the temporary naturalization of one of Korea's 2 strongest players. Bob asks whether Rio, that X-Men guy, isn't Korean anymore, and Jean tells him that he isn't. That means Korea's 2 strongest players at the moment are Naomi and Bob himself. The kid is completely shocked and asks how the Prince of Arabia even knows about him. Jean explains that it's because he's the holder of the S+ record. The only problem is that nobody knows the record belongs specifically to Bob, right? All they know is that the record holder is Korean. Scratching his cheek, the kid says they could simply ask the neighboring countries for help, since there are several nations nearby that might be willing to assist. Jean explains that the United Arab Emirates doesn't exactly have good relations with its neighbors, and it all comes down to their disputes over oil. He even explains that Saudi Arabia has made a request. They want the Evolution Stone as well as some territory belonging to the United Arab Emirates. Bob asks whether he could request an enhancement trait rune as part of the payment. Jean tells him that reaching an agreement like that isn't going to be easy. He also explains that those runes are incredibly rare. Bob knows that better than anyone because he's been trying to farm one for a very long time. When he reaches the storage facility, he's stunned by the sheer number of skins piled up inside. He even asks Jean if he'd like to see all the other materials he's collected over the past few days. The guy thinks to himself that he shouldn't get too excited because Bob always seems to show up with something completely ridiculous. Bob then pulls out what appears to be a blue mana stone, and Jean looks slightly disappointed, thinking he may have set his expectations too high. But the moment Bob pulls the stone out, Jean realizes that it's not a mana stone at all, but an actual piece of ore. Bob gives him a thumbs up, impressed that Jean recognized it so quickly. Looking at Bob's innocent little face, Jean can't help wondering how the kid managed to bring raw ore out of the dungeon. Normally, the minerals they received as stage-clear rewards were already purified. Bob then asks if he can take all the minerals out of his inventory. Jean stares at him and asks, "What do you mean? You have more?" Bob simply tells him that he does, and that there's a lot more. He immediately starts unloading all the minerals. Several minutes pass, and items just keep pouring out of the system window without stopping. Looking at Bob, Jean realizes that no matter how high he sets his expectations, this player somehow always manages to exceed them. After a while, they finish sorting everything out, and the minerals fill 4 enormous containers. Jean estimates that once everything is weighed, the total comes to roughly 35 tons. And of course, the kid is already grinning at the thought of all that money landing in his account. They start calculating the value while Bob listens carefully. The raw ore still needs to be refined, of course, but even using a rough estimate, they determine that Bob should receive a total of 9 billion W. If they manage to extract more than 50%, which is what they expect, they'll pay Bob the difference, and the 2 sides finalize the contract. Jean even bows to thank Bob for being generous enough to sell them all those materials, which leaves the protagonist feeling a little embarrassed. In reality, Bob thinks Jean should be the one thanking him, so he starts bowing as well, forcing Jean to quickly tell him to stand up. The truth is, Bob was becoming a millionaire, guys. Back at the apartment, John is busy eating potato chips. Meanwhile, Rick is cleaning at top speed. The little guy really is a hard worker. The problem is that while Rick is cleaning, John is sitting there eating chips and making an even bigger mess, while Rai watches him with an angry expression. That's when John suggests that they make a bet. They want to guess how much Bob will earn from selling all those minerals. John predicts that it'll be 500 million. Rian puts her money on 1 billion. John starts teasing her, saying that's way too much and accusing her of being greedy. Gobang, who has absolutely no idea how numbers work, just throws out a random guess because he assumes bigger must be better, and says 10 billion. Everyone starts making fun of him even more, saying that Gobang clearly has no understanding of numbers. Just then, John senses the young master's presence and immediately takes off running as fast as he can. A moment later, Bob walks into the apartment and is greeted by all of his summons. John is holding a vacuum cleaner and welcomes his master home. Bob notices that even John has been working. He goes over and praises John for helping out, while Rai realizes that the bastard only ran away so he could pretend he had been doing something useful. This guy is Esparto. The group gathers together to find out how much the minerals were sold for. When Bob announces that they went for 9.4 billion W, John immediately starts looking uncomfortable. Our protagonist confirms that yes, that's exactly how much they made. That means Gobang is the one who won the bet. Rai runs over with Bob, and together they start tossing Rick into the air while celebrating and saying it was all thanks to him. John, meanwhile, is absolutely terrified because whoever lost the bet was supposed to get flicked by the winner. That's why Gobang suddenly appears behind John, getting ready to deliver the punishment. John desperately begs Bob to cancel the summon. Gobang tells him that Joe isn't getting away, grabs him by the head with one hand, winds up, and delivers a massive flick that sends John flying. Poor John gets completely flattened. Meanwhile, Bob is busy swimming in his newfound wealth. The news reports that the Prince of the United Arab Emirates is in Korea searching for the country's 2 strongest players so he can make a contract with them. Everyone on social media is talking about it as well. Bob turns on the TV and sees the reports, including the news that they still haven't managed to clear floor 60. If they can't finish it, the tower will probably collapse and kill thousands of people. Bob starts thinking that if he wants to help, he'll have to rush through the tower, reach floor 60, and then use that ticket to assist the United Arab Emirates. Right afterward, Bob asks John if he's doing okay, since he's sitting there with a bandage on his forehead. John assures him that he's an SSR, so a simple flick like that isn't going to kill him. At this point, the protagonist explains that his goal is to summon another member for their team, so they enter floor 50, where they have to defeat 60 scorpions of any type as well as the Scorpion King. While the others fight, Bob and Rick stay hidden so they don't get poisoned. Bob realizes that these poisonous monsters are becoming increasingly difficult to deal with, which means they'll need another team member. Just then, the Scorpion King grabs Gobang with its claws. Gobang counters by grabbing the pincers and throwing the scorpion away. John finishes the job by slicing the monster in half. Bob hopes that his next summon will at least be someone capable of attacking from a distance. Rick gets called over by Bob and he notices that the hamster is worried about the young master. They finish the stage and manage to earn another S+ rating. With that done, they return to the apartment. John asks what kind of benefit they're going to receive next. Since they cleared the stage and earned the medals, Bob is now allowed to spin the roulette. But before doing it, Bob gives a little speech about how much he's changed since meeting all of them. He had spent his entire life as a coward with no friends, but then he met his new companions and started fighting alongside them in the tower. That's why he's incredibly grateful to every one of them. His speech is enough to bring tears to the eyes of his summons. From now on, he'll continue trusting his friends and doing everything he can to protect them. He opens the system window and says that he hopes to receive the ability to summon a new companion. He spends 50 platinum badges to spin the roulette. And what he gets is another ticket that allows him to enter a multinational tower. He's so disappointed that he simply drops the ticket on the floor. Completely furious, he asks whether the system is actually messing with him. He even throws himself onto the floor and starts throwing a full-blown tantrum. John stands there trying to figure out why the system keeps doing this to them. Rian blames herself, and while bowing down, she says that everything is her fault. Now they'll have to complete a whole bunch of additional dungeon missions to earn enough badges to spin the roulette again. And starting from floor 51, things are going to get even harder. So they look toward Rick and start considering whether they should remove him from the team. Bob asks if they're seriously suggesting that because he promised nobody would ever be kicked out. Bob even says the fairest solution would be to dismiss all of them and summon that crazy demon, the old man who's completely out of his mind. Rhea warns that bringing that guy back would be extremely dangerous and says they could simply try to obtain another enhancement stone, because there are plenty of other ways to get one. That's when Bob realizes he has an extra item and says he has an idea because he knows someone who owns an enhancement stone. The scene then shifts to a luxurious hotel in the capital of Korea. The Prince of the United Arab Emirates is sitting there practically crying and begging because nobody is willing to help him. He's desperate because they only have 15 days left to clear the tower from floor 60 onward before it collapses. To negotiate for an enhancement stone, they are willing to offer $1 billion and an entire gas field. On top of that, they can provide 10 tons of magic stones, 10 tons of tower metal, and 10,000 hides. But because Korea refuses to provide 2 players to help them, the prince fears that he'll have no choice but to make a deal with Saudi Arabia. and making a deal with Saudi Arabia would be catastrophic because they demanded everything the United Arab Emirates had to offer. Just then the prince notices someone approaching, and the person who arrives with security guards is none other than John. He's carrying 2 weapons on his back. The prince immediately panics, assuming an intruder has come to kidnap him. But John simply disappears and reappears behind him, telling the man to stay perfectly still. With an intimidating attitude, he drops into the armchair, tosses his weapon and shield onto the table, and orders the prince to sit down as well. The sheer aura and pressure coming from John forces the man into the chair almost involuntarily, and John then holds up a little note telling him to call a Korean translator. The prince realizes that this might be his chance to ask for help. He asks if he can use the phone for a moment and immediately calls for assistance. Within moments, several of the prince's guards rush into the room. One of them demands to know who this man is and how he dares threaten the crown prince. But in less than a second, John takes care of all of them, slicing their weapons into pieces and ordering the guards to bring him a Korean translator immediately. The guard can't understand how any of this was possible, especially how a man managed to cut their weapons apart with nothing but a dagger. On top of that, the man's aura is absolutely terrifying, almost as frightening as the monsters lurking inside the dungeons. The translator finally arrives and asks what's going on. John says he'll get straight to the point and asks them to bring him the attribute enhancement rune. The crown prince refuses and tells him that if he's planning to kill him, he might as well go ahead. John then tells him that he'll clear the UAE's tower from floor 60 and reach floor 61 in less than 6 months. He guarantees it to the crown prince. Since nobody believes him, John asks them to bring in a player so he can use his system ability. The prince brings in a 27-year-old rising star from the United Arab Emirates. John tells the player to come closer and analyze the item, assuring him that he isn't there to hurt anyone and only wants to make a deal. The player cautiously approaches while the prince warns him to be careful. John then hands him the ticket that allows a player to access a tower in another country. The UAE player examines the ticket and confirms that it's a multinational tower access pass. He explains this to the prince, saying that the player sitting in front of them could use that ticket to enter the UAE's tower. John also says that he brought 2 items directly from the towers as gifts to make the deal more convincing. The player uses his system window to examine them, and confirms that they're both incredibly valuable items. He gets excited and says he'd love to try them out, even telling the prince that the shield and mace aren't ordinary items that can be easily found. The prince asks if the only thing they want in exchange is the attribute enhancement rune. John confirms that it is and says he'll clear the tower in 15 days. The prince asks how he's supposed to trust this player's promise, and John tells him that he gives him his word. He then says his name is Gobang after the prince asks who he is, and adds that he's being extremely generous because he could simply torture everyone there and take the rune for free. The prince realizes that this man possesses overwhelming strength and even suspects that he might be the player responsible for those S++ records. So he orders them to bring out the enhancement rune and hands it over to John, asking whether he truly promises to clear the UAE's tower. John says yes and asks whether the prince is satisfied with the deal, since it was important that the prince felt the exchange was fair. Once the prince agrees, John smiles and immediately jumps off the building. The prince begs Mr. Gobang to truly conquer the tower on his behalf. Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Bob is worried about whether John will actually manage to negotiate the deal. He's afraid his summon might end up killing everyone. Thinking he may need the help of that crazy demon, he decides to summon the old man. The old man appears looking as imposing as ever. He says he's extremely happy that his summoner brought him back, and even explains that he's spent a lot of time thinking about what Bob told him last time. He realized that his extreme methods weren't particularly effective and could cause unwanted side effects. He then opens a can of soda and offers one to Summoner Bob, saying that he's going to change the way he does things. Our protagonist isn't exactly convinced by this guy because he changed so much in such a short amount of time, right? Even so, Bob decides to hear what the old demon has to offer. The old man explains that since the United States is currently the dominant country in the world, he'll simply turn America into a puppet state. He'll use his power to turn people into puppets and control the country's president. If he does that, he can conquer the world peacefully, but if they refuse to cooperate, he'll simply destroy everything with bombs. Our protagonist immediately realizes that this old man hasn't changed at all. He's just as crazy as ever. With tears in his eyes, John says there's no other choice and that he'll have to cancel the summon. The old man is sent away, and John even gives the old guy a 1-point rating. Shortly afterward, John returns and announces that the negotiation was a success. He's looking incredibly proud of himself as he lets out a little laugh, and Bob asks if it actually worked. "Just tell me, John, did you bring the enhancement rune?" John says yes and holds out his hands, handing the rune over to Bob. The scene shifts to the following day. It was finally time for him to make his new summon. First, he goes to the bathroom, takes a shower, and trims his nails. He even spends some time meditating. He does all of this to prepare himself for the long-awaited moment when he can finally make his new summon. Holding the rune in his hand, he's just about to place it into the system window. As soon as he does, he starts praying that the new summon will be someone capable of attacking from a distance. The system tells him to eat the rune, so he puts it in his mouth and swallows it. His level increases, allowing him to summon 5 creatures at the same time. The kid celebrates because it actually worked. He then summons all his other companions so they can watch. With all four of them gathered together, John starts bragging about how the entire thing was possible thanks to his negotiations. But before they summon the new member, John says he'll explain how floors 51 and beyond work. The next monsters they'll be facing are glyphs. He launches into a detailed explanation and keeps reminding everyone that Bob only got the enhancement rune because of his negotiation skills. Once the explanation is over, our protagonist tells everyone that they need to welcome their new teammate. He reaches out his hand and begins the summoning process. Everyone is hoping that the new member will be someone with long-range attacks. And then a beautiful woman begins to appear. We soon discover that she's an elite sniper of an extremely rare class named Veronica. Rhea immediately gets a little jealous because there's now another woman on the team besides her. And the shameless Bob is already thrilled because not only is she a woman, but she also appears to have long-range attacks. When everyone welcomes her, they realize that she's asleep. They start wondering what happened to her because she doesn't seem to be doing very well. At that moment, she sucks up some drool, making John shudder and complain that it's absolutely disgusting. The girl asks where she is, and Bob even wonders why she was sleeping in the first place. She immediately snaps to attention and introduces herself as Sergeant Veronica. Bob welcomes her to the team and tells her that she is officially one of them now. However, the girl simply goes right back to sleep. John, meanwhile, is furious and admits that he already doesn't like this woman. He even salutes before breaking down in tears and apologizing to Bob, saying that he was the one who obtained the enhancement rune and caused this defective summon. But Bob tells him to stop judging her and see whether she's actually strong before making any conclusions. To figure out why she keeps falling asleep, Bob decides to access her memories, sending him back into Veronica's past. She had lived in a parallel universe where her world was under attack by incredibly powerful creatures. As a sniper, she spent day after day fighting those monsters to protect the castle. She pushed her energy to its absolute limit, all for the sake of defending that castle. After fighting non-stop for 100 days without getting any sleep, she finally succeeded in protecting the castle. However, when everyone arrived, they discovered that she was already in terrible condition. And just like that, Veronica died from sleep deprivation. She had spent more than 100 straight days fighting without sleeping. When Bob tells John the story, he gets even angrier and demands to know where this new recruit lost her military discipline, then smacks her on the head and tells her to do her duty. Unfortunately, he hits her way too hard, which immediately makes Veronica angry. She gets to her feet and gives him a terrifying look before asking if he wants to die. She raises her weapon toward his stomach and warns him that she's going to make him regret it. She even asks whether her bullets would be able to pierce the stomach of an SSR. After firing the shot, Bob tells her to try getting along with the other members, and she responds, "Yes, sir, Captain." The group then heads to floor 51, and when they arrive, they discover that Veronica is still asleep. Bob wonders how she's supposed to contribute when she spends all her time napping. He tries shaking her awake and tells her to get ready. On floor 51, their objective is to defeat the Griffins. Veronica asks if she can take command for a moment. When Bob gives her permission, she simply says, "Operation initiated." Squad members descend the hill and eliminate the target. She clearly has a very strong sense of leadership. As she moves down the hill, she starts firing without hesitation. Her shots strike the Griffins, taking them down one by one. As the creatures fall, Gobang moves in to finish them off. She takes aim and fires again. And just like before, Gobang and John finish off the enemies as they fall. Bob is surprised because the strategy is actually working. Even John admits that the plan worked perfectly, since they would have no way of reaching those creatures if they stayed airborne. At this point, the team is practically complete, with a tank, a melee damage dealer, a ranged damage dealer, a support who provides buffs, and someone dedicated to mining. When they return to the apartment, Commander Veronica immediately heads for the couch and goes straight to sleep. Bob worries about her constantly sleeping, but John tells him to let her rest. Soon afterward, they prepare lunch and even comment on how delicious the food is. Seeing everyone getting along so well makes Bob happy because they seem to be turning into genuine friends. He even looks around for Veronica and calls out to her, telling her to come eat. However, he realizes that she is no longer on the couch. Gobang points underneath the table and tells him that Veronica is down there. Bob can't believe she somehow moved while still asleep. Ray suggests that she must have followed the smell of the food. Holding up a piece of meat, John says he's going to test her reflexes. He slowly brings the delicious, fragrant piece of meat closer to her. The girl simply snatches it with her tongue. Everyone bursts out laughing, and John admits that she is seriously talented. Gobang tries the same thing, and the exact same thing happens. She manages to catch the meat with her tongue again. Rick decides to try it with a piece of carrot, and even points out that carrots are nutritious. Veronica responds by spitting the piece of carrot right at him, making everyone laugh as they tease her for being clever and preferring meat. Meanwhile, the tower in the United Arab Emirates has only 13 days left before it collapses. Bob plans to rush his way up to floor 60 so he can use his ticket and clear the tower for the United Arab Emirates. So the next day, he heads straight to floor 52. He even comments that he feels much more powerful than before. Unfortunately, he had already given his strongest items to the Prince of the United Arab Emirates, leaving him with nothing but this extremely weak club. Following the captain's orders, Veronica announces that she is ready to take command of the operation. However, she soon realizes that her weapon is out of ammunition and opens the compartment to show everyone, admitting that she forgot to load it with mana stones back at the apartment. Bob asks if mana stones are really what powers her weapon, and she confirms that they are because her weapon is magical. Rick then says he can take care of it. He had brought several mana stones with him inside his magical backpack. Veronica is delighted when she sees them and even thanks the supply officer. Rick is completely caught off guard by the gesture. Everyone gathers around to congratulate Rick, calling him their supply officer, which leaves the little hamster extremely embarrassed. And with that, they successfully clear floor 52. They immediately move on to their next mission. And that woman was seriously powerful, guys. She could even use her jump to propel herself through the air. Watching them fight from a distance, Bob says she looks like some kind of cyberpunk sniper. Meanwhile, Rai keeps boosting everyone, making the entire team even stronger. The group begins fighting in perfect synchronization. Gobang notices that the creatures approaching them are much stronger, and tells the blonde to stay behind him. Bob refuses to sit on the sidelines and steps forward, saying that he wants to help too. But at that exact moment, Veronica activates her heavy charge projectile, and fires an insanely powerful shot that completely annihilates a griffin. Even Bob is stunned, admitting that he never expected her to be that strong. She then turns around and tells the young master to stay away from her and remain somewhere safe because friendly fire could be extremely dangerous. And just like that, they managed to secure an S+ rating on floor 52. Their goal was to reach floor 60 as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, back at the Crown Prince's mansion, he was completely distraught, convinced that he had been deceived. The other princes were going to put him on trial because what he had done could be considered treason. If he lost his position as Crown Prince, he would be exiled and could even be executed. At this point, all he could do was put his faith in that player Gobang and hope he could clear the tower past floor 60. The poor guy was sweating bullets in desperation. Then he remembered Gobang promising that he would keep his word and clear the tower within 15 days. All the prince could do now was trust that player and try to maintain a good relationship with him. Meanwhile, our protagonist was busy clearing another floor of the dungeon. Veronica was firing a barrage of shots straight into the air. Bob was worried about what she was doing, but she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. The griffins began plummeting toward the ground at full speed. When Bob looked behind him, he noticed that Rai was casting a spell. She had managed to strip them of their ability to fly, and once they hit the ground, they could turn into ordinary pigeons because they would no longer have their main ability. That gave Gobang the perfect opportunity to take them out one by one. While they were busy defeating the creatures, a massive shadow suddenly appeared. It was the Storm Griffin, the boss of the floor. Bob realized that Veronica had been firing into the air specifically to draw their attention. The Griffin boss suddenly began launching its feathers, and Gobang stepped in front of everyone to protect the team. Taking advantage of the opening, Veronica fired a blazing shot. The bullet struck the Griffin dead on, and sent it crashing into the ground. Once again, the moment the Griffin lost its ability to fly, it transformed into an ordinary pigeon and even started pretending to be one by pecking at the ground. That was the moment I completely lost it, guys, because I was laughing so hard. To finish the creature off, everyone fired at it simultaneously. After clearing the floor, Bob says he's going to check what benefits they received. He was hoping for a summoning enhancement rune so he could increase Rick's level. Instead, he discovered that he had received a skill copy. All his companions immediately started telling him how amazing it was and began listing their abilities so Bob could choose one to copy. The problem was that there was way too much information coming at him all at once. He had no idea which ability he should choose. Gobang, Rai, and John all started pressuring him to make a decision. Rhea suggested copying her bell-related abilities as well as her luck skills. John said he should copy his invisibility ability so he could keep himself safe. Gobang simply told Bob to copy his impenetrable skin ability. That would basically make him immortal. But all of them were talking at the same time, and it was starting to overwhelm him. With everyone shouting suggestions at once, Bob finally felt the pressure getting to him. He yelled that he couldn't take it anymore. That's when he noticed a tiny window hidden off to the side. It belonged to the crazy demon, the old man named Bloody Blade. Just seeing the name was enough to catch the kid's attention because he thought it sounded incredibly cool. Bob raised his hands and told everyone to be quiet. He had already made his choice. John asks which ability Bob decided to copy. Bob tells him it is called Bloody Blade, the ability belonging to that crazy old demon. Nobody can believe it, and they immediately ask why the young master would choose that. Bob simply figured it had to be an incredibly powerful ability, especially since that old man was the strongest summon he had. Now completely excited, Bob can't wait to test the ability as soon as possible. The ability strengthened his body based on his mana level, but I won't go into the details of what it actually does, guys. The next day, our protagonist was searching the internet for stories about himself. There were countless theories about the mysterious player who was clearing floors in record time and earning S+ ratings. Even Naomi said that this player was far more powerful than she was, and that comparing the two of them wouldn't even be fair. After watching the video, the kid gets completely love-struck and starts thinking that maybe he actually has a chance with her. From floor 56 onward, things were supposed to get even harder, and most players already had powerful government assistance. But for our protagonist, none of this was proving particularly difficult. There were only a few days left before the United Arab Emirates Tower collapsed. That's why Bob kept fighting all these dragons as he pushed his way higher and higher. With only a few days remaining, he had already reached floor 59. After spending several days slaughtering creatures, they return to the apartment, and Bob immediately collapses onto the floor, saying that he's completely exhausted. Tomorrow they would finally be taking on floor 60. When he opens his status window, he starts checking out more information about his companions. After clearing a floor and unlocking the next one, they would return to previous floors and farm more diamonds. Rick was angry with Veronica. He had told her to aim exclusively for the creatures' heads. If she kept shooting other parts of their bodies, she would ruin the creatures' hides, so he could forgive her. Veronica responds by starting to exercise. After researching the situation online, Bob begins coming up with a strategy for clearing floor 60. He discovers that many players enter that floor carrying plenty of weapons, armor, and potions. That's because floor 60 requires them to defeat the Poison Lord. It was an extremely powerful dragon capable of summoning smaller dragons that carried poison bombs. Those little dragons existed solely to explode and spray poison everywhere. Since the battle took place inside a narrow stone corridor, there wasn't much room for the players to maneuver. That made it incredibly easy for them to get poisoned by the toxic attacks. When Bob summons the three of them, they immediately appear and salute. But when Gobang and Rai arrive, Bob notices that neither of them has been influenced by Veronica yet. He tells them that today they have to clear the United Arab Emirates Tower. John immediately puts on his glasses and tells Bob that he has already prepared a strategy and would like to present it. A little later, Bob asks whether he really thinks the plan will work, and John confidently says that it will. Still, Bob is starting to lose his mind because this battle against the dragon looks much harder than he expected. John admits that it is difficult, but says that difficult doesn't mean impossible. That's exactly why he came up with this strategy, so none of the three would have to suffer from the dragon's poison. That's why they would have Gobang step on those pools of poison, since he was basically immune to poison. If Rick were poisoned, he would definitely die. That's why he would also need to be kept safe. Holding the ticket ready to use it, Bob says that everyone will use this strategy they had agreed on, and so he tears up the multinational tower ticket. Thus, they are teleported to the United Arab Emirates Tower, and the mission was to defeat the poisonous lord. Veronica had already managed to identify him using her aiming ability, and Gobang used the technique to become even taller. John held onto his right arm and Veronica onto his left arm. In stage 3, Rick was supposed to appear on his head. The little mouse came rolling like a ball, and after jumping, he fitted himself onto Gobang's head. Those were the 4 stages of the summoned beings. They were looking like a Megazord, guys. Next, Gobang placed Rai together with Bob in a safe place so that they would not be poisoned. And so Rai began using her buff spells, making them even more powerful. With her weapon, Veronica began landing several shots, and those smaller dragons were blown up, throwing poison in all directions. Gobang would need to keep spinning around there without directly engaging with the Dragon King, and thus attract even more of his attention. Since he had extremely powerful and resistant skin, he was not affected by the poison. After firing so many shots, Veronica told the supply officer that she needed magic stones, and Rick was already throwing the little stones to reload the weapon. With the weapon loaded, she prepares to fire new shots. John shouts at Gobang, and the big guy ends up throwing the assassin into the air. He goes so fast that he looked like a missile and manages to rip the dragon's head off. Bob keeps laughing, saying that it really was as incredible as he had imagined. And so they managed to defeat floor 60. Bob got an S+ rank and also won platinum insignias. And that left him surprised, because he did not know that he could win these rewards, even while exploring dungeons in other countries. The scene cuts to the court of the United Arab Emirates. They were putting the crown prince on trial for having given that enhancement stone to some random person from Korea, right? At least, that was what they were thinking. They were accusing the prince of treason, the crime of handing over the enhancement rune without an official contract. They ask if the prince admitted his crimes, but with his head lowered, he says that he cannot admit that. The others said that he was far too arrogant and asked how long he was going to keep insisting on his mistake. And the prince says that it was merely a demonstration of his loyalty to the nation, but they slammed their hands down, saying that this was foolish, and even began commenting on why the prince had done this, thinking that he was a traitor. Thanks to everyone who was there, the king had a verdict. The only thing the prince can think about is Gobang, right, who is actually John as we know, saying that he would clear the tower's floor 60 in less than 15 days. And he says this with great confidence, which made the prince truly believe him. He had decided to trust that Korean player. Because of this despicable crime, he would receive a certain sentence. The prince did not even want to hear what the result would be. But then they say that the prince will be exiled from the United Arab Emirates. At that moment, the player who was standing beside the prince let out a scream of surprise. The judges ask how that boy dares to scream in front of everyone. He says that he screamed because, in fact, floor 60 of the Black Tower had been cleared, and on top of that with an S+ rank. The others ask if this was true, and they begin gossiping, saying that the prince was right to have made that bet. The prince laughs and, raising his hands, asks everyone what crime he had actually committed. The news begins spreading throughout the world, and people even started saying that it was probably the Korean player who held the highest record. The newspapers in Korea also began reporting this information. The president of the Awakened Company began being questioned by reporters about whether the record-holding player from Korea had been lent to the United Arab Emirates. However, the president said nothing and simply entered the building very angrily. He ran over to Vice Director Jean, asking if Bob had perhaps worked for them. Jean's assistant told the president to be a little quiet because Jean was on a call with Bob. And after ending the call, he tells the president to relax, because Bob did not go to the United Arab Emirates. He is right here in Korea. They feel a little more relieved, but even so, they cannot understand who cleared floor 60 of the tower there in the United Arab Emirates. Breaking out in a cold sweat, the bald man says that all this worry made him lose 10 years of his life. Jean knew very well that it was Bob who did this clearing, but they did not know how Bob had done it, considering that he is still in Korea. Remember guys that they are afraid that Bob will leave Korea and go to another country. And at the same time, they do not know that Bob has that ticket that allows him to enter towers in any country in the world. So they are there deciding whether they should investigate Bob further or not, especially because they did not want to bother the boy since he was the strongest player in the world at that moment. The girl there keeps telling Jean that they should give the reporters an excuse, since they were there asking so many questions. And she even says that she will go to Bob's apartment with a little excuse, just to see if he is really there. So she used the excuse of going to Bob's apartment to pick up some items. She kept saying that the company now needed these basilisk hides, and that if he could provide a few more, they would be grateful. And Bob is there looking all embarrassed. The girl leaves feeling relieved that Bob is still in Korea. And when he closes the door, our protagonist stays there all nervous, saying that it is very difficult to talk to girls. Now that the agency employee has left, he says that he will continue from where they left off. Bob had earned another bonus and ends up drawing on the board which spreadsheet he saw in the system window. After showing him the drawing, he tells his summons what he could win. Spinning the wheel, Bob drew it exactly the way he had seen it, with the numbers 1 through 8. John insisted that 7 was the lucky number. Go Bang, on the other hand, claimed that real men always pick number 1. Rhea argued that 8 had the highest chance of giving them a good item. Rick was completely confused and had no idea which number he should recommend. As for Veronica, she was fast asleep on the couch, drooling like there was no tomorrow. Bob sat there thinking about whether he should choose number 1, the number for real men, number 7, the lucky number, or number 8, which Rhea trusted based on her intuition. However, he had already made up his mind and pressed number 3, because if he picked one of the numbers his summons had recommended and the reward turned out to be terrible, they would never let him hear the end of it. The wheel began spinning and the numbers started lighting up across the system panel. A line began tracing its way across the screen. It eventually formed a maze. John was practically bouncing with excitement as he asked, "What do you think we're going to get?" The line started moving left and everyone began yelling at it to go right so they could land on a better item. Then, just like that, they landed on a rank enhancement rune. That was exactly what the protagonist had been hoping for. Everyone immediately wanted to know what they had won. And the moment Bob announced it, all of them started jumping for joy. As soon as Veronica heard the words enhancement rune, she instantly woke up and asked if it was going to be used on her. But Rick was first on the list since he had been summoned before Veronica, and Bob was a fair man. The little hamster was thrilled because he was about to rank up. With a huge smile on his face, Bob said he couldn't wait to see what new abilities Rick would gain. Before that could happen though, they had to clear Korea's tower floor, and the little guy agreed. So they headed over to fight the poison dragon again, except this time they were clearing the Korean tower instead of the one in the United Arab Emirates. They reused the exact same formation as before, basically recreating their Exodia setup. Bob wondered whether he could earn another S++ rank in the same badges, since he had already received them from the other tower, but their strategy had worked perfectly the day before. With barely any trouble, they took down the poison dragon, with John delivering the final blow. He sliced the creature's head clean off. Bob nervously waited to see whether he would receive the badges again. And sure enough, it worked. He earned another S++ rank and received all the rewards. That completely surprised him, and now he had permission to move on to floor 61. Everyone returned to the apartment, and Bob immediately handed the enhancement rune over to Rick so the little guy could rank up. While Rick spent some time undergoing his evolution, everyone agreed to take a vacation and promised they wouldn't explore the dungeon without him. With tears in his eyes, the little hamster said goodbye to his young master and begged him not to buy that servant robot. He was talking about the robotic vacuum cleaner, of course. Bob figured Rick would need around 4 days before he could return, so everyone decided to spend those 4 days relaxing. The next day, the protagonist was eating French fries while thinking about strategies for continuing their climb. Then a news report caught his attention. The Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates wanted to visit Korea personally to thank the player who had helped him. When the reporter asked for the player's name, the prince accidentally let it slip that his name was Gobang. That immediately sent the Korean internet into a frenzy of theories. Bob couldn't figure out why John had told the prince that his name was Gobang. When he looked over at the assassin, Bob figured he had probably used that name as a disguise. Checking the system window, Bob noticed that Rick still wasn't available for summoning. That meant his enhancement blessing was still in progress, and once he returned, he would become an SSR, a super rare special unit. 2 days had already passed, and they were still enjoying their vacation, spending their time in the massive mansion playing video games. On the 3rd day, Bob was out sunbathing with Gobang, and by the 4th day, he was completely sick of relaxing and complained that he was bored. He had never realized that being rich without having to work or study could be this painfully boring. "Come on, kid, let's switch lives then." At that moment, his status window suddenly opened. Bob let out a huge shout and announced to everyone that Rick could finally be summoned. Veronica immediately stood up and announced that she was ready to receive the supply officer. They had even prepared an entire feast for Rick. Bob extended his hands and announced that it was time to summon him. A bright light appeared, and Rick emerged wearing a new outfit while still looking exactly the same. But now he was much faster. And since the house had become a complete mess while he was gone, he immediately started cleaning everything. John declared that the entire house was sparkling again, while Rai said he truly was the ultimate servant. Bob, however, told him to stop cleaning and come enjoy the feast with everyone else. The little hamster immediately rushed over and started eating, happily declaring that the food was delicious. Everyone thought he was absolutely adorable. Ree even got the urge to squeeze him, but Rick didn't give himself any time to rest before jumping up and announcing that he was going to save the remaining food so they could eat it inside the dungeon. All the food immediately began floating through the air before disappearing directly into his backpack. Bob stared in disbelief and asked when Rick had learned to do that. "Wait a second, Rick, since when can you do this?" Rick explained that he had gained the ability when he ranked up, proudly announcing that he was now a super rare special unit. Thinking about what that ability could do, Bob immediately realized how useful it was. Bringing items out of the tower was normal, but getting things from our world into the tower was extremely difficult. That kind of ability was incredibly rare. "So Rick, are you saying you can now take things from Earth and bring them inside the towers?" The little hamster nodded and confirmed that it was possible. With that, they decided to have a picnic inside the tower. Rick immediately dropped his backpack, and a table, several chairs, and all the food they had brought came spilling out. Bob asked whether a house could fit inside, but Rick explained that it was simply too large. Still, this was more than enough since they could now enjoy a proper meal inside the tower. And honestly, that was pretty awesome. Rick asks if a dragon is going to show up for them to fight, but Bob tells him no because they are not hunting today. Instead, Rick suggests doing some mining so they can gather more ore, but Bob tells him he does not need to work today. Today is supposed to be special, so they are just going to relax and enjoy themselves. But Rick looks completely heartbroken because he actually wants to work, and the poor little mouse even starts crying. Meanwhile, Gobang is busy stuffing his face with all the food. John, on the other hand, is having fun feeding donuts to Veronica. A little later, Bob says he wants to take a picture of everyone together. The taller ones are supposed to stand in the back while the shorter ones take the front. But just as everyone gets into position, Bob realizes that the little mouse is missing. John even gets worried, saying that Rick was right there just a moment ago. Veronica wakes up and announces that it is time to begin the search operation, but then they hear a noise. It turns out to be Rick, rolling back at full speed. He comes rushing back, and Bob immediately tells him that everyone was worried and asks where he went. Rick apologizes and explains that he had to run off because he caught a really strong smell. John starts teasing him, saying that Rai must have farted, and of course the girl gets furious. However, Rick reveals that he managed to find 3 items: a piece of paper, an ancient rune, and some kind of petrified skeleton. Everyone is shocked, except for John, who immediately points out that the thing is definitely a human bone. The strange part is that these towers only appeared on Earth about 20 years ago, yet this bone looks more than 100 years old because it is so heavily worn down. One theory is that the Black Towers were not actually created on Earth and may have originated somewhere in a parallel world. According to the information they had learned earlier, even if multiple players entered the same floor of a tower at the same time, they would never encounter one another. But now that Bob had discovered traces left behind by another player from another world, it meant the floors were not actually endless. Rie asks, "What exactly is this?" because it looks like there is something attached to the bone. When Bob removes it, he discovers that it is a ring, along with a piece of yellow paper and the rune fragment Rick brought back. Bob analyzes them and discovers that the rune is one of 7 fragments, meaning there are 6 more pieces out there. The paper is also divided into 5 pieces, and he only has 1 of them. Bob is completely blown away, realizing that Rick has discovered something incredible, while the little mouse gets embarrassed from all the praise. Everyone starts tossing Rick into the air as they celebrate his discovery. But then a dragon suddenly appears and kidnaps the poor little mouse. The entire group immediately charges off in anger to rescue their beloved friend. When they return to the apartment, Rick is sitting there with 2 bandages on him. The first upgrade Rick received was an improvement to his subspace backpack, which could now carry multiple items into the tower. Normally, bringing things into a tower was possible, but people were limited to smaller items like clothes, weapons, and cameras. But Rick is different now, Bob explains, because he can carry all kinds of things inside. The second upgrade is item detection. Before, Rick could only locate things like rocks, weapons, and certain tower tickets, but his detection ability has improved dramatically. That is how he managed to find the ring hidden inside the skeleton and identify it as a teleportation ring. John takes advantage of everyone being distracted and sneaks off to eat the last snack. Unfortunately for him, someone suddenly appears behind him in a furious mood, and it is our protagonist because John just ate his favorite snack. John nearly jumps out of his skin and asks how the young master managed to get there so quickly. The answer is the teleportation ring. John starts freaking out, thinking Bob might be a ghost. Bob just laughs and says that the teleportation ability is incredibly cool. The only catch is that the teleportation range is limited to about 3 meters, so he needs to keep that in mind. Now he wants to investigate the other items they discovered, including the rune fragment and the ticket. Bob writes everything down on the board and begins explaining everything they have learned so far about the different types of runes and tickets. Based on the notification showing that these items are divided into multiple fragments, he wonders whether they could find all the remaining pieces and combine them. That means runes and tickets, which could previously only be obtained through extremely rare chances or special advantages, might now be obtainable through Rick. With that in mind, Bob decides that everyone will enter another floor and search for the remaining fragments. They head to floor 59, and Rick immediately takes off running because he has detected something. The others excitedly chase after him. Rick grins as he pulls out his pickaxe, swings it into the rocks with all his strength, and uncovers another rune fragment. Completely thrilled, he holds the fragment up and proudly shows the young master what he found. Bob now has 2 fragments. And that brings us to the end of part 3 of the Badass Summoner, guys. And that is going to be the keyword for this video, Badass Summoner. If you leave that comment at the end of the video, I will know you are a real subscriber who actually watched all the way through. This series is getting really interesting, guys, but the videos are still getting very few views, so it is really important that you watch until the end and leave a like and a comment. As soon as more chapters come out, I will bring you the continuation, but we need to hit our goal of 350 comments first. I am setting the goal pretty high to see if we can get the video's views up. And if you want to support Rico Manhwa even more, you can become a member. It is really cheap, and members get access to exclusive videos. I will also leave 2 recommended videos here on the end screen for you to check out, so I will see you over there. That is pretty much it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time.